Hey everyone. Welcome back for the second part of Ink Heart. As always, huge thanks to all of my Patreons. Making these videos would be impossible without you guys' support, especially with all the restrictions YouTube places on my type of content. As always, the full story is already out over there for you guys along with about 50 other different stories you can enjoy. Also, feel free to send me any messages over there if you have any questions or even if you just want to chat. Link to all of that will be in the description. Anyways, everyone, enjoy the video. Chapter 4. Konohagakure. In an alley beside the hospital. 2 hours past midnight. Naruto landed on the edge of a 2-story building as silent as a spider would and crouched down, staring into the darkness cast by the same building he was on with his goggles glowing a faint orange. He heard a pained grunt and as his eyes cut through the darkness he found Yugao's Onbu, but at the same time not on Onbu duty rather on regular Jounin duty, boyfriend Genma clutching his injured ribs with his left hand while he used his right hand to parry away a kunai strike that would have taken off his head. He grit his teeth against the pain and rolled backwards when the person swung his leg at him. The attacker, a bandage-wrapped man with a Suna forehead protector, spun his kunai by the ring and just before Genma could right himself he threw the kunai with deadly accuracy. Naruto cocked his head to the side and leveled his launchers with the thrown projectile, mentally calculating the speed, weight, wind change, height from the ground and various other variables before he shot a 2-inch-long senbon to the flying weapon, going through the air in dramatic slow motion and he shot out another senbon a little bit under the first. The first senbon clanged against the kunai's pointed tip and forced it downward, sticking it into the ground diagonally, while the second needle jammed through the ring on its handle and nailed itself into the ground. Baki cursed at his luck and looked up at where the thrower of the senbon was located. He spied Naruto, now just sitting on the edge of the building, and ran up the wall to engage him. Time ran to a crawl as Naruto made use of the eyes on his forehead to mentally calculate various variables concerning the Suna Jounin before he fired a single senbon that whistled lightly through the air and jammed into the San Jounin's shoulder with much more force than it was supposed to. This fact threw off the man's concentration and his legs slipped off the wall, making him fall off. Naruto though had fired 2 more combat medical needles and a net spread out under Baki that caught him, sticking him to place. Naruto leapt off the building and dropped lightly on the net. His steps were light and fast as he sharply walked to the Suna ninja on the same net that prevented the captured man from moving. He raised an amused eyebrow when Baki struggled against the net, then he whipped out a senbon that oozed with a mysterious blue liquid and threw it before Baki could make use of a seal-less jutsu. The needle flew through the air and sliced right past Baki, passing through the holes on the net and nailing Genma's chest. When the man began his struggle to his feet, he was pushed off his feet and summarily knocked out. A slow smirk spread on Naruto's face as he bent down on his knees to look at Baki. He shook his head in exasperation and jammed a syringe filled with a golden substance into Baki's neck, freezing his whole body. I'm going to ask this only once, Suna Shinobi, why did you attack my colleague? At his stubborn hesitation Naruto jammed another syringe, next to the syringe that was still on Baki's neck, this time filled with a thin, white substance. It's no use fighting that one, I made it myself, the same drug Konoha used to fight the fear of heights, but my version. He poked the woozy man's forehead and he was out like a light, before he tapped the man's cheek and his eyes opened again, glazed white over his black pupils, more or less hypnotizes you. Now, answer my question. I was meeting an informant from Sound, he walked in on us, he was a threat to our plans, Baki said slowly. Oh, the invasion, Naruto stated quietly and Baki slowly nodded, his eyes wide with shock. I have a friend in Sound that keeps me informed, don't worry, I'm with you guys. He pulled out both syringes from his neck and after a sharp slap across the older man's face he was snapped out of his hypnotized daze. He stood up and pulled a single thread on the net he was on and it was immediately sucked back into his sliver launchers. You're with us? Baki said skeptically. If I wasn't I would have taken you to the Hokage by now, the boy responded as he dropped down beside his knocked out comrade. If you're one of us, kill him. I don't have to prove anything to you, Suna Shinobi. If you think you can attack me, go ahead. I'll kill you and you know I can do that, he said as he pulled out the senbon lodged into Genma's chest and began attending to his broken ribs. Now leave before he wakes up. This isn't over, Baki growled quietly and frowned when Naruto snorted, still not looking at him. Aha, sure it isn't. He used his teeth to pull off a cover over a syringe and gently slid it into the knocked out man's neck, injecting the contents of the needle into the man. Baki clenched his fist but disappeared in a sand sunshine, just as Genma's eyes fluttered open. What happened? He asked as his eyes locked on Naruto's goggle-protected own. You slipped off that building, he pointed to the one he was formerly crouched on, you should be more careful. He pulled out his needle and helped the older man up. That doesn't sound right. Oh, 1 month later. Kanahagakur. Hokage's office. Sarutobi looked at the gathered jounin and special jounin that now filled his office with grim eyes as he sat on his desk. There is troubling news. Jiraiya spy network have reported that there is about to be a full-scale invasion on our village by sound and sand. The few jounin present furrowed their eyebrows questionably. We don't know when, but we can only assume it's going to happen during or after today's tournament. Kakashi looked up from his porn novel, leaning on the wall to the far left and next to Might Guy. Did he say how the invasion would start? Sadly no, but that should make us more careful. He began handing out mission specs to each jounin in the room, but we have noticed small encampments of sound and sand shinobi just outside of Konoha's borders. Our primary focus now is keeping them away and neutralizing those already inside our village. We don't want them to know we're onto them. Yugao nodded and said, you want them to think they still have the element of surprise. Exactly. Now, the one-tails Jinchuriki will probably be their trump card, so a seal master should be placed to contain him if he begins his rampage. He waved his hand to the large window Naruto and Yugao were sitting on, and Jiraiya leapt in with his arms crossed. His face showed that he was all business. Jiraiya can do that, and when he is done he will join those defending the wall, led by Nara Shikaku, Akimichi Kuza, Uzuki Yugao, and Uzumaki Naruto. Here the old man glared lightly at Naruto. Use your summons if there are too many. Naruto sent a silent two-fingered salute as his eyes skimmed his mission specs. Anko chuckled a little under her breath and the boy shook his head in exasperation. There will, of course, be casualties, so I have taken the liberty of bringing in someone we can depend on to handle that. He waved to the door and all turned as the door opened. In walked Tsunade Senju. Shizune Kato opted to stay outside with the female secretary. The woman looked around the room silently, with her own arms crossed, until her eyes fell on Naruto. The boy wasn't even looking at her. He was still busy sifting through his bulky mission specs while idly twirling a senbon. The senju looked back at her sensei and the man continued, amid the shocked murmurs some of his jounin were making. She will be in charge of the medic ninja unit as well as provide support for those within the walls. The blonde woman nodded. All leave from duty has been cancelled and those that were on long-term missions have been called back. Konoha's protection is most important. I have a question, a voice said from the window. The gathered jounin, as well as Jiraiya and Tsunade, looked at the source, and Naruto continued after the Sandaime's prompting nod. Are we to kill the current Kazekage's children? His shoulder was leaned to the side and his thick mission specs was propped on his chest. If they decide to attack, of course. Even though that is not part of your mission parameter, no, you do not kill them, make sure they stay alive. The jounin nodded. Anbu will provide support for those fighting inside, and the Inuzuka, Aburame and Hyuga clan members will provide border support. Like I said, Shikaku, Kuza, Yugao and Naruto are in charge. Hi, Hokage-sama, they said. The ominous fact that Tsunade had been called back from her traveling retirement loomed over everyone present. Your priority is to protect the civilians, so if you have to kill each and every invader to do so, then go ahead. The man slowly looked over his gathered jounin. Do we know who the leader of sound is? Naruto asked again, but this time it was Jiraiya that answered. No, the man shook his head. Leadership in that village is still a mystery. Freaking perfect, the blonde boy said as he chuckled shortly. Most looked at him questionably and he said, we need to cut the leader down if we want to subdue them. We can assume that the Kazekage will be leading in the sound leader's stead, Jiraiya sharply replied, unless this leader from Hidden Sound would show up during the invasion. Besides that, Sarutobi continued as he propped his elbows on his desk, if on the occasion I am killed, I have already discussed with Tsunade that she will be the god I'm. The woman begrudgingly agreed to what he said. I want our response to be a statement to anyone else that would want to invade Konoha in the future. Our village will forever be strong. He stood up and most of the jounin snapped to attention, dismissed. What was written in every mission specs was that the jounin were to stay in the arena with some Chunin and some Chunin shadow clones posing as the Chunin posted to the walls. This was to protect the competitors and the civilian populace. The ninja began to leave the office, and as per norm Naruto and Yugao waited for the flood of top-class shinobi to reduce before they stood up, and began walking to the door. Tsunade, who stood aside for the jounin to walk past, closed the door after them to talk with her sensei and her spy master teammate. The Toad Sage stepped off the window and stood in front of his Hokage as well. The woman spoke up first. Something's up with that kid. The old man agreed. Naruto has always been knowledgeable of a number of things, far more than he makes us aware of. Then why was he in this meeting? She asked. Because he is still a valuable asset to this village. He threw Naruto's file to his female student. It had all they knew about Naruto. He was a spider summoner, a scientist, a genius, a detective, an exceptional spy and an adaptive fighter. All the missions he had gone on, 57A rank, 10 B rank and 1 C rank were completed with distinction. The clients even gave positive reviews on his performance. The high-ranked missions overshadow the lower-ranked ones because he mostly performed missing ninja capture, special artifact recovery, total ninja encampment wipeout, highly dangerous thefts as well as covering his tracks, murder and framing someone else and other missions. The B ranks were mostly just important messages to other villages and escorting the fire daimyo and his daughter, along with the guardians, to wherever they were going. The C rank was when he helped out in the hospital by finding a rare herb that grew primarily in Hidden Chill. Yu Gao had added in her own opinions to the file that Naruto never wasted any movement and never delayed in making a crucial decision, shooting Senbone with killer precision and making use of his outstanding taijutsu form to take down people much larger than him. It listed all the jutsu they knew the boy was able to use, and they consisted of mostly A and B rank, some that revolved around his summons and others that could be found in the A rank section of the library, nothing they didn't know but things they didn't expect a 13-and-a-half-year-old boy to be able to perform. The file speculated that he was able to use a high amount of his Kyuubi chakra, but so far they hadn't seen him do it. It also speculated that his sensory ability was much higher than an average sensor's own, as seen when he was able to tell who from who without looking during a mission to Swamp Country. Tsunade whistled, impressed. He sure has some moves. She turned to the last page and it showed some of the pictures taken by a Hyuga hunter ninja that accompanied Naruto on a mission. Naruto had smashed his foot, the sole protected by a thick material, against a man's face in a perfect display of a flying kick. The bigger man's arms and legs were tied together by glistening ninja wire, and the next picture showed the spray of blood from his mouth as he fell. Another showed the blonde spider summoner dropping onto an unsuspecting party that comprised of a popular drug dealer and his security entourage. The boy was not clearly seen in the shadows, but they could notice the faint orange glow his goggles made. The mission report by the hunter ninja said he had silently dropped down in the middle of the entourage, behind the drug dealer, and with 6 quick movements shot down the security team with some thrown kunai, knocked the man out and took him back to Konoha on his shoulder. For all intent and purposes, the file described Naruto as a model shinobi. The last thing on the file talked about the suspicion that Naruto was connected to Kitsugami Drug Company, citing that the logo was a spider skeleton with 9 legs, but that was as far as they could go. They couldn't bring Naruto in for questioning since he was an expert liar, and the logo might also be a coincidence, merely a Kyuubi fan as well as a spider fan. Yu Gao and Naruto weren't aware of this addition. The Hokage gently lit his pipe and blew out some smoke from his nose. I am certain that he has something in mind on how to take down anyone he goes up against, even someone he hasn't met before. I'll keep an eye on him, Tsunade said as she snapped Naruto's file closed. Good, keep me posted. His loyal students nodded and left his office. Meanwhile, with Naruto, the boy had marched to the west gate, his post until the invasion began, and when his senses told him that no one else was present, he flipped through a small chain of hand seals, summoning jutsu. A poof of smoke on his hand later, and a pitch-black spider with the number 3 on his bulbous behind was in his hand. Naruto-sama, the small spider greeted in a deep, gravelly voice. I want you to go to the snake summoning realm and tell them that Konoha is onto their summoner. They should relay the message to her. At once, Naruto-sama, the spider said as it disappeared in another puff of smoke. The spider summons were the only summons that the snakes had officially allowed contact with on their summoning realm. At the moment there were both snakes and spiders on both realms, something most believed could never be possible. Some Chunin then slipped into the room, making sure to salute Naruto, and took posts outside the door. He turned to the now assembled Hyuga, Inuzuka and Aburame that had been posted to his side of Konoha's wall that looked at him expectantly. Standing outside the sentry post Naruto was seated in. He looked over them and spoke. I want every Aburame to focus on staying back and providing back support, advisably with their Kakaichu. Hyuga are our frontline fighters, you face them head on, and Inuzuka come in from the sides as support. I want the invaders contained to the very last one. I can make traps very quickly, so don't worry about going against too many people. They nodded, aware that Naruto was pretty much a trap master. The Sandaime orders that you kill if you don't have an option, so no holding back or underestimating anyone. A vital part of being a jounin wasn't to lead, but rather to be the cool head that makes crucial decisions. He merely passed his decision to his subordinates. Hi, Naruto-senpai. 3 hours later, and his goggles shone a faint red and an explosion was felt from the Chunin exams arena. There was a war cry from deep in the forest, and Naruto got up from his reclined position in the sentry post. The clan members around the box stood up abruptly. Look alive, he placed on his headpiece and leapt out of the box, and ran in. Don't forget the plan. The Hyuga charged in behind him, and the Inuzuka fanned out to the sides while the Aburame remained at the back, ready to throw clan jutsu as support. 2 long senbone clicked into place on Naruto's launchers, drawing thin lines on the ground as he ran to the invaders. The sound and sand shinobi ran back to him, and the boy leapt over the first wave and began slashing at the shinobi behind them, stabbing and hacking anyone that stood in front of him. As a large, lumbering ninja came at him, he whipped out a senbone from a pouch at his back and stabbed it into the man's leg, flowing around him and smoothly cutting behind his knees. As the man fell down, Kakachu descended down on him and ate him to the bone. The invaders began to taper out, and Naruto abruptly stopped, reaching out with his senses before he silently motioned to his right to the Inuzuka there. The shinobi burst from the forest and they flooded to the dog clan members. The Aburame at the back yelled out as one a clan jutsu, and Kakachu shaped as fists rained down on them. Just then there were numerous massive plumes of chakra smoke in the forest, and finally silence. The invaders were cut down to the last one, and the Konoha ninja waited for the new threat. It was silent. Foreboding settled in the Hyugas as they looked ahead with their Byakugan blazing. That was when a generic-looking pale-eyed clan member jumped back quickly, away from the lightning-fast bite a snake summons had sent from seemingly out of nowhere. Naruto yelled, "Hyuga, fall back!" The ninja diligently leapt back, and Naruto commanded the bug-using clan to charge. The Inuzuka were to stay where they were to cut down any more human invader when they came. The boy rolled aside from a lightning-fast bite and jammed an explosive tag through the snake's head, flipping away numerous times to dodge the explosion. He shot out his right pincer senbone and it lodged under Snake's chin. He swung onto its head and quickly dislodged his needle before he placed another explosive tag on the snake's head, making sure to leap onto another snake as it exploded. He continued leaping from one snake to another, blowing up their heads, until he realized that the summons were getting too many. The Aburame, still yet to suffer any casualty, were being pushed back. "Inuzuka, come from the sides, stay sharp," he said into his headpiece, and his command was diligently obeyed. "Hyuga, support from behind them." "But that will leave the gate open," a person responded. "I know what I'm doing," Naruto grunted as he spun away from a snake that had lunged at him. He spun in the air quickly, and wind-fused shuriken flew out of the mini tornado that covered him, peppering the snakes around him, slicing through the hordes around him. "Hi, senpai," the person replied. The Hyuga began throwing gale palms, wind palm vacuums, and made use of protection of the revolving heavens over the dog clan as defense, while the Inuzuka threw drilling fangs and fang over fangs as attacks while they were already in their man-beast clone technique. He then ordered the Aburame to fan out as he flipped through some hand seals, summoning jutsu, venomous clay spiders. He slapped his palm on the ground and a complex summoning seal matrix spread around him. Then out of the ground in front of the gate, giant brown spider summons erupted and immediately leapt at the snakes, sinking their teeth in them, some being broken with sharp slaps from their tails. They began flooding out of the ground and overwhelming the giant snake summons. This released pressure off the human fighters and Naruto, watching as the corroding venom in the summons destroyed the afflicted snakes. The brown spiders ate through the snakes to the last one before Naruto allowed them to leave, their bellies full. Naruto sighed in relief and rubbed his eyes. "Any casualties?" The line crackled silently. The three clans looked at their young captain with much more respect, as the leaders of the respective clans reported back. 3 injured Aburame, 4 Inuzuka and 1 Hyuga. "Nothing life-threatening, senpai," a female Aburame reported. "Good, can you see any more invaders coming?" "No one for miles ahead of us, senpai," a male Hyuga clan member reported. "Great, check around for any survivors and contain them. Let's clean up this mess." He used his toes to idly kick an arm that was very much far away from the owner's body, walking back to the sentry box. They might have known Naruto, being the QB container, but they were also knew of his short rise into the Jounin rank as well as his skills. It was very easy to look past his age and refer to him as their senpai. The assembled members, who were around him, saluted and began performing what he had commanded. He reclined in a chair there and set a radio on his lap, making sure to plug in his headset. Sector 11 reporting. "All invaders have been dealt with, awaiting orders." He listened in for the response patiently for 2 minutes. "Control tower here, Sector 11, are you certain all invaders have been neutralized?" 99.9% sure, Control tower, Naruto reported back. Sector 11, you are to send support to Sector 7, the west gate where Kuza Akimichi was leading the defense. This was because the bulk of the invaders were there since Hidden Sound was in that general location. Understood. He waved for their attention and sent over half of each clan member present. Before he spoke into the radio, "Control tower, how is the fight in Sector 1? The Chunin exam arena." "Sector 11, the one tails holder has been contained by Jiraiya-sama." "And the Hokage?" "Stand by." There was a long pause before a response came. "The Hokage has been poisoned, they're fleeing." Naruto stifled his relieved sigh. "Should I give chase?" He might have been very young for his age, but he was very good at catching up and capturing people. No, maintain your position, Sector 11, the Hokage's life is our priority now. Understood. Hiruzen Sarutobi didn't survive the fatal poison Orochimaru had given him. His burial was a solemn affair, but immediately after Tsunade Senju had been handed the mantle of Hokage. The first thing she did was begin her investigation on who had been supplying the hospital with illegal, hard-to-get drugs. The Yellow Flower Restaurant. Kanahagakur. A week after the failed invasion. Light violins played through hidden speakers as Kitsugami Gumo sat down on at his table and smoothed over his purple pin-striped suit with his hands. Behind him Aoki stood at the ready to draw her weapon. Her eyes roved over everyone in the restaurant suspiciously. The teenage swordswoman was wearing pure white face paint with her lips painted in a small pouty red circle, and her eyelids were hooded with red, cat-like paint that drew the corner of her eyes close to her ear stylishly. The girl's boss still had his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his whole face. He set his hands on his lap and looked around curiously for the new crime lord he had been scheduled to meet with, and he hated tardiness. A waitress walked up to his table and began pouring water he had initially ordered into a glass cup. He noticed her hands were shaking. He looked at her curiously, and when she was about to leave he grabbed her arm sharply and she froze. She slowly turned back to him and he saw what he was looking for in her eyes, undiluted fear. He gently motioned for her to come to him and he slipped a finger-sized square of paper filled with exactly 5,000 ryu into her hand, closing it before she could reject his money since she knew what was inside. Beneath his hat he smiled at her. She caught the faint outline of it and he whispered to her. "Why don't you take a break, sweetheart, you look tired." He patted her closed fist gently and she gratefully bowed low to him, and ran off. Kitsugami looked over his shoulder to his feminine war paint-wearing bodyguard and they both shared a knowing look. They had been, coincidentally, given a table at the very center of the restaurant, and there just so happened to be well-built men and women that wined and dined on the tables around him. He caught some send him quick looks from the corner of his eyes. The major drug producer nodded imperceptivity and Aoki rolled her neck. The mysterious man slowly stood up and all the noise in the restaurant fell, silent as a graveyard. He stood up straight and waved for the bartender, who was also shaking like a leaf, to leave as well. The old man too bowed deeply to him in appreciation, this time doing so 4 times before he ran out of the restaurant. No one barred his way. Kitsugami cleared his throat and said, "Before we begin," all the people paid attention to what he was about to say. A slow, twisted smirk spread on the speaker's face under his hat. He looked around. "Is there anyone that would like to leave?" The music was smooth and calm. The people then realized that he was already onto them and they stood up, pulling out various weapons from under their tables. Some even threw off their formal clothes in favor of wearing standard Konoha shinobi uniform. The door to the restaurant was slammed shut and 2 burly Inuzuka stood guard there, under disguise as bouncers. The armed Konoha shinobi began getting into ready positions around Kitsugami. "Fine then. Let's begin." Kitsugami gently took off his quality-tailored suit to show he had on a long-sleeved black shirt with purple suspenders connected to his pants. Dropping his suit coat onto his chair, the music blasting from the hidden speakers began to increase tempo. Aoki half pulled out her katana and got into a ready stance as well, her back to her boss and his back to her. It was obvious Kitsugami wouldn't come in without a fight, so the jounin didn't bother stating for him to stand down. Kitsugami got into a fighting stance most would say was meant for street fighters, making sure to roll up his sleeves neatly and clenched his gloved hands tightly. His feet were clad in comfortable boots, shinobi boots, so he didn't need to worry about moving around swiftly. His right hand motioned for the shinobi to come at him. "Well, what are you waiting for? Come on." And the all-out fight began as the classical violin and piano music started a hectic and rushed rendition, typical for most fight scenes. 2 shinobi first rushed to the hat-wearing man and he flowed under them smoothly, grabbed the shirt of the man passing his right and threw him into the man passing his left, quickly sidestepping a grab for his shoulder, and with a snap kick he nailed the person's ear, careening the victim across the restaurant. He leapt over a sword stroke and dropped down on the weapon, breaking it in half, but before his feet could full touch the ground he smashed his foot on the user's chest, throwing him into 2 more attackers and destabilizing them. His arms reached to his left and grabbed a tanto from coming down at him. The woman that had used the weapon stared at him with shocked wide eyes before he pulled the weapon out of her grasp and stabbed it into her side, shoving her into some Konoha ninja. Aoki clanged her sword to hold off 3 katana blades, gritting her teeth under the combined weight before she snapped her right leg to the right and nailed a man that had wanted to ambush her on his forehead, leaving a visible imprint. Her raised leg then stepped on her dropped sheath and she quickly caught it with her right hand, having to release it from her katana and duck under their swings. She grabbed her sheath from the air and smashed it against a sword-wielding man's cheek, spinning on her heel and smashing it against another person's cheek, audibly shattering their cheekbones. The people began looking at her wearily, surrounding her and raised their swords at the ready. She merely smirked and bent down in an advanced defensive stance Baifun had taught her katana held in a reverse grip to her side and her sheath over her chest. An invisible switch was flipped and they charged. Kitsugami raised his forearm to block a tanto, shocking the person that it spark a little, before the mysterious man spun on his heels and used his heel to bring the sword wielder down with a painful thwack against his shoulder. He flexed his fingers and smashed the ground as a shinobi attempted to pull his legs into the ground. The next person that came at him yelled a battle cry and brought a war hammer down on him. Kitsugami flowed away from the lethal blow and flipped over the heavy weapon, away from a sickle slice from another person. He used his left hand to hold the heavy war hammer and snap-kicked the person across his face, following this up by hefting the weapon above his head and bringing it down on the sickle wielder's shoulder, breaking it. He threw his new weapon to a cluster of Konoha ninjas, skeptical that they were still able to overwhelm Kitsugami. That was until a hat-wearing Jounin reached forward and grabbed the head of the hammer safely in his hand. He dropped the heavy weapon and it thudded on the ground. The person walked forward and threw off his hat, revealing that he was Hatake Kakashi. "I was wondering when you'd come out. I was testing out the waters." Kakashi shrugged as he took off the formal suit, showing all he had his Jounin uniform underneath. The copy ninja cocked his head to his hat-wearing opponent. "By any chance will me showing up convince you to give up? My guys were giving you a tough time." Kitsugami laughed. "These guys? Nah, I didn't even break a sweat." He bounced on the balls of his feet and motioned for Kakashi to come at him. "Now show me what you've got, copy ninja." "Your funeral," the masked shinobi mumbled as he ran to the confident Kitsugami. The A-rank Rouge Samurai blazed under a female shinobi and sliced the back of her head, lopping her head off cleanly. She didn't stop there. She jabbed her sheath at a male katana user and followed up with a spinning kick to his face. He crumbled to the ground bonelessly. The woman blew away some hair that blocked her right eye and her eyes settled on a purple-haired katana user that had commanded the other katana users to stop. Yu Gao walked forward, her katana pointing downwards and her sheath held in a reverse grip. The woman looked at the dead, dying and severely injured shinobi around the war paint-wearing samurai, shinobi that were under her and Kakashi's joint command, and she glared at the other katana user. "You will not leave this building alive," Yu Gao said lowly. "If I die it would be an honorable death in the service of my master," Aoki replied as she put her katana-holding fist to her chest and went back into her former stance. "Your master will be tried and probably executed. Your life would have been a waste." Ever so slowly Yu Gao got into her favored kenjutsu stance and so did Aoki. "We'll see," and they clashed swords against each other. Sparks flew as lethal steel met lethal steel. Kakashi easily parried a jab to his stomach with his forearm protector and went for a palm strike to his opponent's chest, but the man slapped his attack away, unexpectedly throwing the copy ninja back to the memory of Naruto slapping his hand away from his goggles during the boy's re-evaluation. The fight went on with both fighters being on equal level until he caught a hole in Kitsugami's stance. He swung his arm and smashed it against the drug dealer's chest, throwing him across the restaurant and into a wall. He heard a faint hissing and his eye widened in alarm as he saw explosive tags multiplying and creeping up his arm. He seamlessly switched with a shadow clone and the clone bolted to the door. The guards parted way immediately and just as the clone leapt into the sky it exploded. The masked man sighed in relief and looked at his opponent but didn't find him. When he looked at the exit he saw the Inuzuka lying on the ground with their heads caved in. He cursed and turned to Yu Gao's fight with her own opponent. The Onbu captain slipped past Aoki's sideways swing and jabbed her katana through her stomach. The samurai immediately burst into chakra smoke. "Shit, after them," Yu Gao yelled, and the remaining living ninja, severely cut down in number and strength, surged out of the restaurant and after the two. With the two runaway underworld dealers, Naruto was busy trying to ignore Aoki's tittering laughs. "I told you so." "Yeah, whatever." She relished in his sour mood, as well as the fact that he had admitted he was wrong. Oh sweet Kami, that felt good. "Don't get used to it," Naruto grunted as the two powered through the empty streets of Konoha. He could sense the ninja running behind him but it was too late to sense the wind jutsu Kakashi had used. Wind release, wind vacuums. From his mouth he blew out sharp spike of wind at the mysterious drug dealer's unprotected back and they were summarily dodged but a stray gust blew his wide-brimmed hat off. His blonde hair reflected in the moonlight and Yu Gao stumbled, Kakashi too, and Naruto stopped running. He turned to the crowd of ninja and clenched his fist. Aoki pulled his hand hurriedly and encouraged him to keep running. He did so and the stunned gathering of shinobi watched on, until a nameless chunin continued giving chase. This snapped the others out of their surprise daze and they continued chasing the revealed Kitsugami Gumo, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto shouldered through the door and quickly switched into his lab, Aoki following through immediately after him, and the Uzumaki summoned hundreds of clones to seal up every single thing in the lab. He wasn't worried about the things he had in his apartment since he mostly slept and cooked in his lab, Aoki as well. An alarm on the lab began blaring as an entire wall of his apartment was destroyed. Kakashi sniffed around, his lone eye steeled in determination to bring back the once promising Tokubutsu Jounin to justice. He followed his nose to the bathroom and uncovered the switch seal there, knowing that he wouldn't be able to switch to Naruto's location unless another person just so happens to want to switch into the apartment. He squeezed the kunai in his right hand tightly and stabbed the wall beside the mirror. It all made sense now. He had once gambled with Kitsugami before, when the man was an ordinary person, and after he had lost another game of cards the man had asked him to see his summoning scroll. There was no such thing as spider summons at the time, and coincidentally Naruto came out as a summoner 4 years later. "I need a seal master," he yelled to the ninja behind him, and a Chunin ran to the Hokage's office, hoping to find Jiraiya of the Sannin. Yu Gao was busy beating herself up. If she had gotten her shit together and actually approached Naruto when he was younger, he might not have gone down this road. She could have at least gotten him some glasses for his eyes, something she knew about very well. She couldn't blame Orochimaru. Whether the Rouge Sannin had brainwashed Naruto into this path or not, the woman had actually cared for Naruto in more ways than she could ever think of. The Toad Sage pushed through the shinobi gather in Naruto's bathroom and mutely examined the seal. He channeled in some chakra and sharply pulled his hand away when the seal crackled with electricity. He chuckled to himself and slapped his scroll on the seal, an alternate version Naruto had used to freeze the alarms just before he stole the forbidden scroll, and the mirror rippled after that. "It's open," he simply said as he jumped through the rippling mirror, and the waves of shinobi followed after him. Naruto had long since finished sealing all of his equipment and clothes and storing them into a backpack, which he also in turn stored in a seal next to his heart. He was running as fast as he could out of the warehouse just after he heard his office door burst open, shattering into splinters. Aoki ran beside him with her own backpack secured on her back. Naruto made sure to shield her and himself from an explosive tag ninja had thrown at them that thunked into a tree trunk. He waved her concerns away. He heard some growling behind him and he spied some dog summons catching up to him. A thud far in front of him, and he was made aware of 3 samurai armor-wearing toads landing and preparing to catch him. As he plowed through a few hand seals, Aoki pulled out her legendary sword halfway and snapped it back in. Earth, pulse. The ground rose and fell after her in concentric circles, and the dog summons were thrown away. This was when Naruto finished his hand seals. Summoning jutsu. Multiple large bursts of chakra happened behind and in front of him, and different colored spiders ran out of the plumes, all wearing battle armor on their legs and heads. They rammed their helmet-protected heads against the sword-bearing toads as the toads brought down their weapons. Naruto and Aoki ran past when the spiders had created an opening for him and his friend. The gatekeepers at the north gate looked at him and his friend curiously as they ran up, but when they spied Jiraiya giving chase, frantically yelling for them to hold them down, it was too late. A senbone stuck out of each of their necks. As they exited the gates, 5 shinobi wearing sound forehead protectors ran beside him in a 5-pointed formation. "What took you so long, Naruto-sama?" A pale, unhealthy-looking man said. "I was busy. Who are you?" "Your godmother sent us here 3 days ago to make sure your journey to Sound is safe," another shinobi said. He had another head sticking out of his back. Naruto shook that fact off and continued running, hearing the chaos his spiders were making. "So he's the fuckface we've been waiting for?" "Mind your language." Naruto couldn't help but snap this. "You can cuss all you want to your friends, but refrain from doing so to me." He spun around and leveled his senbone launchers on some Inuzuka that had managed to get past the spiders and were giving chase. The needles whistled out of his silver launchers and exploded on the ground when they stepped on them, going too fast to dodge them. The blue fire billowed high into the sky and Naruto whirled around, following his escorts to where they were taking him. The blonde spider summoner then bit his thumb and pulled up his left sleeve to reveal a summoning seal matrix. He smeared the blood on it and muttered, "Summoning jutsu, Mizuki beast." He leapt over the large plume of smoke that exploded in front of him and shouted to the growling monster hidden in the smoke, still running to hidden sound, "Hold them off." "Yes, Naruto-sama," a deep voice snarled and a hulking mass sped out of the smoke, faster than the others could anticipate. Not even 3 seconds later there was a monstrous roar and pained screams, then the roar turned into maniacal laughs and deep crazed chuckles. It was now obvious Naruto was pulling out all the stops to avoid capture. The Sound 4 and Kimimaro all wondered what sort of evil creation Naruto had unleashed on the poor Konoha ninjas. "He's right to ya," Kimimaro muttered, wincing a little when he heard a thick cracking sound with another scream coming before it. The scream was abruptly cut short. "He is Lady Orochimaru's godson, the same guy she said was able to keep up with her when they last fought." "Whatever," she huffed sourly. Naruto felt his spider get killed, and that was when more toads and dogs flooded after him. Kimimaro shot bone drills at them from his fingers, and the silent fifth member of the Sound Four threw a clay bomb over his shoulder and chuckled darkly when he heard the toad victims give pain grunts. The dense trees cleared out, and this allowed Naruto to summon another spider, summoning jutsu, clay venomous spiders. The ground in front of them erupted and out crawled 3 clay spider summons. Get on! He leapt onto a clay spider, and when Aoki touched down beside him he mentally commanded it to go in the general direction they had originally been going. They all heard a loud boing and a giant toad dropped before them, Jiraiya, Kakashi and Yugao standing on its head. Naruto cursed to himself and mentally commanded the spiders to fan out, in different directions. The 3 shinobi jumped down to him and the massive summons began distracting the guards. Jiraiya dropped straight through the clay spider's head, flinging Naruto and Aoki away. The duo righted themselves in the air dexterously and landed on their feet smoothly. The stare down was epic, until Yugao finally spoke. Come back peacefully, Naruto. Maybe Hokage-sama would go easy on you. You should listen to her, that's some really good advice right there, Jiraiya grunted, standing tall and intimidating under the illuminating moon. I think I'll pass on that, Naruto replied and got into his favored 4-legged shadow spider stance. What went wrong, Naruto? The purple-haired woman whispered and Naruto caught it. The wind speed increased slightly. Becoming a shinobi, that's where I went wrong. But why drugs, kid? Kakashi said. You might not believe me, but my company has been helping millions of people who have problems affording drugs these days. I've saved millions of families and dozens of hidden villages from extinction with my drugs. The illegal stuff happened before I expanded my clientele. Can you honestly tell me that what I have done to the medicine world isn't vital, isn't groundbreaking? It wasn't like Naruto tested the illegal drugs on himself, that was meant for others to test on. You have done some great work, Naruto, but what you did before these things could happen. Yugao trailed off. You experimented on people, you killed, you kidnapped, and you did it without remorse. They were all dregs of the society, no one would miss them. It doesn't make it any less evil, Jiraiya shouted. You're just like Orochimaru. He hoped that would make the boy feel even a little remorse, but rather Naruto brightened up and flashed a grin at him, exposing his freakishly serrated spider teeth to them to see even under the moonlight. Thank you, Jiraiya, and I'm sure my godmother would be glad too. Your parents would be disappointed in you, Kakashi shouted. They lost all right of being proud of me the moment they died. I don't think you've noticed, but I've been alone for a long time and they didn't even leave me a single letter, or even a picture, Naruto yelled, finally losing composure after his parents had been mentioned. He had not received his inheritance because the estate had been flattened by a tale from the Kyuubi, and the massive wells of money in the joint Namikaze Uzumaki account had been slowly drained dry over the years by the civilian council as well as some few select shinobi. As far as I know, the only parent I have is my Orochimaru. She's cared, that's all that matters. He didn't flinch when a loud thud hit the ground, destroying a clay spider and scattering the sound ninja trying to fight the toad. Is this about love and care? Get over yourself, you're not the only person that had to grow up alone. Try growing up half blind and having to look through the trash for food. When you know how that feels, you'll understand. Frankly speaking, the toad sage had lived a good early life, even as an orphan. The people my parents entitled to look after me failed, and it was only my godmother that went above and beyond, just for me. You should all be glad I don't hold any grudges. The man didn't have a good comeback. He had already reconciled with himself the fact that he was a terrible godfather. He had hoped that he could bond with Naruto over training the Kyuubi, hoping that Naruto would look up to him, but that was never the case. He got into the toad kata stance. Enough talk. Yeah, enough talking, Naruto muttered and flipped through 3 hand seals as the 3 ran to him. Web bomb, level 10. A sparkling white orb began growing between his palms, and when it was roughly the size of a beach ball he smashed it onto the ground, Aoki making sure to stand behind him away from the blast. She was very familiar with the attack. This would be the first time the 3 ninjas would see it. The effect of this was the ball exploding and covering all in thick, heavy and quickly drying white webs. Even the toad had to leap aside. There were fingernail-sized spiders with beeping brown and green behinds that moved sluggishly over the webs, expanding it and at the same time fortifying it. When Jiraiya thought he could break out, his hole was smoothed over. It would last an hour. Naruto shook the webs off easily and pulled Aoki out, summoning clones to pull the Sound 4 and Kimimaro out too. The toad touched back down on the web and it solidified around his feet, making him immobile. He spared a look at the trapped ninja, and ran off to Hidden Sound. Ray, J, a smooth voice chirped as she sauntered through the front door of the Scarlet Pleasure brothel. The woman had a beautiful tan with purple lipstick and dark eyeshadow painted on her face. She wore flowing black formal dress and a long gold necklace around her neck. She also had hoop earrings and black high heels. She hopped onto the scrubbed-down counter where drinks were usually served and crossed her legs. Two twins dressed identically in purple pajamas yawned as they waltzed out from the curtain on the far right of the counter where the sex workers received visitors in their rooms. Ohio Arana-sama, a twin with a rose hairclip holding up a long black overhanging bang chirped. The other twin though allowed her own bang to cover her left side. Her soft brown eyes glinted at the head matron and she raised her visible eyebrow. "Have you heard the news?" the matron said as she buffed her manicured nails on her chest and examined them. "You need to be specific, lady," the other twin said. "Well, Jay-chan, I was talking about Kitsugami-sama." Rei, the twin with the air clip snapped her fingers in realization. "Oh yeah, that chase yesterday night, why didn't you let us help out again?" She angrily perched her fists on her hips and her twin frowned and followed suit. "Kitsugami-sama specifically said we shouldn't interfere if it was to ever happen," she sighed wistfully. "He said he didn't want us to come into harm's way, the sweetheart." Jay blew her bang and looked away briefly. "Well, that's stupid." Rei bumped her shoulder. "He's sweet." "Do you know who Uzumaki Naruto is?" the matron asked as he snapped the twins out of their daze. "The Kyuubi kid, he used to visit when he was like 6, what happened to him?" Jay replied with a suspiciously raised eyebrow. "You're not telling me that little kid was?" The matron nodded. "Kitsugami Gumo, head of the Kitsugami Drug Company. Only I and his chief foreman knew this." "Damn it." Jay cursed under her breath. "Wasn't he some sort of star ninja? Damn it." She threw her hands in the air. She then paused. "They didn't catch him, right?" The matron snorted. "Of course not. This is Uzumaki Naruto we're talking about. Now, the reason I called you two is that he has sent a message back that he wants the snitch that ratted him out to be killed. He doesn't care how or where but preferably soon." Rei cocked her head to the side. "Done." The usually ditzy twin was now stoic and her twin looked at her briefly before she too nodded. Uzumaki Naruto, though, and his godmother, Orochimaru of the Sannin were at the moment lying on their bellies on a high hill, with the sickly woman peering into a pair of binoculars. They were looking the violent whirlpools that spun over the oceans, then at the menacing sea creatures that swam through the whirlpools with ease, then finally to the dozens of highly ranked ninja wearing the Kumagakure forehead protector patrolling in front of the high wall that curved over the main path towards ocean, as well as the few shinobi that patrolled the other routes. It was ridiculous that the Raikage had gone through all this measures so that no one would go to Uzishio, disregarding the fact that there were dozens of whirlpools that would shred any person that was not an Uzumaki summons or with the Uzumaki bloodline, or associated closely with the Uzumaki. Since Kumagakure, and any other village, could not access Uzushio Gakure completely, then no one would. Orochimaru removed the binoculars from her yellow eyes and looked into Naruto's goggle-protected own. She smirked wickedly. "First lesson, my lovely little godson, is on how to pass through Kumo to get to Uzishio." She motioned forward to reveal that they weren't even in Kumo, rather they were lying on a hill behind Hidden Mountain, which bordered Kumo. "We are going to put your stealth skills to the test." She pinched his cheek and stood up. He stood up as well to show he was in a well-fitting black and red hoodie. He shrugged on his backpack and carried his godmother's backpack in his right hand. They always had the option of passing around Kumo, but where was the fun in that? Besides, cutting through the hidden village that had the world's highest bounty for the snake Sannin was way shorter than going around it. They had a long journey in front of them, which just so happened to do with breaking through the elemental nation's wealthiest hidden village to a destroyed village whose eternal defense may or may not reject them. What could go wrong? Chapter 5. The snake and spider summoners leisurely walked towards Kumo when they got within a stone throw of the village and the woman was giving the boy advice on how to infiltrate a village considered impossible to infiltrate. There are usually 3 ways to go about it. Naruto nodded to show he was listening while he made sure that no one was around to ambush them. The first is when you actually sneak through the village. This is usually for those confident in their abilities and can back up their confidence with action, especially if you are well versed with standard procedure in the hidden village whether you are part of the ninja system or not. Okay, does it count if I use this way to sneak into and through Konoha? It all counts, even if you're sneaking into an underground cavern guarded by demons. Naruto pursed his lips and nodded. This usually doesn't make use of any jutsu since you need to minimize chakra use so sensors wouldn't find out. And sensory seals, Naruto added. The woman beamed and ruffled his hair. Exactly. There are many ways to go about this, but I personally like underground or subterranean travel. This helps because I can hold my breath for a really long time. The second way of sneaking into a hidden village or country is when there is a huge distraction. This distraction can either be created by another, or external, force or by you. External? Naruto asked with furrowed eyebrows. This is a person or a group of people that you have never met or even know are present in the first place. It's sort of like a coincidental happening in your favor. Like if a person wanted to break into the Konoha hospital and he arrived just as the invasion was happening. You noticed how priority was set on keeping attackers contained and defending the walls. This distracts everyone from people sneaking that don't include fighters. Not sure you understand. The boy still had his eyebrows furrowed, but he nodded. That would be smart, and extremely lucky, if that happened to us now. It would, but it's not what we want to do now. Maybe another day. The other type of this distraction is when you cause the distraction, like if you send an explosive clone to forcefully break into the village and detonate hundreds of feet away from your entry point. Standard procedure for every village is to contain the threat and to make sure the civilians are unharmed. This is a very ungraceful way to enter a village. What if I make a clone to sneak in but make a break for it to the other side of the village, not necessarily a bomb? Good, you're learning. The last way is very similar to the first and the second way. You sneak in but using chakra to shroud yourself. When you are detected, you make a break for it to your destination, scattering distractions like traps and bombs around you. They stopped walking and hid behind a tree as they observed the gate of the extremely wealthy hidden village. There were small caravans owned by traders as well as people that walked through the gate. They were all carefully scanned and checked by gatekeepers for genjutsu and identification. Orochimaru nudged the boy and pointed at a plaque that was nailed to the front of the gatekeeper's box. What does that say? It wasn't anything she hadn't seen before. She was merely testing his knowledge in Fuin jutsu. Naruto's black goggles shuttered like a camera and they spun slowly, showing that they were zooming in on the object he had been told to look at. It's a detection seal stacked over a sensory seal. The range? She motioned for him to keep going. About a 20 feet distance radius from the gatekeeper's box, the limit for when a sensory seal is combined by a detection seal. The woman smirked at him. Correct. Before we continue, can you tell me why the seal can only go so far? It is because the sensory seals only boost the sensor's abilities to sense, while the detection seal is set to only detect humans and animals with chakra. This strains it to being pinpoint accurate, which means it can't stretch too far. A sensory seal would be useless unless there was a sensor to use it, and a detection seal had a short range but at the same time it was very accurate. It was merely a combination of similar seals to boost their effectiveness. This also meant that there had to be a constant sensor in the gatekeeper's box. Which way are we going to use to sneak in? The woman shrugged and looked at him. You choose. The first. I've only used that in ninja encampments, never to a place on this scale. Alright, but that would be a problem seeing as they have a detection sensory seal combo. So, we are definitely going to use that way. She grinned widely, exposing her needle-like canines and pristine teeth, and he too slowly grinned widely at the look in her eyes. She pulled him a little deeper into the forest and sat him down on a large rock. She asked for her backpack from him and he gave her. She rummaged through it and whipped out a makeup set. He snorted in amusement when he saw this and took off his goggles so she would begin changing his face. Ooh. A woman with light pink hair, white painted face, pouty red lips and colorful eyeshadow raised her chin and looked down at the Chunin gatekeepers with hard blue eyes. She was in a white kimono with beautiful multicolored flowers dotted all over it and a white obi around her waist. She leaned out of the window and gracefully perched her elbow on the window. Yes? Identification please, the woman said in a bored voice. You mean you don't know who I am? She screamed. You don't know who I am? I'm sorry, ma'am. I have never been so insulted in my life. She began fanning herself with a cloth hand fan that had been in her left hand. Ka-san? A squeaky voice said from inside the regal carriage. What's happening, Ka-san? Oh my sweet little child, these uncouth ninja don't know who I am. She turned her head to the ninjas, now two Chunin, who were beginning to hate their posts, and spat. Now look what you've done. You've woken up my handsome little boy. You all should be ashamed of yourselves. The boy adjusted his black glasses so they didn't slip down his nose. Please calm down, Ka-san. The person sat up and the Chunin could see it was a pale boy with rosy red cheeks and thin lips. His blonde hair was gelled down and he was clad in a red and black formal kimono his size. There was a deep red obi around his waist, but they couldn't see that from where they were standing. He gently rubbed the hand he had in his grasp, and the woman placed a hand over her heart dramatically. They were only trying to confirm it was you. He sharply looked at the flustered Chunin and said, weren't you? She nodded frantically. Here a man in jet black hair dropped from the front of the carriage. He was in a sharp penguin suit. He was very different from the people in the carriage. He was tanned and had black eyes. Though he had a long nose, like a beak, which he looked down from with his beady black eyes. I am quite surprised you do not know Nami-sama and her son Maki-sama. The poor Chunin hesitantly shook her head. I'm sorry. The man snorted, "Well, I wouldn't expect one like you to know them. They are artists," the light-skinned girls owed in understanding. "I'm sorry, but I'll still need their ID." "It can't be helped," the woman called Nami said with a small sigh. "Give them our IDs. And do hurry, Ka-san is tired and would really like her beauty sleep." The woman suppresses a snort and pinched the boy. "At once," the butler said and reached into his front pocket. He presented 3 IDs and the girl bowed twice before she ran into the gatekeeper's box. She returned 3 minutes later and smiled at them. "You guys check out. Do you mind telling me why you are in Kumagakure?" "They are on their vacation. The artisan lifestyle is very hectic and they need a break," the butler said nasally. Of course, have a nice day." She waved for them to continue and they did as soon as the butler got back behind the horses. As they were out of earshot, the girls sighed in relief and wiped the perspiration that was building on their foreheads. "I need to get out more," said a girl, and her partner nodded. They went back to her post, waiting for another person to come. Back with Nami and Maki, the pink-haired woman peeked out of the window, and when she saw they were far enough she burst into laughter. Maki joined her. They held their bellies and tears ran down their eyes. "I can't believe they fell for it," Nami said as she ripped off her pink wig, revealing jet black hair. She stuck her tongue out in disgust at the hair color. "With our acting skills we should win Ginji Awards. In this story they're equivalent to Grammy Awards." After the Sanin had laid down white foundation over their faces, they had hijacked a carriage carrying the real Nami and Maki, stole their IDs and rode through to Kumo. Naruto summoned a clone and the woman disguised him as well. Since they both had massive amounts of chakra, they were forced to super suppress it to civilian capacity, but the act of holding the compact size was like holding in pee. As if on cue, they both released their hold over their chakra and they sighed in relief, slumping back into the comfortable chairs. The carriage screeched to a stop abruptly as they were passing through a small farm at the side of the mountain Kumagakure was situated on. Naruto poked his head out of the window, but the Sanin playfully pulled him back in and poked her own head out. The boy suppressed the amused smirk before she waved her hand at him. "Coast clear." "Whatever," the boy muttered and jumped out through the window. He grumbled and tore off his long formal kimono sleeves. "I hate wearing this. It's like wearing a pillow." "Get used to it, kid. If your records say you're a great adaptive fighter, then don't mess up that image." Adaptive fighters were those that were able to use any terrain, handicap, situation, and opponent to their advantage. Naruto was recognized as an adaptive fighter after his second Trail Jounin test, where he had to retrieve Aritajijo back from Suna, but it was cemented after a mission he went on with Yu Gao to Hidden Darkness. He had been tasked to rescue a shinobi who had been injured in his post there, but it was an ambush where the darkness shinobi dropped around them, bringing with them their darkness in a can. This delved them into pure chakra-induced darkness where even his goggles wouldn't be able to penetrate. What Naruto had done was to make full use of his 6 extra eyes to sweep around him every 10 seconds, having to move around and fight in pitch darkness. At the end they had managed to get the injured ninja back to Konoha, but relations with Hidden Darkness was still strained. The 2 highly ranked ninja leisurely walked to the barn and Naruto pushed the door open. He peeked in and entered when he noticed that not even animals were inside. The butler merely stayed back to watch the horses while the 2 ventured into the barn fully. Orochimaru had informed the young Uzumaki that their travel around the elemental nations was purely educational for Naruto, but at the same time it wouldn't be only her that would be speaking or performing actions. The sick woman looked at the boy and he focused his senses through the dot eyes on his forehead. The world turned black and white, the ground rippled and 6 phantom black legs crawled out from his shadow, which only he could see, and felt over everything, allowing him to look through until he finally felt something. He cancelled his concentration to those eyes and nodded towards a large empty crate at the far back. The short look he gave his godmother, even though his pitch-black goggles told her everything she needed to know, she didn't pull out a kunai from her sleeve. His added eyes allowed him to see the world in extra detail, which was amazing since the ordinary human eye could already do that. The thing that made Naruto's spider eyes special was that since he could see in better detail, he was able to see things most wouldn't see at speeds most wouldn't be able to fathom. His mission quota shot up after his 3-month-long trip and his long-range accuracy shot up even more. I'll write later on how his eyes and nose are pretty cool. She stayed where she was and the boy walked up to the crate. He then heard, "Tori-chan, no." Then a childish war cry. The blonde spider summoner smirked a little in amusement and reached forward to catch the little girl's head in his hand. The girl kept on stubbornly trying to reach for him, but she didn't have the strength to push against his hand. "Let go. Fight me." Naruto cocked his head to the side to look behind the crate and saw a dark-skinned, blonde-haired girl in a wheelchair that had both of her hands covering her mouth, and her eyes clenched shut. He rolled his own eyes when the little girl he was holding back tried kicking him, but again this was a futile attempt. "Relax, kid." Quicker than she could anticipate, he spun her around and her moving legs had her run back into the wheelchair girl. "Good, now where are your parents?" Please sir. It's a simple question, I didn't add a threat, did I? They're in the market, the blonde girl muttered with her eyes still closed. Do anything you want of me but please don't hurt Tori-chan. Naruto actually leaned back in shock and blinked twice. He looked at the snake lady and she shrugged, motioning for him to keep talking. I'm not going to hurt you, matter of fact we're just passing through. He made sure to show both of his hands. Their bags were in the carriage. The little girl, who looked identical to the older girl, glared suspiciously at him but she stayed in front of her sister in a stance akin to one about to pounce on a target. What are you doing here? We came to give the owners of this house our horses, no use feeding them to our pets huh, Orochimaru said as she peeked around the corner of the crate at the girls. She noticed that her words only increased the mistrust visibly being shown by the little girl. They always had the option of killing the girls but not everyone they met had to be killed, or so Orochimaru lectured had her godson, and that it would be a waste of horses if they just gave them to be slaughtered by their summons when they had their own sources of food in their summoning realm. Naruto slowly stepped away from them with his hands still up to show he didn't have any weapon there. We'll just leave them in here. When he was about 12 paces away from them he turned around and took the reins of the 3 horses from the clone butler. There they are. He tied the horses to a post and waved with a wide smile to the girls as they peeked out from behind the crates. Wait! The girl in the wheelchair shouted and the blonde stopped mid-walk back to the barn door. You haven't told us your name, or even what the heck they'll have to tell their parents when they asked about the horses. Call me Naruto. My name is Terry and this is my baby sister Tori. Thank you for the horses. She nodded and he gave her 2 thumbs up. No thanks needed, Terry-san, Tori-san, I'll be going now. He sent a lax 2-fingered salute as he went out the large doors. He could already hear the sisters trying to come up with a reason why they suddenly have 3 horses. Outside Orochimaru raised an eyebrow as she looked at her godson. Well that was amusing. Come and help me with this please. The boy knelt down beside her and used his hands to keep a large scroll open while she rolled her shoulders and pushed the carriage onto the edge. Seal, she muttered and with a large poof the wooden carriage was gone. You never know when you'll need a carriage, I always say, she said as she sealed the scroll into her palm. Naruto rolled his eyes, not for the first time that day either. You don't say that. The woman bopped his nose and threw her right arm over his shoulder as they started walking down the dusty road that led directly to Kumo's back door, which was seldom ever used since it only led to Uzushio. The woman raised a finger to begin another lecture but a loud yell had both of them look back. The woman still had her arm over his shoulder as she muttered, uh-oh. There they are. Those are the guys that stole our stuff. A pink-haired woman wrapped in a white blanket screamed as she pointed at the duo. A boy with gelled blonde hair that was clad in only boxers and a black-haired man in briefs fumed angrily at them. I thought for sure they would stay put. The Sannin said as she scratched her chin. They had left the real Nami, Maki and Butler in Hidden Mountain. They heard dozens of feet land around them and they spied both mountain and lightning shinobi surround them. When they noticed that it was the snake and spider summoner that they were around they began whipping out their weapons or getting into strong taijutsu stances. The duo though remained in the same position as they carefully looked around. Orochimaru unwound her arm from around the boy's shoulder and stood up straight, her wicked smirk in place. It seems we wouldn't be using the first way, huh kid? Naruto hunched over as 2 3-foot-long senbon slid out of his launchers and clicked in place. They grazed the ground as he got his legs into a light stance. It seems not. He set his right arm to hook over his head and his left to point forward. It was still the 4-legged shadow spider stance but it was still a position he could alternate and reduce some legs after he had gauged the severity of the situation. No need to put too much effort if he was fighting weak ninja. Alright then, let's see what these guys can do. She stood behind Naruto, facing the ninja behind him, and steadily got into a light snake fist stance. Taijutsu and weapons alone, she muttered and he nodded. She didn't need to know how well Naruto was with his taijutsu. She had gone against him in the Forest of Death as well as Kabuto reported all of his missions back to her. She merely wanted to see how well they would work together as a team. This was also what Naruto thought as a matching smirk set on his face. The very air that passed through the ninja was taut and some even began perspiring but they didn't flee or stand down. Then, like a light switch had been flipped, they dived onto the duo. Oh. The silence that fell in the office was solemn after they had just finished the tape of Naruto mutating the formerly thought to be dead Mizuki Tuji. The Hokage, Tsunade Senju, sighed and propped her elbows on her desk as she looked at the other occupants of the room one by one. Kakashi, Yugao, Jiraiya, Shikaku, Kurenai and Asuma, the Genjutsu mistress tried to keep her composure as her image of the same boy that had helped Anko through her random spouts of depression changed drastically and Asuma too wondered why he didn't detect this side of Naruto as he invited him to a game of shogi with Shikamaru. Shukaku, Yugao and Kakashi just regretted why they didn't approach him when he was younger. Naruto Uzumaki was the top 10 special jounin in Konoha, probably even stronger than some full jounin. The potential that the boy had in him was astounding. I think we know the next step from here, Tsunade said first, breaking the tense silence. He's a rogue ninja and he has to be placed in the Konoha bingo books. It was inevitable. He was already B-rank ninja in the Iwa bingo books, closely rising to A rank, as well as an A-rank ninja in Hidden Darkness. It was only a matter of time other villages heard of his defection and altered his standing in their bingo books. The former Anbu in the room chose to remain professional about it, despite how personal the matter was. Yes, Kakashi nodded, since they were some of the few ninjas that had been close to Naruto, or so they thought, then they should be the ones to gauge his standing in the bingo books. Well, considering the fact that he has a single jutsu that is able to hold us down in a toad summon, then I say he's an A rank, Jiraiya said. He has his spiders and Mizuki, I agree, he has to be A rank, Yugao said quietly. His taijutsu is impeccable and his ninjutsu skills are one of the best I've seen. A rank, Kakashi supplied as he sat down on the windowsill, a place where Naruto used to sit down during jounin meetings. Naruto is able to plan ahead, much further than most jounin, which explains why he has such a high A-class mission quota. He should be A rank, Asuma added. His stealth skills are his shining points to me. He was able to steal the forbidden scroll from under our noses once and then his tracking and capturing skills shouldn't be left out. I say he should be an A-rank missing ninja, Shukaku finalized, one to be approached with caution. The jounin nodded in agreement and the Hokage finalized the decision and placed it in the new edition of the Konoha Bingo Book. Konoha Bingo Book entry number 42. Rank, A. Name, Uzumaki Naruto. Monikers, Shadow Spider, and another moniker is coming after this chapter. Age, 13. Affiliation, Konohagakure, formerly, Kitsugami Drug Corporation, CEO, Spider Clan, Aoki-chan, Rogue Samurai, Orochimaru of the Sannin, Missing Ninja. Bloodline, Sensor Type, Kyubi Jinchuriki, Uzumaki Regeneration Ability, they might not be bloodlines but whatever, they need to be noted. Summons, Spider Clan, maybe Snake Clan as well. Description, blonde hair, wears black goggles, sometimes, vulpine red eyes, usually in dark clothes, wears 2 silver senbone launchers on his wrists and has serrated teeth, like his summons. Specializations, taijutsu, ninjutsu, fuinjutsu, shurikenjutsu, summoning ninjutsu, first aid, espionage, infiltration, spying, tracking, capturing, researching and investigating. It is believed that he is able to use his Kyubi chakra to a high degree but it is still yet to be seen. His goggles prevent genjutsu from working on him but it is also known that he isn't good at genjutsu. Information. Not much is known about Uzumaki Naruto since he is very private about his life but he was not closed off from associating with other ninja in the village. He is the owner and founder of the Kitsugami Drug Corporation, a drug company whose activities and movements are still a great secret. He is credited for creating his own summons and his own fighting style, the 4-legged shadow spider fighting style, a feat that is rarely ever heard of in any country. It is speculated that he travels around with Aoki-chan, an A-rank rogue samurai, who is close friend and, probably, Orochimaru of the Sannin, who is his godmother. Not much information is known about him. He might not be as smart as a Nara but he is a very close second. It is advisable that if he is ever encountered, only A-rank ninja and above should attempt to face him. Do not engage unless you are a rank and above. The jounin filed out so it only left the 2 last loyal Sannin. Jiraiya sighed and sat down on the chair in front of the Hokage's desk. Should I start looking for him? Tsunade was silent for 5 minutes before she slowly shook her head. No, leave him be. The toad sage raised an eyebrow. Mind I ask why? He has shown that he doesn't hold grudges against us and he doesn't have anything we want, besides his spider summons. It's best if we don't associate with him or else he'll start asking just how his parents' bank accounts were drained dry. The man paled and chuckled nervously. Plus he knows Konoha's defense like the back of his hand. We don't want him coming after the civilian council. Or us, Tsunade added. You're afraid of him? The woman snorted. Of course not, but do you remember he is very good with poisons. He beat Kakashi and Guy on his first fight with them. He held down Kakashi, Yugao, Jiraiya and a freaking toad with a web bomb, she added in her mind, but I do want you to find out where he is or even his traveling plans. Understood, Jiraiya nodded before a perverted grin stretched on his face. I miss you already, Haim. He winked but dove out of the window as a healed ninja sandal was thrown at him. The slug Sannin grumbled as she retrieved her heel. Damn pervert, she sat down heavily on her chair and put her shoe on again. She leaned back on her chair and looked out of her office window. A memory of when she was a young hit her, and she understood why the moment Hiruzen Sarutobi had sent a copy of Naruto's ninja history as he summoned her back to Konoha, she immediately didn't trust Naruto. Flashback. I'm writing this from my point of view, not Tsunade's. A 19-year-old Tsunade Senju grinned widely and sent a small finger-wiggling wave to a few flustered boys as she waltzed past the academy. The jounin vest on her torso glinted slightly as she puffed out her chest in pride. She was in a very good mood. She spied one of her teammates, Orochimaru, walking towards the academy. She seemed to be too preoccupied with her thoughts to see Tsunade, seeing as the Senju had waved, but the snake summoner still couldn't see her. The blonde girl pursed her lips in irritation and was about to yell until she saw the pale teen raise her hand and wave frantically as academy students began pouring out of the door after the break bell had sounded. Curious enough, a blonde ball of yellow and white energy barreled into her belly and, rather than hissing in a feral rage and killing the menace, she laughed quietly and hugged the boy back. Mara-ne-chan, you came. The 10-year-old boy had bright blue eyes and slightly tan skin. He wore blue shorts and a white shirt that had the Snake Clan symbol on the shoulders with blue sandals on his feet. The young snake summoner grinned and released the boy from her grasp, ruffling his hair familiarly. Of course I'll come. You forgot your lunchbox, again. She reached behind her back and whipped out a bento box of food for the boy, and his eyes sparkled in wonder at how impossible it was for a tin of food to magically appear from behind her. It's ramen and veggies, just so you know. They were now standing in a remote part of the academy training ground where the students wouldn't be able to see them, a spot Orochimaru was very familiar with. Awesome. Thank you, Ne-chan, he said and took the tin from her. She closed her yellow reptilian eyes as she smiled widely. Don't worry about it, she said as she led them to a bench and sat down. The watching Senju was about to yell for the boy to drop the food, fearing that it was poisoned, but it was too late. Minato had already taken 4 mouthfuls and no negative effects. The pale jounin leaned back coolly with her hands behind her head, crossed her leg and looked at him. So how was class? The boy shrugged as he hastily tried to swallow the hot food in his mouth before he replied, it was okay, I guess. She raised an eyebrow. Is there something wrong? He shrugged again, but he had slowed down his eating. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Minato-kun? She drew out his name and he sighed. Someone called me a sissy. It's nothing, really, he insisted as her eyes steeled over. Who is this person? She asked slowly but rolled her eyes at his worried look. I'm not going to do anything bad to them, don't worry. It's Uzumaki Kushina, he said as he stopped eating, opting to rather poke his noodles with his chopsticks. Well, what did you do for her to call you that? I didn't do anything. Promise. She suppressed the smirk and he blushed a deep red. Okay, I said, I liked her hair. You're just too cute, Minato-kun, she laughed. Just try and avoid her, you'll be fine. If you say so. Once upon a time Tsunade had a massive crush on Orochimaru. She might still have one, but certain things about the snake summoner made her suspicious. First was that she practically popped out of nowhere during their academy resumption. She didn't have any parents and she was as cold as ice to everyone, even their sensei and Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi. As her teammate she had seen Orochimaru in action and it was never a pretty sight. The sheer bloodlust that sparkled in her eyes on every dangerous mission was spine-chilling. Now, hiding behind a tree with her chakra suppressed, she watched as the icy exterior of the snake summoner was chipped off right before her very eyes. This Minato was probably the only person she had seen Orochimaru be free around, or even remotely kind to. Quite frankly, she thought Orochimaru always had an iron rod shoved far up her ass. She squinted her eyes in suspicion at the two as they chatted on and on matters only they could understand, speaking in a code only they could decipher, and suspicion on who Minato was started to fester in her mind. She had only seen Minato once, and that was when Team Sarutobi were leaving the gate. She had spied him hiding behind a building and looking on as they left. Shocking enough, this didn't make her suspicious since it wasn't the first time a boy had watched them leave. She even thought that it was her that Minato was staring at, but apparently it wasn't true. The bell sounded and she watched as the bubbly boy gave the teen a parting hug before he ran back to class. The Senju furrowed her eyebrows in thought and melted into the darkness behind her, taking a route back to the village so she could begin a thorough investigation on who Minato and Orochimaru were, but first she had to enlist the help of a master detective. You want me to do what? Jiraiya said as he dug his pinky into his ear. Something funny must have crawled into my ear. For a minute there I thought you said we should stalk Orochimaru-chan, but that's crazy, right? Tsunade placed her fists on her hips and glared at the white-haired jounin. We're not stalking her, we're just going to ask around about her. Nothing bad there. Yeah, nothing bad, but this is Orochimaru-chan we're talking about. She'll kill us. He threw his arm in the air. I will have no part in this. What if during their questioning they walk in on the snake summoner naked in the bathroom? Even though that would be a great sight. Snap out of it. He slapped himself and sat down on a tree stump. I rather like living, Hime-chan, don't you? The Senju princess huffed in frustration and rolled her eyes. She won't kill us. Remember what she did to Gigi-san when he touched her shoulder? Do you remember? She had broken both of his arms. He was still in the hospital recovering from both the physical and psychological scars. Next time he wouldn't try and flirt with her again. What of Bumi-san, remember him? Orochimura had accidentally shoved him off a cliff for winking at her. Or Yutaroji-san, this idiot purposely groped the snake girl during a spar, and before they could all say ah shit, his head had been buried under the ground and his body was upright, like he had been stabbed into the ground, and the girl still didn't stop the beatings until Hiruzen had stepped in and restrained her. Or Kumito-chan, this was Asuna Kanuichi that had called Orochimura a freak after she had manifested twin snakes as her arms to fight. Freak was a watered down version of what she really called her. She was still looking for all of her teeth. Now she wore her scarf around her mouth. Or Rintachi-chan. Alright, I get it, Tsunade said sourly. Jiraiya crossed his arms smugly. His point had been made, but don't you think she's even a little bit suspicious? She just randomly appeared after Sarutobi-sensei became Hokage. She is literally part snake and, despite being 2 whole years late, she still became Kanuichi of the year. Well, yeah. The spy master said as he scratched his chin in thought. Come to think of it, that is sort of strange. See? The white-haired teen furrowed his eyebrows and actually really thought of exactly what his crush wanted him to do. He wanted them to investigate on who Orochimura was, probably due to a suspicion that had reared its ugly head out, seeing as Tsunade used all of her Jinan and part of her Chunin days chasing after the snake summoner. Even though he didn't look or act like Jiraiya was certain that he was familiar with the Konoha migration log and citizen registry, and Orochimura was only mentioned abruptly in the registry. Even after the second shinobi had blown over, little was still ever known about her. Then an idle thought struck him. Why all this so suddenly? You've never acted like this about her before. She pushed him off the stump he was sitting on and he groaned as his face met the ground. I saw her going to the academy. Probably to go scout out for fresh meat, the boy muttered as he got up and dusted his clothes down. Shut up, idiot, as I was saying, I saw her going to the academy to give a kid lunch she forgot at home. There was a short silence before Jiraiya couldn't hold himself anymore. His belly laugh spread far and wide over the training ground. As his laughs tapered out, he took a deep breath and sent an amused smile at the blonde girl, who looked like just a small tap away from giving a ground-shattering blow to him. I think you should go to the hospital, Hime-chan. I knew I shouldn't have cooked that crab I picked off the ground on our last mission. What? The teen frantically waved for her to calm down. My point is, it's probably not our Orochimura you saw. I'm 100% sure it was her, the last Senju insisted. His name is Minato and they act like they're siblings, but he looks nothing like her. I mean, she seems so happy around him and not in a perverted, pedophilic way, she added as a bright glint entered the toad sage's eyes, like they were really siblings. Do you think sensei knows about this? She shook her head. I don't think so. Well, let's go and find out who Orochimura is then, he said and reached his right hand for a handshake, and the Senju reached forward to shake it, but an idle gust of wind blew behind him. Not strong enough to even blow a leaf, but apparently strong enough for him to overreach and grab her bountiful bosoms. Whoopsie, the weather, Hime-chan. Pervert. Thud. Boom. When the situation had more or less been settled, the duo separated after Jiraiya had assigned functions to them. He would do the digging on Orochimura while frantically avoiding her, while Tsunade was to watch Minato and note everything on him. What she had discovered about the young blonde speedster troubled her greatly. She sat down on a branch with her legs crossed as she watched the boy spar against a classmate. A 10-year-old in his 3rd year of school was not meant to know how to fight so well. Minato spun under a punch and his arms shot out, grabbed the back of the attacker's neck, and in a flurry of limbs he brought the opponent's face down to meet the mat with his forearm placed firmly on his neck and his pointer and middle fingers of his right hand pointing to the back of his head. He had ended a spar in 2 minutes flat with flow and ease. It almost seemed like he was humoring his opponent by even fighting him. The boy stood back and politely bowed to his opponent before he returned to his friends, who were patting him on his back. He smiled widely at them. He was nothing like Orochimura, but at the same time they were very similar. The boy thrived in the basic sciences aspect of the academy, and he especially gravitated towards spiders irrespective of their danger level. With every passing hour of watching the boy interact, she grew even more suspicious. With every happy smile and jovial greeting, she grew to suspect that there had to be more to the eye on Minato Namikaze. No one could be that close to the snake sage without having even the slightest bit of darkness lurking in him. Sadly for Tsunade, depending on how you look at it, she couldn't follow the boy back to his home since he lived with Orochimura. Though the next day, just as the snake sage had dropped off the boy in school, she took permission from his class sensei to speak with him. She struggled to hold up a smile for the nervous boy as she motioned for him to sit down on some chairs outside an empty class. "Good morning, Senju-sama." "There's no need to call me that, Tsunade is just fine," she said with a gentle smile. She reached over to pat his head but frowned at the way he recoiled from her touch, even though she had seen him get pats on his back from his friends the day before. "Tsunade-san," he said with his head tilted down. He kept his eyes on his lap. "Did I do something wrong?" "Nope, I was just curious about something about you. What's your relationship with Orochimaru the Snake Sage?" Here he perked up and bounced in his seat in excitement. "Mara Ne-chan is my Ne-chan." "Is that so?" He nodded. "Hi, she is very kind and nice and smart and..." Here he blushed heavily. "Very beautiful." The Senju tried to suppress her own blush but forced herself to focus on her goal. "How long have you known her?" "A while," he answered ominously. "Okay, I take it you're not blood relations then." The boy snorted. "I wish." Again it was a very short answer. She sat there, just watching him play with his fingers nervously. "Can I go back to class now?" "I don't want to miss anything." She nodded, but before he left she said, "Don't tell her I was her, okay?" He nodded, but needless to say Minato told Orochimaru. The snake sage buffed her fingernails on her flak jacket and examined them as Tsunade stepped into her apartment. The pale Jounin was sitting on her couch in a lax position. "Glad to see you're back, how are you?" "Mara-chan, I wasn't expecting you. I just decided to drop by, to see my teammate and find out how she's doing." "I can't do that?" she asked as she reclined into the comfortable chair with her legs crossed. "But, I don't remember giving you my keys." Nor did she see any signs of forceful entry anywhere. "Oh, don't worry about that, Su-chan. Why don't you have a seat? You look tired." She motioned to the chair beside the couch she was sitting on. Matter of fact, Tsunade was tired. She had just returned from the patrol tower at the west part of Konoha's border. The leading medic ninja hesitantly took a seat and watched as a snake clone walked out of the kitchen with 2 cups of steaming green tea, setting it down on the table. The snake sage noticed her hesitation and a small smirk crossed her face as she leaned forward and dipped her pinky finger into the cup directly in front of Tsunade, licking it off slowly. Tsunade swallowed thickly. Why are you here again, if you don't mind me asking?" she said as she took the tea and gently blew into it. She was struggling to get her mind back on track. "Someone very dear to me told me you were asking him about his relationship with me," the pale Jounin said as she sipped her tea gently. "It's just that. I'll have to ask you to stay away from him. He is none of your concern," she interrupted sharply and screwed her lips to the side a little. "We've been a team for 7 years, we've gone on so many missions together, we've camped in so many forsaken places together, and you never once mentioned you had a brother," Tsunade said sharply. "I thought you trusted us, Mara-chan." "Oh, Su-chan, I do trust you guys, I just prefer keeping my private and professional life as separate as possible." "We're your team," the blonde muttered. "We're your friends." Orochimaru smiled in mild amusement and nudged the other teen's foot with her own. "Then why do you have Jiraiya researching on me? If we're friends like you say, you should be upfront and ask me any question you want answered, right?" She stood up sharply before the medic could give any clear response, and Tsunade followed suit immediately. "Just stay out of my business and you'll both be fine." She walked out of the apartment and the closing door sounded like a cannon to the Senju. The brief meeting between her and the snake girl only proved to be even more suspicious of her crush. Why was she being so secretive and protective about Minato? It was when Minato was a Genin and was being trained by Jiraiya did she get her answer. Orochimaru became more withdrawn, if that's even possible, and colder than ever towards her teammates, but she never neglected the blonde boy. Minato too was incredibly secretive about his relationship with Orochimaru, even though they were seen less and less together. The day it had been discovered that Orochimaru was behind the kidnappings and the murders going on in Konoha did Tsunade realize something about Minato, that he balanced her out and she balanced him out as well. He was the cushion that she could cry into any day, and she was his support from the very first day they had met. As she knelt down beside his broken body, ignoring the rain as it pelted down on them, so that she could stabilize him enough for transport back to Konoha after he had almost been torn to pieces by the now rogue snake sage, she instantly regretted trying to interfere in his and her teammates' lives all those years ago. Years passed and he was more withdrawn, more secretive, even to his girlfriend, Uzumaki Kushina, who just so happened to be her niece. Though only those close to him knew of his fervent search for his long-lost sister. He was still all smiles and laughs among his friends, but when he was alone she would observe a shadow that passed through his eyes and the disdain he held, for who? She didn't know. Kushina weathered the storm, and the love he had for her could never be compared to any other person, but he was just never the same again after Orochimaru had defected. Tsunade watched on, ever suspicious of when he would finally snap and perform evil like his sister. He died protecting Konoha, and now apparently his son, before anything else could happen. Flashback end. Naruto had the same look and feel as Minato, through and through, but the darkness in him was only darker and more sinister. Her dead sensei had said that Orochimaru had reached over to him and gave him his goggles, helping him with his eye problems greatly, as well as pushed him towards learning about the world. The thing was, the Sandaime, the Toad Sage, the Copy Ninja and the Cat Onbu were 100% sure that Orochimaru did not push Naruto towards performing all of the evil experiments and trading in drugs. It was a path he had chosen on his own. Orochimaru had not, as far as they knew, sent over training scrolls or jutsu scrolls to him to learn from. He had done it all on his own. Orochimaru had not given pointers to Naruto on how best to break into the most secure building in the entire village. He had done it himself. In his very countenance and composure she saw Minato, who was just as quiet and smooth when he was all business. Naruto and Minato were almost mirror images of themselves, only Naruto could be considered a version of Minato who had survived the Kyuubi attack and found his long-lost sister. A version of Minato who had gone much deeper into his inner darkness, and who just so happened to house the strongest tailed beast on the planet, who had connections far deeper than anything she could guess and who probably would make an exceptional civilian medic with his extensive knowledge of the human body, seeing as his chakra capacity was too high for him to control enough to perform medical ninjutsu. It was best if they did not poke him. If he had been able to steal the forbidden scroll when he had just graduated the academy, and was not part spider, then what was to say he was not able to sneak past Konoha's defenses, when he was part spider? The Senju grunted and turned to her desk. She then began to write a well-written letter to all of Konoha's allies that Uzumaki Naruto, Konoha's Jinchuriki and the son of the Yondaime Hokage, had defected and that he should be placed in their bingo books accordingly. It was standard procedure for those allied to Konoha. What they did with this information was up to them. Naruto, with his legs rooted into the ground and his arms like pincers, stabbed his arm senbone through a mountain ninja, spun around on his left leg and threw the ninja into two of his comrades. He leaned backwards from two sword strokes from two Kumo ninja and jammed his long senbone into the ground. The ninja raised their eyebrows at his unorthodox move, a human bridge, or the crab, so they weren't fast enough to raise their katana as Naruto's whole body blurred with speed, leaving just a senbone in the ground, as he spun like a tornado. Multiple wires shot from the deadly wind and pulled them in. Inside the deadly wind vortex was deadly purple smoke, which couldn't be seen from outside, which promptly paralyzed his opponents, allowing him to lop off their body parts and use them as projectiles for the smarter ninja who dodged the wires. Orochimaru sent a grin and a thumb up at his almost unstoppable move while her other arm was around Akumo Kanuichi's neck. She lifted the girl up and she was peppered with numerous katana strokes. When the girl seemed out of it, she dropped her and used her palms to catch a katana. She swung her left leg and it nailed on the side of the man's head. She ran headfirst into a small group of Kumo and mountain ninja. Naruto spun to a stop and got both of his feet back on the ground, and looked at the few ninja that remained, then at the three people he and his godmother had stolen from. This would go a lot faster if Aoki-chan was here, he said over his shoulder, and he shook his arms and purple chemicals dripped down to the tips. He spun on his feet, jumped over a punch, and with both of his legs on the attacker's head he forcefully brought his head down to meet the unforgiving ground. "This is a family trip, kid," Orochimaru said as she idly poked Akanuichi's neck and watched as her last opponent dropped down on the ground, dead. She placed her hands on her hips and watched Naruto's fight against his opponents, which would have ended faster if he was at least allowed to perform one single jutsu. Oh, alright, just one jutsu. The boy sent her a thumb up and allowed his long senbone to return into his launchers, which were hidden masterfully in his sleeves. He rolled his shoulders and slithered to the side away from an axe kick, bent backwards from an overhead kick and slipped under another ninja's sword slice. He flipped back one to get an accurate number of his attackers. He counted 4, 2 hand-to-hand specialists, 1 genjutsu user, who was almost useless against him, and 1 kenjutsu user. He ran with his head lowered to them and they ran at him. He flipped through 7 hand seals, dog, rat, dog, dragon, ram, monkey, bird, earth release, slick sand sinkhole. He skidded on his knees under a chop from one of the taijutsu users while at the same time his right hand grazed the ground. Immediately the ground bubbled and sucked in the ninja till it only remained their heads. He raised his right hand and a single 3.5-inch senbone slid out, clicking in place. He hovered over them ominously and his goggles glinted in the light as he looked down at them. Their screams reverberated all around as he finished them off. Orochimaru clapped her hands as Naruto idly kicked a decapitated head, nicely done. Now, what do you propose we do to these three? She looked at the three civilians that they had stolen from and they began sweating profusely. Naruto turned his head to them, and then from the corner of his vision he saw two pairs of eyes peek out of the barn they had dropped the horses in. He clenched his sharp teeth and painfully rolled his neck. It cracked loudly. I think we've done enough killing for the half hour. The girls had seen him kill enough. The woman pouted, "Aw, that's too bad." "Scram," she barked, and the three didn't need to be told twice. "Now let's go before someone else comes." She walked up to the boy and threw her arm over his shoulder as they walked off towards the back door of the hidden village. The boy stuck his hands in his pockets as he supported the sick woman, but he couldn't help but inhale deeply. "You stink of blood," he commented. She rolled her eyes. "Tell me something I don't know. Do you know how hard blood is to get out of these clothes?" She huffed childishly, "It's torture." "You obviously aren't using the right fabric softener," he said as they walked down the lonely road. If they had taken the crossroad behind the barn it would have led straight into main Kumagakure. They had agreed that this was close enough to the center. "Oh yeah, well what softener do you use, wise guy?" "How the heck should I know? My summons do my laundry." He shrugged and laughed when she poked his cheek with her black painted pointer fingernail. "Mind if I give them my laundry?" "I don't mind." She could easily give them her dirty clothes by just giving her snakes, who would in turn give his spiders. The only difference between the two summoning realms was the terrain, seeing as their spiders and snakes could be found in each realm. Naruto was at least glad that the snakes weren't holding grudges against his spiders for reducing their numbers a little during the Konoha invasion. Speaking of summons, has the White Snake Elder informed you of Sagi's development? The woman hummed in thought and nodded. He says that she already had high control of her sage chakra before she met him and that he was merely refining it. Do you want to start learning the sage arts? It would be nice if I could use the nature chakra in me for other stuff than keeping my Kyuubi chakra under check. It wasn't painful having that much chakra in him, his, Kyuubi's and nature chakra, and it wasn't painful having them increase from time to time, but since he had experimented in almost every aspect of the human and animal world, he had always wanted to know what would happen if he combined them all together or individually. He wasn't afraid of turning into a rock from an overload of nature chakra since he was part spider, but his movements would slow down exponentially if he took in too much. Be patient, young grasshopper. Let's focus on your Fuin jutsu, ninjutsu and summon control first. When you're a level 6.5 and you have more fluidity in your hand seals, we can move to sage training. It might have sounded absurd, but the woman was a perfectionist. In her eyes Naruto could go even faster with his hand seals, which were in fact considerably faster than most she had seen. And he could be even more efficient in his hand-to-hand combat. Then she wanted to increase his telepathic control over his spiders so that when they moved they would truly be an extension of his body. Whatever you say, Mara-chan, he sighed tiredly with his shoulders sagged. Exactly, she chirped and poked his cheek again. Now let's talk about chakra. He groaned and said, but I already know about chakra. I know you do, but did you know that you can perform a fire release, great fireball with just a drop of your chakra? Or that you can compact your chakra together so tightly that you can manifest it physically in any form you want, especially with the amount of chakra you have. Or even that you can relax all the kinks in your body by circling chakra through your body? No. Of course you didn't, my adorable little godson. She pinched his cheek and began the lecture as they steadily progressed to Uzishio. Oh. Naruto is a what? Sakura Haruna asked, more like yelled, her longtime friend, Ino Yamanaka. A rogue ninja, the blonde girl said to her friend. They were seated in a cafe on the stools by the counter. The blonde heiress smiled sadly at her friend. I'm sorry you had to hear that. Forehead, she placed her hand on the pink-haired girl's shoulder and anticipated the tears that slowly began to pour out of her gem-green eyes. But why? What did he do? She clasped her hands over her heart as more tears fell from her eyes. This must be a mistake. Ino had arrived at her house that morning and had opted to take her out for a cup of tea and a business. It was hours after the breakfast rush, so the cafe was relatively empty besides a few customers speckled around and two waitresses that moved around, cleaning the smaller tables. Sakura, my dad said he was doing bad things and selling bad things to bad people. She rubbed her shoulder. Bad things like what? The girl blubbered. He experimented on people. He sold drugs and he associated with criminals. Ino's heart broke at the state her best friend was in. She had just learnt that her crush, one she had gotten after experiencing Naruto's good manners and pleasant attitude, was one of the leading drug producers in the world. He must have had a good reason for doing it. The girl looked at Ino frantically. I mean, you know Naruto, the quiet, nice, clean, polite, smiling, handsome Naruto. The one we knew in the academy, the one that helped us out when we needed it. The real Naruto. He couldn't, She covered her eyes with her hands. Ino smiled at the girl sympathetically. My dad also said that he was one of the best ninjas in Konoha and that he never complained if he was given a task, no matter how hard it was. Sakura wasn't the only person that had a crush on Naruto, nor was she the only person attracted to him. There were a few girls in their former class that liked him, a few above and few below, and even a few that were already Jinan. It was why the news of Naruto's defection was a solemn affair all over Konoha. Even if he was first known as the Kyuubi Kid, no one expected him to be so deep in his darkness. Ino herself felt something for the rogue Uzumaki. She wasn't sure what it was, but she felt something. Then suddenly Sakura looked at her with green fire burning in her eyes. I have questions. Shoot, the Yamanaka said as she leaned back in surprise. Not for you, for Naruto-kun. She hopped off her chair and Ino looked at her like she had lost her mind. I have questions for Naruto and I'm going to have them answered. Forehead, I'm not sure you paid attention to what I said. Naruto went rogue and no one knows where the heck he is. Don't tell me you're going rogue too. Sakura rolled her eyes and dragged the thin girl out of the cafe. Of course not, but I'm not giving up on Naruto-kun. He must have had a good reason for doing those things. So where are we going? They were now walking hurriedly through the upper-class residential buildings and Ino was still trying to get her feet under her. It was much too early for all this hurrying. To Tsunade-sensei, she answered shortly. To do what? If we want to track, capture and bring back Naruto, we need the right tools, right? Wait. I never said I wanted to. Yes you did. Now, we need more training. I never agreed to this. Ino began to frantically try and pry off the girl's iron grip on her wrist. Extra training with the Hokage was akin to suicide by chakra control exercises. Why don't you meet your sensei? I'm sure he'd like to give extra lessons. I can meet Kakashi sensei on my team's next team training. Tsunade sensei is always busy and we're free now, so. She nudged into the Hokage Tower's front door and stomped up the stairs. Ino still tried to remove Sakura's hand. Please. Sensei. The Haruno yelled as she got in front of the Hokage's office. She ignored Shizune, who had hastily sat up from the desk after a quick nap. Sakura, please. The blonde girl shouted, but it was too late. They were already in the office and Tsunade was glaring at them. What? Her head was throbbing from all the sake she had chugged down last night. We want more training. Today's your free day. We don't mind. Speak for yourself. Mind I ask why? Tsunade said with a raised eyebrow. She was gently rubbing her forehead, and yes, speak for yourself. She looked at Ino briefly before she corrected herself. I want to bring Naruto-kun back, no matter what it takes. Why this? Why today? Why me? She sighed and thought, if I agree to give you more training, are you ready to face him if you do manage to find him? Hi, sensei. Even if he wants to kill you. Even if he wants to kill me. Ooh. There was another deeper, more personal reason Aoki-chan wasn't allowed to accompany Naruto and Orochimaru on their training trip, even though the Ronin had pledged her life to protect Naruto. It was because Orochimaru may die from her sickness during the training journey and she wanted her burial to be a family affair. She didn't tell Naruto about her burial, but she suspected he already knew. She had already handed all of Oto Agakure to Kabuto, who was there with the female samurai, and all of her research. Most of her money and physical possessions were passed on to Naruto, even though she had yet to hand the scroll where it was sealed into him. This didn't mean that she had left Kabuto, Kimimaro and the Sound Four with just a village full of people. They had gotten a substantial amount of money to maintain Oto and keep it running long enough for them to begin making their own money, through whatever means. She didn't care. Naruto had examined her personally when he had reached Oto, by her request, and he had confirmed what she had tested herself, that the cancer had accelerated from the stress and hectic atmosphere of killing her former sensei. You see, even though her cancer of the heart was rare, if not never seen before, it grew and expanded based on the increase of adrenaline in the body or rapid increase in the heart rate. The cancer reduced the structural integrity of the walls of the heart, thinned out the blood that passed through it and weakened the muscles that this blood touched, which technically meant that it was cancer of the blood, but it remained that it originated from her heart and primarily stayed in the heart, only passing along toxins into the blood it touched. This didn't mean that Orochimaru had to refrain from fighting or overthinking. Rather, the Sannin had mastered the wonderful art of keeping her head in a fight, as seen in their fight with the Kumo and Mountain Ninja. The fact still remained that she only had a year, maybe a year and a half, left before the cancer would fully take over her heart. The result of this would be that her heart would look and act like a pillowcase with 3 compartments. She's part snake, it wouldn't have the strength to keep pumping blood through her body and she would become so immensely weak because of this she would die in approximately half an hour later. Orochimera turned her head to the side and smiled gently at her godson. He wasn't the little boy that had started the academy that was barely up to her shoulder. Now he was a strong, smart and skilled ninja that was a little bit taller than her. He looked at her from the corner of his eyes and smiled back a little. His left arm reached around her own shoulder. "I've got an idea on how we're going to pass that wall," he said to her as the duo stopped on a hill far away from the wall that covered the ocean leading to Uzishio. They were more like a dot on the horizon as they observed the dozens of ninja patrolling in front of the wall, but it has to do with a few ninjutsu. The woman squinted her eyes as she too watched the rotation of guards. "Why not with taijutsu? We both know I'm not ready to face that many ninja, Mara-chan." "Okay, what do you have in mind?" 10 minutes later. A war cry sounded and hundreds of Narutos and Orochimaras ran down from the hills. It was like watching a tidal wave of blonde and black rushing towards them. "Prepare yourselves." Seemingly the captain of the wall guards yelled and he drew his tanto, "Protect the wall." He could clearly see that each blonde boy had 2 1-inch senbon in each hand and each black-haired woman had standard issue kunai in each hand. Then the tidal wave clashed against the Kumo ninja, who were fewer in number than the clones but more powerful, and jutsu flew from one side to the other. As the chaos ensued, Naruto, with a laughing Orochimera, ran underground through the mini-war. As they slid under the wall they ran full tilt through the beach and towards the ocean. All that remained was if the whirlpool recognized Naruto as an Uzumaki and Orochimera as his godmother. Naruto, running at low jounin, walked on the water with blazing speed while he firmly grasped the snake Sanin's left hand in his right. It was instinctive, but Naruto knew that he needed to show proof he was part Uzumaki. He bit his hand, between his index and thumb, and clenched his fist strongly as he threw his bloodied fist forward in an arc just as a white and black killer whale jumped out of the water with its mouth wide open. On contact with the boy's blood it disappeared in a poof of smoke and he, with his close relative, were summarily sucked into the water violently. Oh 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 ooh. Midnight. Kanahagakure no Sato. Monkey and Mantis reporting for the midnight shift. Ibiki-sama, 2 masked Onbu females said formally as they saluted sharply to the head of the I&T department, Ibiki Morino. The bandana-wearing man looked at the 2 unfamiliar teens with suspicion before he looked at the guard rotation list on his desk. The suspicion lightened when he saw their names. "You're late," he grunted as he stood up. He walked past through the door and closed it after them. "We're sorry, sir," Monkey muttered. "Whatever, don't let it happen again." They walked down a corridor where dozens of cells were located. The prisoners were buzzing with murmuring after him until the man barked, "Shut it, dirtbags." Silence fell like a bag of rocks thrown from heaven by a kami. "Good. Now you two, the guard rotation roster say that you two are to watch over cell level 5, the place where drug lords and drug peddlers were contained." They walked up 3 flights of stairs and stopped before another long corridor of prison cells that led down deep into the darkness. They're mostly pansy civilians that walked on the wrong edge of the law, so they shouldn't be too much trouble. But just in case anything comes up, Hokage-sama herself has authorized deadly force to be used to subdue them. Make sure you don't kill them though. He stopped in front of cells number 58 and peered into the cell. There were 4 men who were idly laying on their separate bunk beds. They seemed asleep except a glasses-wearing man that was reading a manga. Then Ibiki looked into the cell directly opposite and saw 2 females playing chess and one of them knitting a scarf. She looked to be in her early 20s. "Lights out in 10, you pieces of horse shit." "Sure," a girl said idly as she moved her knight to knock down her other opponent's king. "I win. Again. This is no fun when you keep winning. Tomorrow let's do something I want." The loser sulked as she flopped onto her back. The winner shrugged and nodded. "Did you girls hear me? I said lights out on 10. The special jounin grunted and clenched his fists. "And I said sure, don't get your knickers in a bunch," the winner said as she rolled onto her back and launched up, landing in a perfectly acrobatic stand. She climbed to the top bunk and relaxed. The other girls too went to their beds. "Good." Then he faced the 2 Onbu in charge of watching the level. "Watch these 7 especially. They work for that drug lord, Kitsugami Gumo, and their heads are as thick as walnuts but they'll crack soon." He peered into the female's cell and a twisted, demented smirk crossed his hard face. "I just know it." "Yes sir," the female ninja said sharply. "I'm off to run a midnight errand. I'll check in an hour or so," he said and flippantly waved over his shoulder as he went down the long flight of stairs and out of the building. For the first 5 minutes the duo marched up and down the corridor, but Monkey spied the man actually leave the building. She walked back to cell number 58 and pulled off her mask to reveal a girl in her late teens with blue hair and a black overhanging bang. The girl's brown eyes stared into the dark cell as she pulled out a flashlight from her pocket and clicked it on. "Guys? You awake?" She heard the men snort awake and grumble. "Mama?" A buff man who laid on the lower bunk muttered. "Shut up, idiot," The man that had been reading the manga growled as he stomped his foot, shaking the bunk. "What do you want?" "Kitsugami-sama sent us to break you out," she whispered and bent down to the lock, frowning sharply when she saw that it was a level 8 seal. "Yo sis, help me out with this." Mantis knelt down by the seal and removed her own mask to show a blue-haired girl that had her own bang being held up neatly by a black clip. "Go keep watch, we don't know if those girls we knocked out are awake yet," she whispered back, and the girl nodded while Jay, the girl with the clip, whipped out a brush and began drawing on the seal. Naruto had allowed them limited connection with his informant in the INT so that they would know where his workers were being held and when they could strike. They were able to knock out the Chunin Onbu that were assigned to the prison section of the INT and take their identities. "I thought Kitsugami-sama was going to murder us in here," the girl that was knitting whispered but bit her bottom lip in excitement. "I knew he was a good guy, didn't I tell you, it pays to be loyal," was part of what the workers in the KDC were told after their application to Naruto's corporation was accepted. "Of course he wouldn't kill you, what made you think he would?" Jay muttered as she added a final swipe to the locking seal. The door clicked open and she rushed to open the female's prison cell. "Well, I never lost faith in Kitsugami-sama," the buff mama's boy grunted as he stepped out of his cell with the other 3 men. "So how are we going to break out of this building?" "Just leave that to us," Ray, the twin without a hair clip, assured. They were the only ones in the criminal underworld hit woman squad that had been sent. This meant that they didn't have reinforcements but they had serious ninja training. "How long can you hold your breaths?" she asked as the cell door for the female's prison swung open. Jay slipped her painting brush into her sleeve and fixed on the stolen Onbu mask, as with her sister. "Our average is 3 minutes, the man that read manga said, quicker than the female chess whiz. As funny as it sounded, it was part of the requirements to work in the KDC, to be able to hold their breaths, among other variety of things. These were mainly requirements for civilian workers who had little to no fighting experience, like these men and women Ray and Jay were breaking out. "We can work with that," Jay said while she bustled to the window far down the opposite side of the corridor. She began working on the seals there as well, a locking seal as well, but one of a lower level since the Hokage didn't expect there to be ninja in her force that would help break out the prisoners, or even a level 8 Fuin Jutsu user who could break a level 8 locking seal, which just so happened to be the seals on each cell. As she sent a thumb up to her sister, Ray handed gas masks to each civilian KDC worker to wear and rolled a long sealing scroll on the ground. There were 7 seal spirals on the paper. "Chose a seal and step on it, hurry." Not even wanting to ask what they wanted to do, the men and women stepped on the seals and were swallowed up in a vortex of white air. The specialized hit woman rolled up the scroll and hefted it onto her shoulder, ignoring the now added weight as she ran quickly to the window. Her unrecognized Fuin Jutsu master twin sister grit her teeth and swung her leg at the bars that lined the window. It caved in and exploded outwards, allowing her sealing scroll carrying twin to leap out. She followed her as well. The alarms blared after them as they disappeared into the deadly forest that surrounded the above-ground prison part of the T&I. Most people assumed that Jiraiya the Toad Sage was the highest one could get in Fuin Jutsu. No one wanted to search in the darkness that was the criminal underworld for who was almost as good as him, which was why Jay the Fuin Jutsu mistress was among the greatly kept secrets in the hit woman squad, and she wanted to keep it that way. The twins had accepted to work part-time under Naruto while still juggling their duties in the hit woman squad. This meant that they were among the few A ranks in his payroll that he had given the responsibility of investigating any discrepancy in his business, served as his personal enforcers and maintained general order in each branch. In light of their current situation, they were the ones appointed by Naruto to find out who had ratted out one of their warehouse supply locations. Both girls touched down on the ground onto the roof of an average-looking house and flipped into the chimney. They opened their legs and placed their palms on the wall to slow down their descent until they rolled out of the empty fireplace into an equally empty room. The wallpaper was a soft blue, but it was devoid of furniture or appliances, like it was still up for sale. Ray threw open the special storage seal and muttered, "Unseal." The civilians were pushed out and skidded on the floor in a tangle of limbs. "Sorry about that, I'm still working out the bugs," Jay said in a quiet but bubbly voice so that the house's neighbors wouldn't hear them. "We just have some questions before we can drop you off in the Wave Branch warehouse. From there you will work until Kitsugami-sama sends word that another warehouse in the country has been set up." She motioned for them to relax while she sat down cross-legged on the ground. Ray stood by the window to keep watch, allowing her gentle-natured sister to take charge of the allied civilian interrogation. "First, do you suspect any former worker in your branch for revealing warehouse your location?" The workers looked at each other. It wasn't rare to hear that a worker would randomly stop working in a branch but would later hear from their foreman that they had been shifted to another country or warehouse to work, and return after a few weeks. They didn't think that these people were murdered or used for experiments since they had never done anything wrong, plus their families never raised any problems. The people that were temporarily transferred were usually because of a specific specialization and a vacancy due to a worker calling in sick. Though despite all this they did find one situation suspicious. Well. The girl that had been knitting started off and looked at her hesitantly. I swear on my name and on Kitsugami-sama's honor that nothing would happen to any of you and neither of your names would be written down anywhere, Jay said with her hands telling her to calm down. Her soft brown eyes still reflected on the limited lights shining in from the street lights. Usagi Minamoto, the girl continued, he kept asking our foreman questions. It's true, when he didn't get answers from me the ninja stationed to our warehouse tracked his movements on his breaks, the foreman, the man that had been reading manga continued. The KDC workers worked in rotations, where they were allowed to travel underground back to their hometowns/villages. This allowed them to stay with their families and friends, but they had signed waivers that allowed the highly ranked ninja station to their warehouses to regularly keep track of their movements. The Usagi that the girl had mentioned just thought he was smarter than the ninja, which was his first mistake. His second mistake was trying to get information out of Kitsugami's friends in the lower rungs of the Konoha criminal underworld. The warehouses did not create their supply of drugs, they merely restocked their storage and supplied them to buyers. If they were to ever change the makeup of a drug, it was by a qualified worker who changed the drug into its finished form. Since the main warehouse had been compromised, Naruto had moved his operations to Hidden Sound temporarily until his return. In Sound, Kabuto and a few blood clones worked to keep up production, so that the store of drugs in the different warehouses would not reach zero or even less than a few hundred packets per drug. Each worker that had the knowledge to change these drugs, note, not create them, were given special tattoos on their inner upper arm. So, when Usagi went about, claiming that he was one of these special people under the KDC and that he had been personally sent by Kitsugami himself to collect every document he had with his many friends, alarm bells rung in their minds. They didn't supply these documents, insisting on seeing the special seal. The chief foreman, the man in charge of sharing the supply of drugs from the main warehouse to every single warehouse all over the continent, had on his palm before these delicate documents could be shared. One of Naruto's friends, Torune Abumi, a crime lord, whom he had bailed from Uchiha prison containment once upon a time, had contacted Kitsugami, I'll be calling Naruto this since his workers still don't know his identity yet, to tell him that a person that didn't give his name but told him that he worked in the KDC had asked to see a document on him about when Kitsugami had helped locate his younger sister when she had been kidnapped. Aoki-chan was the person that had spoken to him after he had gotten his message, and he replied readily whatever she needed to hear, seeing as he recognized her as his bodyguard. It was too late to do anything of significance. The warehouse had been raided and the ninja station there had been killed on duty. The ninja that protected the warehouses were missing ninja, so Kitsugami wasn't obligated to send consolation funds to his family, even though the man didn't have any. Though Naruto did invest a few hundred ryu into adding 2 more A-rank missing ninja to each warehouse and increased the security seals around them. Jay scratched her chin and nodded in thought. My sister and I were posted at the Fire Country Capital Branch warehouse, so we don't really know him, but I'm sure we can have Kitsugami-sama send us any information on him. It shouldn't come as a surprise that each worker was registered to his corporation. Would any of you be able to identify him if you see him? They nodded. He's got this small circular scar on his cheek, the buff man contributed. Thank you for your help, guys, we really appreciate it. The girl smiled and placed her hand on her knees, as if on cue. Ray walked to the fireplace and removed the logs, then she slid her hands past a small opening in the floorboards and pulled back. She removed 5 floorboards to reveal a stairwell winding downwards. She pushed the back of the fireplace and it lifted up to give more room for their heads. Jay pointed at the opening over her shoulder, that leads to a junction in the ground that separates into 5 directions. There will be signs set up to direct you, so when you see the sign for Wave Country you follow it. I'm sure you're already familiar with using the KDC underground tunnel. Yeah, thank you, Kanuichi-san, the foreman said with a bow as he stood up. Don't thank me, thank Kitsugami-sama, he was the one that wanted to break you out for not cracking, Ray said as she dusted her hands. She motioned for them to leave while gently making sure they didn't hit their foreheads. Tell the foreman of Wave to send a switch message when you get there. A switch message was an alternate form of the body switch seal where the person that wanted to send the letter would alert the location by dropping blood into the seal. The seals would glow and the other location had 10 minutes to open access, or else the seal wouldn't allow the letter to be sent. It only worked with small inanimate objects. Hi, the last worker said before he descended down into the well-lit underground tunnel. Ray and Jay watched them disappear before the less playful twin replaced the fireplace floorboard and the dry logs. The twins took their time to sit down in the middle of the empty home with their legs crossed facing each other. It was the twin without the hairclip that spoke first. At least now we have a name to go with. Should we wait for Kitsugami-sama to send us info on him, or should we go ahead? He said we should kill him and kill him soon. "So I think we should go ahead," Ray replied. "Besides, we've already gotten his name, that's all we need." The sinister smirk on her face reflected off her twin's face. "Oh oh 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 ooh." Naruto groaned quietly as he opened his eyes, his head throbbed softly and his throat was parched. He wiggled his wrists, then his toes, legs, arms and neck. He noticed, as he sat up, that he was in a cave with a single beam of sunlight shining down on him from an opening on the roof. He looked around and rushed without hesitation when he saw his godmother lying on her face 7 feet away from him. The woman groaned as he turned her onto her back and he sighed in relief when his preliminary search of her vitals through his spider eyes showed that she was merely winded. He shook his head silently when he saw the look she sent him. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." It wasn't telepathic communication. It was the quick but strong connection they had developed the moment they had stayed up all night chatting all the way back in Konoha. He helped her up and laughed to himself when she pushed him away, puffing out her chest proudly. He placed his goggles on his forehead when he noticed that they couldn't cut through the darkness and spread his extended spider senses, or better put spider awareness. 3 spiny spider legs extended out from the small shadow cast below him as the world blinked into black and white. These legs stretched around, poking and prodding the wall like a blind man, but they weren't able to pass through the cave walls for some weird reason. The boy screwed his lips to the side in irritation and focused more chakra into the eyes. His vulpine red and black pupils pulsed and dilated to show his concentration as 4 more shadow legs shot out from his shadow and spread around him. He smirked slightly when he found the cave opening, and from what he could tell it led through a tunnel that was about 30 feet long before it exited outside. Again his spider awareness was disrupted and shut off. The woman looked at him with a curiously raised eyebrow. "What's wrong?" "This cave is seriously messing up my senses," he replied and slapped his palms together into the ram hand seal to fully concentrate his chakra to all of his spider senses, his nose dots included, but his godmother placed her hands on his shoulder and shook her head. "You're not yet ready for that, you may get a sensory overload. That's deadly, you know." "You're right, there's an exit right ahead." "Let's go." Naruto nodded and walked ahead while he kept his natural senses, the ones he had before he became part spider, vigilant. Just before they could be bathed in sunlight, the fox part of Naruto deeply inhaled and he could only describe the smell in one word. Nature. They walked out to behold a magnificent waterfall cascading down below the cave mouth, flowing downstream and spreading around till it disappeared from sight. Trees littered before the waterfall and the various animals that were sustained by the water and the trees, as well as a few animals that were sustained by the meat from the herbivores. These animals, ranging from measly field mice to black panthers, roamed around. There was a grassy field that stretched out behind the forest around the waterfall where lush green grass grew till they were waist height. But what caught most of their attention was the view beyond the grass field. There were many crumbling buildings organized in neat rows, as well as a tall tower, much taller than the houses, that sat in the very middle of these houses with a large red spiral painted on the front, although it cracked and broke apart from age and neglect. Even though the war that had destroyed the great city had long since ended and the invaders had been pushed out by the defenses after the very last Uzumaki was killed, Uzushio Gakure no Sato looked well maintained, more or less. The duo could guess that the view of the city was just a small portion of the island country. They could also guess that the whirlpools still raged and the Uzumaki aquatic summons went back to guarding the island. Naruto closed his eyes and took in a deep breath, anticipating all the secrets he was going to discover and all he was going to learn on his training with his godmother. He looked at his godmother when she clasped her hand on his shoulder. "I hope you know that you're going to start making a buttload of shadow clones starting tomorrow." She wanted him to learn everything she could offer and so much more so that they could leave and travel the elemental nations together for the very last time. Time was at the essence. "I'm up for anything you can throw at me, old lady." The woman laughed evilly at his jab on her age. "Oh, we are going to have so much fun." A grin stretched across her face and Naruto actually swallowed thickly at the sight. She threw her arm over his shoulder as they began their steady walk down the stairs at the side of the cave on the waterfall. The training Orochimaru wanted to put Naruto under would have broken any man, maybe even killed them, but, within herself, she knew that Naruto could take it. The next day was going to be the beginning of hell for the Uzumaki. A chill went down Naruto's spine as Orochimaru opened her mouth and cackled. Chapter 6. A year and 2 months later. Konohagakure Graveyard. Konohagakure no Sato. Silver senbone launchers glinted on the ground and right next to them was a black backpack under a neatly folded gray and red short-sleeved hoodie. There was also a fox onbu mask that was made into a full-headed ski mask to cover the user's hair. 10 feet away from the items a person shrouded by darkness stood and looked down at a freshly dug grave. In his right hand was a shovel that stuck out of the ground. The moon flitted over into the clearing to reveal that the person had thin blonde and a face so pale it almost shone under the moonlight. He was in ankle-length black pants and a short-sleeved gray shirt that had a thick black stripe going down from the neck to the bottom. His uncombed blonde hair shifted a little under the breeze to reveal 4 dots on his forehead, going a little further down to show he had 2 dots on each side of the bridge of his nose. A pair of black goggles hung on his neck as his vulpine red and black eyes looked down at the grave he dug. His face was clean of any visible emotion. Human life was very fragile. He now finally understood the pain of loss. He now understood the reason why the Konoha ninjas were so appalled to hear of his shadow activities and why they had initially been adamant to bring him to justice. It wasn't that he didn't know that kidnapping and murdering were evil, but rather he had only seen it from the selfish businessman's point of view. He was ending a life to make profit and to better understand the human anatomy. It was a selfish reality now, realizing that all the years he had spent breaking families, even though they were mostly unrecognized members of the society. Naruto swallowed slightly as he looked up from the grave to the headstone he had crafted by himself, a smooth rectangle with twin snakes winding up the sides. The name written on it was Orochimaru of the Sannin. Under the neat name was cursive writing, an epitaph, which read, "Only time will tell how we are remembered," with the symbol for the snake and spider clan chiseled in. The woman had insisted that when she was finally gone that he shouldn't cry, but he couldn't help but a few stray tears slip out of his eyes. He wasn't going to experiment on anyone anymore. Not, unless he had to do it. The 14-and-a-half-year-old boy cracked his neck and grits his teeth as he looked at the graves in the main graveyard. The notable ones were the 4 that sat before the multitude behind them. To the far right his father's name glowed a little under the moon. Even though she had requested to be buried next to him, it was as close as he could get without Konoha raising alarms. Naruto turned around and without looking he sealed the shovel into his left bicep as he began putting on his hoodie. He fixed on his goggles and slipped the fox mask over his head. He looked over his shoulder at the grave as he clipped his launchers onto his forearms. He commanded a small senbone to push out a little from one of the 5 nozzles. He pricked his finger and muttered, "Summoning jutsu, smoke spider snakes." A poof in front of him and 5 gray snakes and 5 spiders appeared. "Protect her with your lives," he said to them, and they mutely nodded as they melted into the ground around the grave. He began walking forward as he whipped out a curved black forearm protector and pushed it onto his left silver launcher. It clicked to show that it was securely on, and he did so with the other launcher so that only a single small silver nozzle poked out a little. The blond boy turned to the grave one last time and bowed to his godmother before his whole body scattered into hundreds of spiders, skittering quickly into the cover of the darkness of the woods that surrounded the lone grave. Oh 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 ooh. The sound of a horse galloping through the grassy plains of Grass Country's countryside could be heard. The rider squinted her eyes as the wind whipped around her. She was a black-haired lady with a delicate yet firm beauty. She wore a blaringly white short-sleeved midriff shirt with a long-sleeved mesh armor shirt underneath. She also had black knee-length shorts and white tights underneath that. Wrapped around her right upper bicep was a red cloth with a black kanji for spider written on it. There was a silver and wooden bow that was crossed over her body with a full quiver of arrows strapped onto her back, and the last notable thing she had was a sheathed katana strapped to her hip. The grassy plain seemed to never end before she saw who she had been looking for, lying on his back with a gleaming long sword jammed into the ground next to his head, his backpack lying next to his right leg. He had his fingers weaved together over his belly and a straw on his lips. His red eyes looked on as her horse screeched to a halt. "Whoa!" she shouted and pulled back the reins. The horse cantered forward shortly before he stopped. The lady leapt off her horse swiftly and rushed towards her boss, Naruto. She slid on her tights-protected knees on the soft, lush grass and came to a stop beside him. I'm fine," he said quickly just as she grabbed his face and looked over him critically. "I'm fine, Aoki-chan," he said as he patted her hand as he sat up. "Nice horse," he muttered to her as he looked at the white horse she had been riding on. "Kimimaro-san was kind enough to give him to me as a parting gift," she said as she sat down beside him. They were silent for a few minutes before she spoke again. "I missed you." Speaking with a blood clone wasn't as good as speaking to the real person anyways. The corners of his lips quirked up slightly at that and he replied, "I missed you too." So where now? They were both rogue warriors and they were both cast off from their families, orphans who had no place to call home. The boy shrugged and looked at the fox mask in his hands. His goggles was around his neck again, and said, "I don't know. Mara-chan and I were everywhere but not at the same time." "What do you mean?" "We went to every country on the continent, but we couldn't stay long because she had little time left. I want to experience these places again, nice or not." He looked at her and smiled widely with his eyes closed. His serrated teeth flashed a little under the sun. "I want to have an adventure. And I will be by your side through them all," she said as she hit her left chest her right fist and held it there for half a minute. There was a part of her that Naruto openly referred to her as her samurai half, where they would keep their oaths and pledges to the death. even if it went against their sense of morality and pride. She had pledged her life to him a long while ago and he was sure she had forgotten about it, but apparently she hadn't. Though what she had with Naruto, her relationship with him, was special on a whole new level. Before he had gone with Orochimaru, they were akin to best friends. She didn't need to have a reason to protect him with her life, but the fact that he cared for her when she was at her lowest was reason enough, even though he had initially threatened to watch her die if she didn't come to work for her. "Excellent, but I have to warn you about something," he said as he got up and put his mask into his bag. He pulled out the kusanagi, a weapon Orochimaru had passed on to him, and, like magic, he pushed it into his bag, but it didn't tear when the handle disappeared inside. The young lady watched him in her kneeling position as he shouldered his bag on and adjusted his goggles over his eyes. "Yes? We are both wanted by the various laws of our countries, but, with all due respect, I'm more wanted." She furrowed her eyebrows and cocked her head to the side in confusion. She was the highest-ranking Ronin from Iron Country with the highest bounty. If anything, her boss should be just a little bit above her on the wanted radar. He continued, "Mara-chan told me that my tailed beast, Kyubi no Kitsune, is being sought after by an S-rank rogue organization called the Akatsuki for some crazy take-over the world plan. The point is, we may be randomly attacked by S-rank ninja in red clouds. Are you ready to handle that with me?" She stood up and nodded. "Until my dying breath, Naruto." He smiled slightly and raised his right fist to her. She bumped it and they both nodded. As her boss was traveling around with his family relative, she had not been idle. She had made sure that her swordsmanship was as sharp as ever, as well as practiced extensively with her bow. She occasionally went on missions with Auto Ninja, with the hope that she would cross by Naruto, as well as to make money outside of the KDC. The other thing she had been doing was traveling alone to the branches of the KDC within reach to make sure things were still running smoothly after their CEO's true identity had been revealed to the continent. Most of the workers in the warehouse branches in Iwa and Kumo had quit after hearing that Naruto was the son of the Yondaime and the bloody Uzumaki princess. She acted in his stead, by his request, and made sure that when all the noise of his identity had cooled down they were never rehired. The identity didn't shake too much foundation off Naruto's connections with the underworld, seeing as he had made a great first impression with them and his influence had only increased exponentially. Now, Naruto was on the S-rank section of the Iwagakure bingo book, considering his skills and his organization. Iwa were adamant to have his KDC uprooted and burnt to ashes, but some of the citizens of Earth Country thought differently and still patronized him merely for his products. Aoki-chan, who had personal control over the Kitsugami money storage, had spread her boss's influence wherever she went by helping to fund various legal and illegal shops. Naruto knew of all she had been doing with respect to his company, since she had been communicating with his spider summons, and he approved. It was always nice to have influence in various countries, whether it was small or large. They walked back to the pathway that led directly to Grass Village, in Grass Country, and, strangely enough, he slapped the horse's butt, frightening the creature, and they watched it gallop into the distance. He smiled at his friend. "It's healthier to walk." She shrugged and walked beside him down the path until he abruptly stopped as the wind picked up. Aoki-chan quickly unsheathed her katana and sparks fell down as it clashed against a tri-pronged scythe. The thrown weapon was pulled back, showing that it had a chain connected to it, and returned to the hand of the maniacal Jashinist. Kakuzu looked at them from beside his partner. Both of their Akatsuki cloaks fluttered in the wind, which had slowed down a little. "Guess we caught up to these little shitheads in time, huh, Kakuzu?" Hidan tittered as a crazy laugh escaped his lips. "I thought Leader Sama said they were meant to be dangerous." "They are," Kakuzu muttered under his breath to himself. He knew little to nothing about both of them. This included their skills, abilities, or even jutsu list. Even though Pain trusted them to be able to rush head first into the darkness when it came to fighting mysterious opponents, fully trusting their immortality, he was a little cautious to face them. His reason? Aoki-chan had been personally trained by one of the strongest samurai in Iron Country history and had been appointed by this samurai to become the next leader of Iron Country, making her one of the strongest samurai in history as well, which was no small feat. He could only assume that she wasn't placed as an S-rank Ronin because of some sense of loyalty the new leader of Iron Country had to her. This information alone had cost him an arm, a leg and a kidney to attain. House servants of the ruling samurai family were very tight-lipped. Uzumaki Naruto, though, had been personally trained by the mad, rogue snake Sanin herself, who just so happened to be his godmother, and even before that he had been a highly ranked and much sought-after ninja in Konoha. As a shinobi of the leaf, he had made a name for himself as an unbeatable opponent, whether it came to missions or battles. Outside of Konoha, as a rogue ninja, he had been sighted traveling with Orochimaru, being challenged by various ninja and being summarily destroyed at his hands. Make no mistake, Kakuzu, the man that had faced off against the Shodaime Hokage and lived, was not afraid of these teenagers, rather he was thinking of how his reputation would be boosted when the world learnt that he, and Hidan, were, the first people, to ever defeat them in combat. He subtly began to prepare to release his masks as Naruto remained unafraid. Aoki-chan had her lethally sharp sword crossed over her chest and the sheath in a reverse grip in her left hand. The spider summoner took both of them in and grinned. Well, look who we have here. I actually thought Kisame and Itachi were the ones coming for me. Sorry to disappoint you, but they were busy with our assignment, Kakuzu said. Pain had anticipated that Orochimaru would have told Naruto of his captured team, so he merely switched the responsibilities. Itachi and Kisame were in Waterfall to capture the 7 tails while Kakuzu and Hidan were to capture the 9 tails. The zombie brothers didn't care who they had to capture, they were both in it for some sort of glory. Hidan wanted the glory from the battle and Kakuzu wanted the money from Naruto's extremely well sought after silver senbone launchers, spider summon and his goggles. Those alone totaled to about 3 million ryu. And who the fuck do you think you are to not expect us, chicken dick? Hidan yelled. Naruto slightly glared at the priest but looked back at Kakuzu. I want to know how I'll fare against an opponent and you will be the perfect training dummy. His long senbone jutted out of his launchers and he got into his stance. He wanted to use his default number of legs first before he adjusted based on how difficult they were. You two won't be leaving here alive. You can try, Kakuzu said with an amused snort. Take Hidan, I'll have Kakuzu. Don't let him cut you, understood? Yes sir, she replied. Both of them blazed over towards their targets and the zombie brothers too ran full tilt towards the 2 other missing ninjas. Oh. Life used to be easier when it was just them. They didn't have to worry about anything other than accomplishing their goal. That was before he came into the picture. This was the thought of Kabuto Yakashi as he looked at a picture of him and his former mistress, Orochimaru of the Sannin. The woman was holding a clipboard and she was using her pen to poke a dark green mutated Venus flytrap, while he was sending a discreet thumb up as he watched her. All they ever spoke about was on reaching her ambition and he didn't mind because he was totally devoted to her, but then her godson entered her mind and she changed. She started lessening how she experimented on people. She was now only mildly cold to everyone and her bloodlust reduced fractionally. When Naruto had graduated out of the academy and became a special jounin, straight away she had dropped their original ambition and started reading books on how to be a proper role model and parent. He assumed it was to Naruto. She had purposely disregarded her own health to increase the skills of her godson. They had been searching for a way to kill her cancer and grant her immortality, then she stopped to take care of her independent godson. He couldn't go against his mistress so he went with it, but when her cancer had taken over half of her heart he interjected, for a brief moment, and begged her to be selfish once again. The woman had only looked him in the eyes with so much hate and disgust he had sealed his mouth shut and continued his role as her assistant. The silver-haired, bespectacled man swirled the contents of a beaker gently. Its purplish-green contents moved thinly inside before he added a small drop of a toxic green chemical into the beaker. It turned into a scaly yellow. He paused briefly to stare at what he had created with the resources her damn godson had gifted him after her death, more than half of the chemicals and mixtures that his mistress had done which he had done as well. He frowned deeply as he kept looking into the gently bubbling mixture before he tilted it into his mouth, his mind already set and his new goal in place. Kabuto grunted deeply and hunched over, grabbing his stomach in pain as the mixture burned a path through his body. His Kekai Genkai fixed him up just as his body was destroyed again. He fell on his knees and yelled in a deep, demonic voice as white scales slowly crept up his body from the very tips of his feet to his head. His canines lengthened and sharpened and his eyes turned midnight black before they seemed to contract together into a tight dot and then they too lengthened into sharp black reptilian pupils. His fingers and toes turned into short but sharp claws as a long, scaly tail grew out from his tailbone. He panted as he dragged his weak body on the ground towards a cabinet. He punched his fist through the wood and grabbed a shiny silver tray. As his eyes cleared and he got a good, clear look at the snake-like monster he had become, a maniacal laugh escaped his lips. Zetsu watched on, his head slowly coming out from the ceiling, as the medic ninja lost his soul to his inner darkness. Oh. This wasn't going as well as he thought. Kakuzu moved away from a senbone jab, his Akatsuki robes in tatters and with various cuts all over his body, and kicked the offending arm, but the person pulled it back in time and the older ninja had to raise his left forearm to block a ground-shattering heel kick from Naruto. The boy pulled away and allowed his senbone to slide back into their launchers as he punched Kakuzu's side. The man grunted and used his left shin to block the attack. Then Naruto showed him that he was indeed the son of the Yondaime Hokage, the Yellow Flash. The series of blows to his chest pushed the man back. He lost count after 50 and with a last dexterous spinning kick he was nailed across his face. It was like he was watching himself being beaten up, but at the same time he felt the pain. and for the first time in his life he was unable to keep up with his opponent. He hadn't used his masks yet, he had underestimated the blonde brat, but the worst part was that Naruto had not used any jutsu, he was being destroyed by a 14-year-old boy with just taijutsu. His pride couldn't take it. "You will watch me rip your heart out," he said audibly, and Naruto beamed at him, not too winded or strained from the speed he had used, though steam puffed out of his mouth a little. "So you're finally going to take me serious, huh?" the boy said as he rubbed his red-gloved hands together. I was starting to feel bad for not going all out too. "Stupid brat, you're only making your death even more painful at my hands. If I had a Ryu for every time someone told me that, I'd have 3 Ryu." He watched as the man threw off his Akatsuki robe and 5 masks popped off his back with thick black tendrils following as well to form different-looking humanoid creatures. He was glad that Kakuzu at least wrote the kanji for each affinity on the forehead of each mask. It would make it easier. "Oh, I'm going to have so much fun reproducing your Earth Grudge Fear Kekai Genkai. I wonder what will happen if I give your carcass to Papa Snake Sage to eat." He wondered aloud. Kakuzu looked like he had enough of the boy undermining him. He charged with all of his masks honing at Naruto. The young Jounin leapt over the fire mask, bounced off the lightning mask but dispelled into a cluster of spiders when he was hit in the middle of his back by black strings courtesy of the irate Kakuzu. The spiders scampered away and converged 12 feet away from the man and his masks. Naruto reformed completely and he looked amused. He had been taught to never be overconfident, but he had also been taught that the moment his opponent lost composure he had lost the battle. The best way to go about this was by prodding him with words. Kakuzu looked like he was almost at the point he desired, but he had enough of talking. He slapped his palms together and black shadows circled his eyes. Inside him Kyubi watched, mildly excited for what was coming, as a mass of the boy's blue chakra spun within itself right before his eyes and abruptly stopped, before it divided itself into 5 parts, each one a different color symbolizing their affinity. It was a trick Orochimaru had helped him perfect where he had to have his chakra at the ready, like he was about to perform a jutsu. The ground around him cracked and he pointed at Kakuzu, and made a come-at-me motion with the hand. If Hidan was facing any other ninja, even a high Jounin, with a kunai, a tanto or even a katana he would have been faring better than now, but he was matched up against a female Ronin that was wielding the same sword that was created just for her. He didn't let it keep him down though. He swung his scythe wildly and the Ronin clanged her sheath against the weapon, shocking him that it held strong, before she kicked his midsection with her soul. She slid aside from a downward slice and bent under a kick the man had sent at her. He looked like he had jumped head first into a blender. The upper half of his robe was gone to reveal his black sleeveless vest, and there were chunks of his arm that were missing, like they had been sliced off cleanly. Aoki-chan raised her sword to block another downward hack, grunting a little as the crazy priest kept on bringing down the weapon whilst laughing insanely. "Stay still and taste of my blade, bitch," he said with wide eyes and a massive grin. She pursed her lips in silent irritation as she spun aside from a wild swing, jabbed her sheath at his neck, which painfully pushed his Adam's apple far inside. He pulled away from her and grabbed his throat. Short tittering cackles escaped his lips as he tried to push away the discomfort from the seemingly lax attack. The girl watched him cough out blood with half-lidded eyes, but shocking enough he lunged at her. She merely raised her legendary sword and it impaled the airborne man clean through his stomach. He gasped in surprise and coughed more blood as she smacked the side of his head with her hard sheath. She then kicked her right leg and it smashed against his scythe, which he released when his hands broke under the attack. "I wonder why you're an S rank," she said with her eyebrows furrowed, watching as his body slowly healed. "It's probably because you're immortal? Watch what you fucking say, you piss-ass skank, or I will shove my dick so far up you pansy ass you'll be able to taste it," he growled. Lightning pull. She clenched the fist that was holding the sword, that was in turn holding the man up, and tendrils of electricity erupted from the handle and covered them. He yelled as lightning licked his body and his muscles tightened up painfully, so much that he was immobile. She relaxed her hand and the electricity sputtered to a stop. "You, bitch," he said in a low voice, "when I get my hands on you, I'll chop your fucking limbs off, and fuck you till you die." "Such bad language," she tutted quietly. "You should be glad it isn't Naruto you're fighting, or you will suffer worse pains than death." "Oh yeah, you dick-sucking samurai piece of shit, guess it's good I can't die." "You can say that," she said with a small smile. "Wind push." She clenched her hand again and the Jashin's stomach began swelling up, his ribs broke and his lungs swelled up as well, then his arms and legs before. Pop! He exploded all around, blood and body parts scattered everywhere. The girl ignored the blood on her formerly immaculate white shirt and tights as she walked forward to where the man's head had landed. "You shit-brained bitch." Before he could finish with his yell, she jammed her sword through his mouth, cutting off his tongue so that it rolled into the back of his mouth and exited from his neck. He gurgled as blood and spit pumped from his mouth and onto her sword, but she merely looked at him before she looked at her master. The blonde scientist was hopping away from multiple balls of water being fired off from the water mask's mouth while he engaged Kakuzu in a full-on taijutsu fight. He snaked away from a grab for his throat and his left leg went up to hit his opponent, but Kakuzu grabbed the leg in his grip and threw Naruto towards his fire mask. Fire release, dragon fire technique. The mask opened its mouth wide and a flaming red dragon spun out and screamed towards Naruto. The boy flashed through 10 hand seals, water release, water spider web. He spread his hands after the last hand seal and hundreds of thin water strings connected to his hands. He pushed them towards the dragon and on contact steam erupted all over them. Kakuzu could hear fighting going on inside the thick steam. Fireballs shot from inside in different directions before a sharp snap and a short sizzle before silence. The man smirked a little under his mask. That boy wasn't so tough. I knew he was all talk. He furrowed his eyebrows when he heard a fast whirring sound. The man swiftly caught the thrown mask that would have cleaved off his head, but that was the beginning of his loss. The mask exploded into toxic green smoke and he could feel his skin burn off his bones painfully slowly. The man stifled the pained grunt that racked through him as black threads sprouted out from every sewn-shut part of his body. His arms reached the ground and spun around in a windmill to blow away the same smoke that would have ended any other normal ninja. That was when he saw Naruto jump out from wherever he had been and drove his knee straight into the face of his defensive mask, his earth mask. On contact it shattered and the boy grabbed the shards of wood, throwing them at the water mask before he flickered out of sight just as the earth mask shards were dodged by the water mask. It was silent and Kakuzu panted a little, trying to heal himself from the body-burning smoke he had been distracted with. That was until there was a distinct slicing sound. He looked behind him at his lightning mask and it had been cleaved cleanly in half by the legendary grass cutter sword with Naruto grasping it in both of his hands. Kakuzu sent over waves of black threads from his arms and his mouth at him, but when they reached the boy, again, exploded into hundreds of spiders and these spiders disappeared in puffs of smoke. It was when the wind blowing through the gassy plain had increased violently and the laughter that floated through was Aoki-chan, who still had the silently cursing priest jammed on her sword, grateful she did not intervene with her boss's fight. Back when they were still in Konoha, Naruto had explained to her something that happened to every Uzumaki in history the moment they had unlocked their chakra. When they were in a fight or battle they considered exciting, something known as the infamous Uzumaki battle lust would fall on them. It was a time the Uzumaki, no matter how small percentage he or she was, would see no other thing but the person he was fighting. Any attempt to hold him down would result in either death or critical maiming, but only if the Uzumaki that had fallen into this was stronger. The only way for an Uzumaki to explain this was by saying that there was a click in his brain and he was under the battle lust until his opponent was dead or the Uzumaki had broken every bone in his body. This battle lust could be controlled and channeled into the user's actions and even his or her speech, but if the excitement or hate for the opponent had gotten too strong then it was always best to step out of the way and watch the carnage. This didn't have to do with only the increase of adrenaline in the body but on the person's genuine desire to hurt his opponent or opponents. The very first time Uzumaki Kushina had fallen under her battle lust was when she was a Junon in her very first Chunin exam, which was remarkable since she unlocked her chakra a little while before she entered the academy. She had been pitted against a female marsh village taijutsu specialist and she had been ground into a pulp, but before that could happen she had broken both of her arms and legs fighting back. Naruto had said that he was fully capable of controlling his battle lust and she knew that, though there were times he allowed it to slip out in a fight. She had witnessed his battle lust only once and it was during their first and only spar, so far. That day she was actually afraid that her trusty katana blade would shatter under his continued onslaught. He had only stopped when she was too exhausted to continue. His goggles were off and she could see as the light red sheen moved off his eyes and he was back to normal, or as normal as Naruto could get. Right now though, Naruto was bloodthirsty and that meant that he was in his battle lust. The boy flickered into sight right in front of Kakuzu, slashed him across his chest with the kusanagi and flickered away, appeared right behind him, sliced again and disappeared. The man's reaction time had been severely stunted by the corrosive smoke that still slowly ate away his body. The only thing keeping him together were his black strings and he wasn't even sure how long they would hold up. He grunted and blood spewed from his mouth as Naruto slashed him behind his neck, not deep enough to cut his spine but deep enough to seriously hurt him. It was like watching him teleport all over the man as he systematically began to break and cut him. A foot met his back and a sharp crack indicated that his spine had shattered. He wildly swung his arms but Naruto had already gone. A punch to his left cheek broke that side of his face. He growled and swung again. This time Naruto didn't flicker away. He grabbed the arm and stepped on Kakuzu's ribs, pushing his leg away until the arm tore off the green-eyed man's socket. This action also thrust the injured man away. He dropped the twitching arm and idly twirled the legendary sword as he walked to Kakuzu. The man was dragging himself away from Naruto. The shadows under the boy's eyes now stretched down over his cheeks to his chin in a line, and he could just barely see blue chakra over Naruto's body. The boy smirked slightly at him and placed the tip of the poisonous sword on his prey's neck. Without hesitating, he pushed it clean through, ignoring the thread that wiggled and thrashed over his sword. He pushed in again and nailed the man down by his neck into the ground, but Kakuzu still struggled, too weak and eaten up by acid to move. Naruto knelt down on one knee and smiled at the man. He poked his forehead as the thin sheen of red blood left his eyes, which were under his goggles, and said, "What was that about taking my heart?" The black thread wasn't moving again besides the small twitches, but the man glared at him in defiance, his whole face bloody and his body broken. "A sword through your jugular and you're still not dead. I have to say, that's very impressive." He sat down with his legs crossed next to the dying man and continued, "I'm going to use you as my message to your comrades." His eyes trailed to the ring on his finger, "And I think I know how to send it." Oh. Tsunade couldn't believe what she was about to say, but why the hell did the KDC shut down? It had been a year and two since the only workers of the drug empire in their custody were broken out of their cells by unknown ninjas. As the Hokage, she wasn't supposed to condone any sort of criminal act in Konoha. She was supposed to be happy that the Rogue Ninjas Corporation had been closed down, but she wasn't. For months now she had been looking the other way as doctors in Konoha's hospital and clinics desperately ordered legal drugs that were in rare supply all over the continent, but were apparently grown in wherever the KDC operated, and she had also signed some agreements for the KDC to supply them with the special painkillers, chakra replenishing pills, blood replenishing pills, muscle knitting spray, bone setting technology, sleep medication, and a whole bunch of other stuff that Naruto had created himself. These drugs reduced the mortality rate of both the civilians and the ninja. They were organic and non-addictive, unlike their illegal counterparts, as well as affordable. They didn't pose any sort of threat to them in any way. She had examined each and every type of drug. She had even looked the other way when the KDC began getting more confident in their operations and showing up in the day to deliver their ordered drugs and medical equipment to Konoha. Then why the hell did they so suddenly shut down? It could either be they had decided to hide or they were really gone. Jiraiya had reported that he couldn't help himself. He had investigated and located a branch warehouse in Hidden Chill. He admitted that there was a little scuffle between him and the 3A rank missing ninja that protected the warehouse. He subdued them easily enough, but when he had finally gained entry into the warehouse by bypassing the level 8 seals surrounding the premises, the whole place was empty, not even a single magnifying glass or a measly crumb left behind. He had wanted to interrogate the ninja he had captured, but they too were gone. He could be the reason the KDC had shut down. The slug Sannin squeezed her pen and smashed her fist down on her desk. The pen stabbed in and jutted from the wooden desk as she tried to get her mind back on track. If her teammate had really been the reason Naruto had either shut down his corporation or cut off ties with Konoha, then she would make sure she squeezed the life out of his body with her bare hands. Why did it have to be now? She whispered as she placed her forehead on her desk. Even though Naruto didn't hide the chemical components of his drugs and the Konoha scientists did in fact know what was contained in them, it all fell on the question of finding the ingredients. Naruto apparently had an unlimited supply of the Spring Country June flower, which was one of the rarest, most medicinal flowers on the planet. So much so that the people in spring were searching for the elusive flower. Naruto also apparently had a large source of the Suna crescent moon cactus that only appeared during a crescent moon in a remote part of the desert. The sap from the cactus could be refined through a rigorous process and turned into a soothing sort of cream that was able to stave off the killer heat of the desert and keep the person it was on relatively cool. It was the cream that Gaara, the current Kazekage, had ordered from the KDC branch warehouse in his country, and the cream that every decent ninja could afford and use on a mission. Plus the smell from the cream was fantastic. It wasn't the only thing the sap could be used for. It wasn't news to hear that Suna had allied with the KDC. The thing that got the Sannin scratching her head was that Naruto, apparently, had a substantial source of cave crawler lilies, which grew in wet and dark environment mainly in Hidden Darkness and Kiryagakur. These flowers were the vital ingredients used in the cure for bullpox, a sort of pox that affected children under the ages of 12. It wasn't fatal, but it could be easily spread. This made it incredibly hard to contain, and this just so happened to be what was happening. Bullpox was like chicken pox. It can never occur twice, but it could seriously disfigure and stunt the child's growth if they weren't cured with the shot that contained these elusive cave crawler lilies. The woman pulled out her pen from the desk and continued writing, throwing the pen away when it didn't work and retrieving a new one. She was writing a letter which would be copied into 5 more. They were to Konoha's allies. She was requesting for them to request for Rakuto 4252 shots from the KDC branch warehouses in their countries, as well as add in a good word for Konoha. She didn't think that Naruto would just randomly shut down the business that was shooting him to the top of the financial world, not anymore. Tsunade Senju had to swallow her pride to even write the letter, but it would be best if the ninja of the next generation were not hunchbacked and droopy-eyed, or even the ones coming after that. If she played her cards right, and who else is rolling their eyes? Then when she cured the bullpox of the afflicted children and immunized the rest, then the bullpox epidemic would be a thing of the past. The Sannin couldn't send her summon into the snake or spider clan realms because they had been barred from entering, as well as every other summon known to man. She vaguely suspected that those were where these elusive plants and animals were being grown and reared, but she couldn't prove it, nor was she entitled to demand knowledge of it from Naruto. Shizune. The door creaked open and the black-haired woman popped her head inside. Yes, Tsunade-sama. Call the rookie 9 and team guy. The woman left her teacher to her thoughts to go and assemble the team she had called for. Naruto's general whereabouts were still greatly unknown and Orochimaru had also disappeared off the map. Not even the location of the rogue samurai friend of Naruto location was known. This fact seemed to frustrate Jiraiya since even his spy network were well in the dark of the boy's operations and movement. However the boy was traveling, he was doing a very good job of hiding his presence. But news of his accomplishments, as well as Aoki-chan's, weren't unfamiliar. He was now an S rank in over 5 hidden villages and nothing less than A rank in other villages, or countries. She had not yet raised his rank in the Konoha bingo books, but she had warned her ninja to approach with caution if he was ever sighted. No one knew just how much stronger he was now. Oh. Zetsu swallowed thickly as he looked down at the 2 Akatsuki membership rings, still connected to the fingers of the former owners, as he bubbled out of the ground. His multicolored eyes looked at the total carnage that was the grassy field the fight had occurred, as well as the twitching left foot of the very much still alive but incomplete immortal priest. He knew that the boy and his guard were strong, but he didn't think they were this strong. He made sure to keep constant tabs on how Naruto grew up and on his skills before he disappeared with Orochimaru, and he became confident that knowledge of this would give him, and the others in the Akatsuki, an edge if they were to ever face him. He even went as far as to think that the counters to them were much too easy. This was why he didn't bother to tell Kakuzu and Hidan on his discoveries. It was too late. He sighed as the air rippled in front of him on the other side of the fingers on the ground, and 3 other ninjas emerged. Tobi silently clenched his fists but relaxed them a second later, mutely looking at Zetsu, then at the kunoichi on his right, Konan, then finally at the stoic and pierced orange-haired man, Yahiko, before he said, "It seems we went about this all wrong." Konan nodded. "It seems so. I would have thought Kakuzu would have gotten the job done alone." She looked at Zetsu. "Check if any of the blood around her is Naruto's." The plant creature nodded and shuffled around, poking the few small puddles of blood around. "It's obvious the brat isn't to be toyed with." Pain, Tobi added as his lone eye looked up at the sky. They had been summoned to the location of the ring when a foreign source of chakra was channeled into the rings, which was what happens when a non-member touched them. Let it be known that it was very well near impossible for a non-member of the Akatsuki to touch the coveted membership ring only the top-rung members had. It was a distress signal. The puppet body for the Rinnegan holder grunted and looked around. The scorch marks, skid marks, blood puddles and few limp black threads on the former battleground signified that Naruto and his partner were indeed not to be trifled with. Zetsu stood up after tasting another shallow puddle and shook his head, meaning Naruto didn't shed any blood. "Let's not forget that this is a 14-year-old boy we intend to capture. Being named a prodigy and being trained by a Sannin are not warning signs people of our caliber should fear." Tobi wanted to yell in outrage. Kakuzu might have not been the strongest member in their organization, but he was strong enough to stand out on his own, and Naruto had just wiped him off the face of the earth. The Sharingan user was certain that if he entered the playing field his abilities would be far from expected, but with what he was seeing he should still be cautious. Pain should at least increase the capture teams from teams of 2 to teams of 4. He kept his cool and said, "What's going to happen now?" Zetsu turned to look at him, formerly transfixed by a smoking skid mark on the ground, probably acid. "Zetsu, I want you to find the Kyubi Jinchuriki and document everything you know of him, every last detail. You told me that the boy had had his female samurai friend with him for over 3 years or so I would assume that he is close friends with her. She is his weak spot. The next teams going after him would target her just to distract him before you take him out." Zetsu wanted to say that Naruto wasn't exactly the most compassionate of people, that he wouldn't care what happened to Aoki-chan if they killed her, but he kept his mouth shut. He had a mission and he would accomplish it. As Tobi, Konan and Pain teleported back to Ame and Zetsu began the tedious task of tracking the spider summoner, we find Naruto, goggles hanging off his neck, many miles away, walking with his hands behind his head and idly kicking Hidan's head forward like a soccer ball. The mad priest was gurgling curses at him, and Aoki busied herself by watching the softly swaying grass at their sides, slowly stroking the front of the hoodie she was wearing. The Ronin had been forced to take off her white short-sleeved midriff shirt because it had been soaked with the evil priest's blood, leaving her in her long-sleeved mesh armor and red and black sports bra. Naruto wasn't having any of it. He had given the girl his gray and red hoodie to wear. It was possibly the best feeling she had ever experienced. Her boss cherished her decency and had sacrificed his own hoodie for her to wear, rather than expose herself. As her right hand gripped the top of her sheathed katana, her left kept rubbing the hoodie's front. Naruto was busy thinking about the current situation between him and Konoha, as reported by Aoki-chan. The KDC was indeed an illegal organization that was taking the drug world by storm, and that only a small handful of countries accepted his products. He wouldn't deny that it went into his head a little, knowing that his organization was now depended on by these countries. The cash returns were always worth the risk of semi-openly associating with them. He drew the line on providing full services to countries and villages that were or are antagonizing the KDC's operations, like Iwa and Darkness. He especially detested when strangers stuck their nose in his business despite being guilty of these accusations. Aoki-chan had reported that the Chill Branch warehouse laboratory had to be deserted after Jiraiya the Toad Sage had ambushed and defeated the 3 highly ranked ninjas he paid to protect the branch warehouse. He didn't blame the ninjas for failing in their duty, and he was especially relieved to hear that they had been smart enough to create fully powered water clones to pose as themselves while they helped evacuate the warehouse. Naruto believed that one would never know the value of something until it wasn't available anymore, and that was the message Aoki-chan had conveyed to the 2 open Konoha branch warehouses. All of the staff had been relocated to the newly opened branch warehouses close to Hidden Waterfall, Bear Country and Water Country. The new Water Country daimyo had been in open contact with Aoki-chan after the war in Kiri had ended, and had pleaded with her to speak to her boss about opening a warehouse in his country to supply medicine to his people at his usual price. In exchange, he would help provide ninjas to protect the warehouses. The Ronin sympathized with the man, understanding his desperate position, and ordered for a warehouse to be built on a man-made island in the Water Country capital. The new Mizukage, appointed a few days after the construction had begun, also requested for her presence and thanked her for accepting the offer to build a branch warehouse in Water Country. Money wasn't in high circulation in the country, seeing as most of their resources had gone into the war, so Naruto had written that Aoki-chan slashed the prices of his products in half for only Water Country citizens until their economy picked up. The guards they got for the warehouse, in a way, helped pay for his products. Waterfall Village and Bear Country had similar stances. They looked away from what he did while at the same time extended both of their hands to buy his drugs. Business was business, and he didn't particularly care if he had to shut down a few warehouses in Earth and Lightning Country, after they had given him trouble, so that he could shuffle the workers through the extensive underground tunnel to these new warehouses. He was making his money all the same. Back to his issue with Konoha. Aoki-chan might have used her discretion to make orders concerning the KDC on his behalf, with his express permission, and he was proud of her initiative to shut down the 2 warehouses he had on the outskirts of Konoha and the 2 more he had in Fire Country. He could already sense the tension this single action had caused. The drugs they had ordered and stored could only last so long before the entire country would begin crying for the warehouses to reopen. Technically speaking, Fire Country was a regular customer of his products and contributed a fraction of the revenue used to power his business, but with the new warehouses opening, the profit would increase, plus he had money stored just in case anything bad happened. He would give Konoha a week to decide whether or not they, and by extension the whole country, really wanted his services. He also noted to himself to send messages to every warehouse on the continent to see to it that their drugs didn't reach Konoha. Now, disregarding the thought of Konoha for a while, he began thinking about his business as a whole. The Kitsugami Drug Company was now the world's leading drug company, albeit still very much illegal. It was still operated mainly in the underworld, but the fact that after he had been revealed to be the CEO and owner of the company, it had attracted scrutiny from other countries. People were willing to disregard the illegal things he sold to purchase the legal drugs, which were his highest sales currently. The scientist wouldn't claim to have created a better form of every drug on the planet, but he would claim to have formed a better drug for most of the planet's health afflictions, while still making sure that each drug was organic, have limited side effects, and mostly non-addictive to his consumers. Naruto had reached the point that human experiments didn't matter to him for research anymore. He knew more than enough about the human body in various conditions from personal investigation and from his godmother's notes. If he was to experiment on a person again, it would mainly be for his sadistic pleasure, but he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't use humans in his experiments unless it was vital to his research. He went further to personally engineer better prosthetics and neck braces. He had written some notes on his breakthroughs and given a few of them to some of the resident doctors and physicians working in his branch warehouses so that they would at least know what they were selling. He planned to begin turning the KDC into a global franchise when half of the countries on the continent accepted the company. He already had a logo, which was mainly used as a means of identification by his workers, ninja and samurai guards of each branch warehouse. The KDC had a good reputation in the criminal underworld. They had willing people, mostly from the underworld, who were applying to work for him, as well as more highly ranked ninjas applying for guard duty, probably because the ones that were already working as guards told their comrades about the benefits he gave them if and only if they provided quality services and remained loyal to him. He had over 36 established branch warehouses scattered all over the continent that racked in millions of ryu a week and transferred this profit back to him. The next foreseeable problem was that he didn't have a main warehouse laboratory to produce the drugs that were ordered in bulk by countries and in small measure by individuals. The main warehouse also served as a place where he could relax, receive the weekly supply of ryu, send out the monthly supply of wages, and concentrate on making even more breakthroughs in the field of medicine, and partly in the field of engineering. The stores of drugs in the branch warehouses might finish up in a week's time, and the regular profit drop-off was in 3 days. He then decided that he would have to find a nice, secluded place to stay in. The 14-year-old boy had already accomplished many goals on his list of goals, as well as his main goal: merge a human with nature chakra and have both work in harmony, seeing as he was living proof that worked. This could also be applied to his success in the Mizuki Beast. Another goal was create contact lenses to help people with toxic chakra-induced eye problems, which were quite a lot given the fact that tailed beast holders sometimes go wild, especially when they were inexperienced. The last, main, goals he could tick off his list was being able to use all 3 chakra types in his body, manifest more legs, and partly join the snake and spider summons together, not necessarily in the same summoning realm. He needed a new direction before he went crazy, and after 10 silent minutes of wondering, he looked up into the sky, mildly surprised that it was midday. That was when it came to him. He beamed at his rogue samurai partner and best friend, and the girl looked at him with an eyebrow raised in amusement, still subtly smelling the hoodie she was wearing. "Yes, Naruto-sama? I just thought of the craziest thing." She waited to hear him out, and he continued, "What do you think of alternate universes, alternate dimensions?" Ooh. The white snake slowly uncoiled and slithered out of the cave he resided in inside the snake summoning realm. He beheld the rocky terrain he called his home that stretched far into the distance, where it ended with a golden bridge made entirely out of seals, and nature chakra connected the realm to the spider summoning realm. He could see snakes slither around idly, some speaking to spiders as they did, going about their daily functions. Accepting the foreign summons was one of the hardest things he had done, only doing so when Naruto had passed every single test he had placed before, including beating Manda, the snake boss, in battle. At least now he wasn't against the idea of the spiders working with his snakes. Just then he felt a tremor so low that every other snake paused, most turning to him questionably. He narrowed his eyes and hastily slinked back into his cool cave, illuminated by a few flames on the walls. He stopped at the far end of the cave, where a glass orb, held up by 3 gnarly sticks, glowed a sickly yellow, pulsating chakra every once in a while. The snake elder, a master of controlling his nature chakra, fought his way forward through the ever-increasing pulses of nature chakra coming off the orb that were so thick they were pushing him back. The ancient snake finally reached the orb and peered at it intently before a low, angry hiss escaped his scaly lips. His sparkling white scales darkened fractionally and his yellow reptilian eye slits narrowed dangerously. "How dare he," he said quietly as he forced the nature chakra seeping from the orb back into its container. An image of a cloaked figure forcefully summoning snakes to tear through 2 unsuspecting sound ninjas. The old snake struggled for control as his temper flared, cracking a circle under him as chakra pushed out of his body. "I never gave you permission. I never gave you permission to summon my children." He could sense a horde of snakes gathered at the mouth of his cave, with a few spiders waiting there as well, but he was more concentrated on deciding what to do with the thief that stole the snake summoning ability. From what he was seeing, the person was incredibly skilled in using his newfound ability, and in a tiny way it reminded him of Naruto, who also had multiple chakra signatures inside him, except he gave Naruto permission to summon his children. He finally reached a decision as he slithered to the multitude of hissing creatures at the front of his cave. They immediately kept quiet as he lifted his head high above them, and they lowered theirs as a sign of respect. The white snake sage might have been 3 times bigger than an anaconda and maybe just as strong as one, but he was still considered the great white snake elder, from whom all of them came from, directly or indirectly. He looked at the spiders carefully, and they too lowered their eyes away from his. He breathed in through his nose and said, "Our integrity as a summoning creatures have been breached by our late summoner's apprentice." A brave snake ventured a little forward to ask, "What are we going to do, Ji-sama?" The old, wizened snake looked away in shame. "We can do nothing for now, Kabuto had found a loophole in the summoning contract and used the residue of Orochimaru's essence left on him to add his name to the summoning contract. He could summon snakes and they would mindlessly obey him. His only option was to wait for the nature chakra in the boy to rebel and turn him to stone. Meanwhile, Naruto and Aoki were nearing the capital of Grass Country. The boy turned to the Ronin and asked, "Do you still play that, blowing pipe?" He asked cautiously and the corners of the girl's lips quirked upwards at his bashfulness. Blowing pipe? He suppressed his frustrated groan, aware that she was trying to get him to make a fool of himself. "You know, that silver thing, you blow that makes music." He said the last word like it was a foreign object that he still couldn't study, and this was true. Naruto Uzumaki was a boy that knew of the most intimate secrets of the human body, animals and of nature, but he had no clue what music was. He was never interested enough in it to actually study it, until Aoki arrived and played her, blowing pipe. The older fighter watched her boss make complicated movements with his fingers over his mouth and puff out his cheeks till they reddened. "You mean my flute?" He snapped his fingers and pointed at her. "Yes, that. Do you still play your flute?" It was like he was trying to learn another language with the way he was hesitantly, quietly and carefully pronouncing the name of the instrument. She nodded and removed the flute from inside her knee-high white but now blood-red socks. It was made out of shiny silver with graceful snow leopards carved onto it, each one dancing in place. "I still play my flute. Can you please play it?" he asked and propped his hands back onto the back of his head. "You mean I should play my blowing pipe?" she asked teasingly and the boy rolled his vulpine eyes, shaded under his goggles. "This blowing pipe?" She made exaggerated pointing gestures at the flute with her right hand, like it was a magic object. "This one?" "Yes, that one," he said firmly and looked away slightly when she giggled into her hand. She stopped her laughs and lifted the instrument to her lips, took in a small breath and began playing a sweet song as the duo walked in a leisurely pace to their first adventure. Chapter 7. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Naruto asked as he skeptically looked down at the snowy landscape sparsely populated by decrepit huts that operated as shops. He squinted his red eyes, hidden under his goggles, at the massive mountain that the market town was named after. He shared a skeptical look with his samurai friend, as they stood on another mountain which was much shorter than Mount Yomasaki. Aoki-chan turned the large map in her hands over and looked at the sun, hidden behind a few clouds, to confirm if they were really north. She looked down at her map again and nodded resolutely. "I'm positive this is Yomasaki Market Town." About 2 hours ago, the duo had been on the run from an entire hidden village after they had taken a tour of their hidden underground library. Flashback. Naruto hopped backwards from a mallet and was forced to disperse into multiple spiders as he sensed a sword cutting through the air towards his spine. The spiders reassembled beside the female Ronin, who was expertly deflecting and countering sword strokes from the sea of humanity before them, all of whom were wearing Kumo forehead protectors. He grabbed her hand and she didn't strike because she was very much aware of what his hand felt like at that point, and she used the cue to stab her sword into the ground and yell. Earth Pulse. The ground rippled under them violently and threw the thousands of ninjas raining surrounding them away, giving the duo a chance to run. Naruto, dragging the female by her hand towards the exit, ignored the accusing look his friend was sending him as they blurred to their destination. Rows and rows of shelves and books that reached high onto the roof blurred around them as they tried to navigate their way back to where they had come from. "I knew this was a bad idea," she shouted over the pained groans and outraged screams. "I freaking told you, Naruto." She could see the ninjas wall running towards them on the shelves, hundreds of them surging from behind them and a few coming from in front. "Yell at me later, Aoki-chan," he grunted before a grin and a loud hoot left his mouth. "But isn't this fun?" For a fraction of a second her eyes turned red. "No, it isn't." Hey, remember, you did ask me what I wanted for my birthday," he said with a lax roll of his eyes. "I thought you were joking." Her screaming reduced fractionally before it went up again. But what sort of birthday present is finding out the secret of the Raikage's lightning armor?" Naruto shot 2 senbon downwards and they clanged against the shiny tiles and impaled their intended target. "I like being spontaneous, Aoki-chan, you know that," he said and looked over his shoulder with large doughy eyes, even with subtly wobbling lips. "Don't you like my unpredictability?" He idly sent 3 kicks to 3 cloud ninjas that dove at him from the ceiling. The Ronin blushed a little and looked away. "Whatever." Naruto smiled and used his other hand to poke her reddening cheeks. "Your birthday is in a few months. I swear on my name and my summoning scroll that you can do anything you want that day. Deal?" She looked at him sharply, then away again, allowing him to drag her through the obnoxiously large room, shelves of books spread out far and wide with which they were running through. "Deal," she muttered back. The secret Kumagakura underground library was located at the epicenter of the village, under the Raikage's tower and dangerously deep under the ground, with about 27 separate rooms and 5 levels going downwards, each one with records of Kumo, as well as the world's history and accomplishments, as well as secret techniques. Only Chunin and higher were able to know about it, but Onbu and the Raikage were the only ones allowed access, plus the few Chunin that maintained the library. The sort of defenses placed on and inside the underground library could be split into 3 types: sensors, alarms and locks. All of them were at least level 7, up to 5 different locks on the entrance door located under the cage's desk. Each one had to open at the very same time or the alarms would go off. This led to stairs winding downwards, 2 flights with sensory detection seal combinations peppering the walls that detected if the person walking down the stairs was authorized. If not, the alarms would sound. The stairs landed in the first room, an empty space with white paint that had a larger-than-life locking seal at the very end of the room, which had a special name tag seal that had to be swiped over it, otherwise the person breaking in would be struck with lighting chakra that would freeze them in place until ninjas came to, violently, apprehend him or her. From there it was simply using the same methods getting that far to traipse from room to room, level to level, and touring around the super-secret library. This was possibly the strongest and most secure location in the entire country, and it was suicide to break into it. Once a team of rogue sand ninjas attempted to break in, after interrogating one of the Chunin in charge of the library, and were stopped before they could even gain entry into the cage's tower. The horrors the missing ninjas underwent, the torture they had to endure before they were generously allowed to die, could only be left for the imagination. The fact that the only entrance and exit to the library was located in the Raikage's office should dissuade any sane person from even thinking about it. But Naruto couldn't really be classified as sane. To Naruto, sneaking into the building was child's play. Konoha had even better security and he snuck in when he was 12. The problem lay on his Ronin friend, who just so happened to refuse any and every ninja art lesson he wanted to give her, preferring the way of the samurai, or as close to the way of the samurai in her case, so he had a problem sneaking her in as well, especially when she was adamant that something would go wrong and their heads would be on the chopping block. He still managed to convince her enough that what he wanted for his birthday was the secret to the current cage's lightning armor. He broke into the office at the time the Raikage was halfway to Iron Country to attend the cage's summit, and the 8 and 2 Tails were on a mission to Turtle Island. There was a big gap in the village's defense because of this, and Naruto was made aware of it from the informants his KDC ninja and samurai guards had. He bypassed the seal on the door and picked a seal key card from the Chunin receptionist, who left it on his desk, as he looked down to look for the schedule, replacing it with an identical hinged cardboard card. From that point, all it took to opening the 5 locking seals on the trapdoor under the cage's desk was making 5 lightning clones and unlocking it at once. From there it was all smooth sailing. Naruto distracted his bodyguard with the wonders of all the books around while he subtly looked for the lightning armor creation scroll. Thankfully, depending on how you look at it, he found the scroll, removed every trap seal on it and stuffed it in his pockets before the alarm bells sounded, when Naruto realized that he had forgotten to check whether removing the trap seals would activate the alarms. On purpose. A large grin stretched on Naruto's face, and dragging his partner through the air as she used her free hand to deflect thrown weapons, Naruto now had a 4-inch-long senbone in his grasp as he slashed the few ninjas that managed to overtake them, with help from channeling lightning chakra into their limbs. Naruto spun around, positioning the Ronin in front of him so that she could yell out one of her sword's jutsu. Earth, leopard bullets. She clenched her sword in her left hand and leveled it on the oncoming ninjas blocking the elevator to the first floor directly under the cage's desk. The result was brownish chakra coating the sword and bullets shaped as claws shot from the tips, 5 every second, and impaled the ninjas after they valiantly attempted to block the attacks. She ignored his look when she refused to let him lead. "I'm not destroying any of these scrolls," and then she added, "and I'm supposed to be protecting you, not the other way around." He got his feet back under him and ran with her, disregarding the fact that they were still holding hands. "I was trying to be a gentleman." She scoffed, "We both know it's too late for that." She skidded into the metal box with her boss, and Naruto kicked the control panel, destroying the buttons, and flowing through 5 one-handed hand seals. Summoning jutsu, ninja art, web of lies, and from the palm of his hands a sparkling white web blasted out and covered the entrance of the elevator, blocking it off from the other ninjas, and as the web hardened it turned black. They could already hear the ninjas frantically hacking through it. They could see the small, fingernail-sized spiders with red beeping abdomens sluggishly walking on his summon web, with a constant trail of silk coming out of their abdomens to maintain the structural integrity of the web wall for as long as possible. Naruto ran up the walls, Aoki-chan's right hand still in his left, and a senbone slipped out from his right sandal, under his foot, and he flipped backwards back onto the ground, carving cleanly through the metal roof of the elevator and forcing the samurai to flip with him just so he wouldn't twist her arm. He stomped his foot and the acid eroding through the roof opened wide enough for his guard to jump up first and forcing, this time for him, to leap up as well so that she wouldn't tear his arm off with her iron grip. The duo ran up the walls as fast as they could jointly do and Naruto took the liberty of kicking open the closed door of the elevator level above the one they had just escaped from. He smiled and made a flourished movement at it. After you? She rolled her eyes and dragged him with her after her. See? I can be a gentleman. It doesn't count if you have to kick the door open. They stopped abruptly when they beheld the ninjas standing at the ready to intercept them, not forgetting about the ninjas struggling to break his web. He leaned to her and whispered from the side of his lips, staring at the ninjas standing in front of him, each one first looking hesitant at who they were about to attack before they tried to steal their faces. It counts. She whispered back, no it doesn't. Yes it does. No it doesn't, she heatedly whispered. We'll talk about this later, he said with finality. He held his right hand above his head, palm open, and a glowing ball of blue chakra inflated in his hands. This seemed to be the signal for the Kumo ninjas to attack, but it was too late. Web bomb, level 4. Flashback end. If the hidden cloud wanted to have any more reason to hate Uzumaki Naruto, the nine-tailed spider, then breaking into their top secret library and basically making a fool of their defenses was reason enough. This was also including the fact that Orochimaru and Naruto had made a fool out of the village previously on their training journey to Uzushio. Aoki-chan rolled up the map and perched it under her arms as she held up a pair of binoculars to her eyes. Naruto's goggles spun within themselves as they zoomed in. The Ronin nodded, I'm very sure this is the place. Naruto pricked his thumb with a single senbone from his silver launchers and a moment later a small poof of smoke later and a gray spider as large as a horse skittered out of the chakra smoke and knelt down with all 8 legs in front of Naruto. Naruto offered his hand to his partner and she gratefully took it as she mounted on his summons while he jumped on and sat with both legs crossed on the spider's large head, leaving the wide and partially flat abdomen for his partner. Go, he simply said and the spider began his hasty run to Yomasaki Market Town. This was when the female Ronin behind him, also sitting with her legs but with her legendary sword on her lap, her bow crossed over her body and her quiver of arrows on her back, poked the backpack on his back to get his attention and said, the sooner we settle down you can begin the preparations. Her lips were curved upwards in a small smile and her face glowed when he sighed, merely looking over his shoulder for a fraction of a second before he looked back forward to where his summons was taking them to. Sure, I'll start right away. Flashback. 30 minutes after escaping Kumo. Border of Spring Country. Naruto was usually very well composed. It was what people had come to know him for most of all, even more than they acknowledged his skill and strength. As a Genin he was able to stare Kakashi and Guy in the eyes and have the presence of mind to deduce what they intended to do to him as well as form a plan to succeed. He had once gone up against the Four Tails Jinchuriki after he and his godmother had passed through Iwa during their training journey without panicking and had that same calm and collected presence of mind to craft a way of stunting the superior ninja's speed for him to run away with Orochimaru, who was less than happy running away. That was a story for another time. Right now though, Naruto was struggling to keep his face as calm as possible and even throwing in a friendly smile at his female partner. You want me to do what? Small droplets of sweat built up on his forehead as the black-haired beauty stepped closer to him, as if to intimidate him, which wasn't working seeing as she was a head shorter than him and he had just been too accustomed to seeing her, and repeated, for my birthday I want you to take me on a date. He leaned away when she raised her right pointer finger and jabbed his chest. You will be on your best behavior. It would be the best day in my life and can me help you if I don't enjoy it. He smirked a little and poked her forehead, and what would you do if you don't have fun? I would make every day in your life a living hell and you know I can do that. She growled under her breath and looked to his side, behind the tree they were hiding behind, at the numerous ninjas that were blazing just past it, none the wiser of their presence. The spiders that covered the tree in a dome of interlocking limbs and fangs, each on melding with the environment, hid them perfectly while they had to super suppress their chakra. Is that so? He whispered and his smirk widened, exposing his serrated teeth and he looked down on her, making his goggles glint in the limited light of the spider's camouflage. She nodded and stood strong under his scrutiny. You're going to make me suffer? Are you sure about that? Positive, she puffed out her chest bravely. And you're so sure I won't kill you? He cocked his head to the side as he placed a hand on her shoulder but she looked back at him, even when he removed his goggles and placed them on his forehead, exposing his horrifying vulpine eyes to further intimidate her. It wasn't working. You're not going to kill me, she said and her voice didn't waver, not even in the slightest, but a small blush grew spread over her nose at the hand on her shoulder. His eyes darkened evilly, an impressive feat because his eyes were always dark with evil, and he gently ran his thumb over her neck, raised it up so that he tucked her black hair over her ear. The standoff lasted a few long minutes, even as the Kumo ninjas returned to their village before the highly ranked Uzumaki leaned back and sighed tiredly. Fine, he waved his right hand and the spiders covering the tree and them fell onto the ground, rushing towards him and entering his pants legs before they returned to their summoning realm through a seal just over his calf. Good, she sighed in relief and turned around, her sword sheath in her hand and a skip in her step. But I'm not sorry about the whole lightning armor thing, he said to her loudly as he laxly walked with her with his hands behind his head. I've already forgotten about that, she said and smiled up at him. He looked down at her from the corner of his eyes with a raised eyebrow. His right hand reached into the bag on his back and brought out a map. He handed it to her. We're going to Yomasaki Market Town in Spring Country. Mind I ask why? She said as she rolled open the map, not caring that he was in a sour mood. It'll be our new base until all the Akatsuki are dead. It wasn't that he was going to go out of his way and kill them, rather he had been informed that the ninja world was gearing towards war subtly. There was unrest all over. Gaara the One-Tails holder had died after his beast had been extracted but brought back by a sacrifice from an old Suna elder. The 2 and 8 tails were in hiding by order of their cage, the 3-tailed beast had disappeared, the 4 and 5 tails had been kidnapped, the 6 tails was in hiding, the 7 tails had been kidnapped, and he, the 9 tails, was having the time of his life with his samurai best friend. Then after they're dead? I've always liked to live in Kiri, before the war I mean. What do you think? If you like the place, then so do I. They had to quickly round up their continental adventure because of the threat of the Akatsuki as well as the constant reminder that Naruto needed to find a definite place to call the home base of the KDC, if not it would be incredibly hard producing drugs and even harder transporting all the money he had, even though they were in small squares by the thousand. Flashback end. The market town was sparsely populated, with the distance between residential houses being more than 15 feet apart, though the market aspect of the town was merely a circular mesh of kiosks. It was pitifully small, making the spider summoner wonder if the place was called Market Village out of some sort of twisted humor. Usually, tall mountains like Yomasaki invited tourists and funds, but with Spring Country and Mountain Country having the most tall mountains, Yomasaki was all but forgotten, leaving it to be populated by traders who couldn't afford the tax of selling in better locations like Spring Country's capital. It was obvious that there were more people than there were houses and shops. He felt eyes on him and his partner as they passed through the village on his summons. He looked to his immediate right, at a deplorable brick house, and grinned widely with his eyes closed, flashing his scary spider-like teeth for the peepers to see, and this seemed to scare them enough for them to close the curtain. Thankfully his goggles were still on. They reached the base of the mountain the town was named after, and Naruto made a quick motion over his shoulder at Aoki-chan and she stuck onto the back of the spider with her chakra. Sensing this and taking it as a cue, the summons leapt onto the surface of the mountain and blazed upwards. The air began getting thinner and thinner with each ascent, and this didn't seem to faze Naruto, but something in his head clicked and he fell on his back so that he was looking up at his friend, who was struggling to breathe but was too stubborn to call his attention about it. Her face was red and she looked down at him with his coal black eyes, clearly showing her fight to stay conscious. He smirked and folded his hands behind his head, amused that she actually intended to fight against her urge to breathe rather than ask for his help. Her cheeks were puffed out with air and her hands fisted the short body hair on the top of Spider's abdomen. They stayed like that, him finding it funny that she didn't want to ask for his help and her, barely conscious. He finally caved when she slowly began leaning forward with her eyes closed, as if to kiss him, and he caught her by her forehead with his pointer finger holding her up, and he used the other hand to snake into the side of the bag. He miraculously pulled out his blank mask, though without the black head cover, and pushed it to her face. The girl quickly took in numerous deep breaths and got enough strength to hold the mask to her face. He allowed her to use his pointer finger to support her for a few minutes until he was sure she was strong enough to support herself. He removed his hand and placed both of them back behind his head. The mask had a store of clean oxygen in it in case he ever gassed up a room. It could also serve as a breathing apparatus for mountain climbers. "Thank you, sir," she muttered, switching to addressing him formally, and bowed to him slightly, then remembering that he was on his back and looking up at her, so she had to stop herself from bowing fully, like she usually did, because he was still on his back. "I can't kill you, remember? That includes letting the altitude kill you." He smiled widely at her and masterfully kept himself securely on the large spider's back as it ran up the mountain's slanting surface. "Why didn't you want me to help you?" he asked with a curiously raised eyebrow. Aoki-chan secured the mask on her face and gripped her sword again. "I didn't need your help." Naruto scoffed and crossed his right leg over his left. "Need I remind you, you almost lost consciousness not 5 seconds ago. Oxygen is important, you know. Then why don't you need it? The nature chakra in me makes it easier to breathe in this altitude. He looked at her dully and poked her forehead. That doesn't apply to you. She looked away from him up the mountain they were climbing. Why don't you ask me for help? She said under her breath, still not looking at him. I rarely need it, he answered honestly. Then why did you hire me? You obviously don't need me around to keep you alive. Naruto furrowed his eyebrows as he caught her shaky voice. He sat up and turned around to her. He shuffled closer so that he was about 2 feet away and sat down with his legs crossed. He silently stared at her and she masterfully avoided his eyes before he said, Believe it or not, I need you. She snorted and he nodded, Yes, I do. For what? She looked at him and he could see her black eyes glaze over from the eye holes of his mask. You plan on using me for some sort of elaborate experiment? You want to sell me? You want to use my organs? You want to take my sword? She asked heatedly and clasped her weapon tightly at the last one. What purpose do I serve to the infamous 9-tailed spider? He looked surprised at her outburst. Aoki-chan, I need you. For what? Just tell me. The boy looked like he was struggling to get the words out of his mouth. The girl grabbed his shoulder firmly when he looked away from her, forcing his eyes back on her. She gently removed the goggles over his eyes and placed it between them. Just tell me, you can trust me. I do trust you. I trust you more than you can even believe. Then why can't you tell me the reason I'm even with you? She begged, why do you keep me alive? Because I need you, he shouted. He realized what he had said and looked down at his hands, which were shaking. You keep me sane and you are my stability. I enjoy every day I am with you. His hands shook even more and he clenched them tightly. When we first met, I wanted you alive just to be Kitsugami's guard, to make his guys more believable, and I wanted to kill you when I was exposed. I wanted to poison you and watch you die, just to destroy these feelings so it would stop hurting me but I didn't. I couldn't. Then I broke my first rule. I got too attached to you and now I don't know what I'll do if you're not with me or if something happens to you. He shrugged weakly and closed his eyes. One moment I want to impress you, another I want to make you happy and I always want to see you smile. The girl's mouth dropped at his confession and she unconsciously placed her hands on his own. I need you, Aoki-chan. He frowned heavily at his vulnerable state. He didn't like it. It was a raging inferno that had been building up in his chest ever since the day he had given the girl her bow was being forced out of his mouth and he didn't like it. He liked being in control and he liked knowing what he was doing. She gently clasped his fisted hands and he relaxed them enough for her hands to slip into his own, but he still had his eyes closed in resignation. I need you, Aoki-chan, no use fighting it anymore. He felt relieved that he had at least got that much out. There was so much he wanted to say to her but he didn't want to say it. Naruto, she whispered gently as her hands held his more firmly and smiled at him but he interrupted her. We're here. He pulled his hands away and rolled off the spider as it came to an abrupt halt. She got off and was about to rush to him but with the way he kept his back to her as he looked up at the large cave entrance at the side of the mountain she stood away. He wasn't physically showing his turmoil of emotion, rather he was waging an intense internal battle against himself. He breathed in deeply and spun around to her, a wide, obviously fake, smile on his lips as he opened his arms. Let's clean this place up. Waves and waves of spiders left his trousers and rushed into the caves, eating away the sides to smoothen it out and create more room for them till the interior of the cave was a massive, spacious and neatly made smooth box, similar in size to his first warehouse laboratory. They were not close to the peak of the mountain, rather they were on the only cave entrance there, and it was as cold as it looked and as cold as they imagined. They could even see their breaths and they had to swirl chakra through their bodies to stay warm. The swordswoman looked down in disappointment and passed him into the cave to use her wind control to sweep away the rocks that escaped the tiny spiders off the frigid mountain while allowing both of them time to think. Ooh. I think I've got a clue where Naruto is hiding, Jiraiya the Toad Sage whispered to his female teammate as she sat down on her designated seat among the other 4 hidden village leaders, with the leader of Iron Country, Mifune, sitting at the head of the table. Can't that wait? She whispered back, carefully looking around and stopping at 2 of the village leaders that hated Konoha the most, Iwa because of Minato and Kumo because of Naruto, not because of Kushina. They lived in a world where information was a highly valued commodity and this commodity traveled almost as fast as electricity. That said, it shouldn't come as a surprise that 5 days ago Kumo had been successfully infiltrated by the last Namikaze and said Namikaze also managed to escape with his friend without either of them sustaining any sort of injury. For the second time, Naruto had broken into Kumo and escaped unharmed. From the logical standpoint, the wreckage should not blame Konoha for what one of their missing ninjas had done, but from the illogical perspective he needed someone tangible and available to place all his deep-seated anger on, and Tsunade, who was almost literally the embodiment of Konoha, seeing as she was the one representing the village, was going to be the person he blamed. The dark-skinned and heavily muscled man scowled at the woman and placed both of his gauntlet hands on the table to further emphasize what he intended to do if he was not in neutral territory. The blonde Sanin couldn't care in the least what he thought, or any of them thought, but her eyes were fixed firmly on Mizukage, Mei Terumi, and the playful woman winked at her coyly for her attention, but Tsunade still looked at her suspiciously. Her reason for this was because it was now common knowledge that Kiriagakur, and all of Water Country, were openly allied to the KDC, even going as far as to place the KDC's logo, a small one, under their village's symbol on their backs. They weren't the only village or country to do this, seeing as Suna, Spring Country, Bear Country and a host of many more places openly patronized the KDC, but Kiri stood out among them for going the extra mile. There was a large warehouse stationed in Kiri and a smaller warehouse in the capital of the country on a man-made island. Water Country had suffered during the war and they were in drastic need for help, and it was understandable that when they had asked the KDC for help, and this help was provided without hassle, they would be indebted to the organization, so much so that there were now registered Kiri ninjas that guarded the warehouses in Water Country. Regardless of this, Tsunade couldn't help but feel disgust that Kiri had chosen that path instead of seeking help from her old allies. Hidden Mist was still recuperating from the bloody civil war and distrust among their shinobi was still in the air, but the main place they united was in safeguarding the KDC warehouses in their territory. The KDC was supplying them with drugs, medical technology and, at a small scale, food and water for their less privileged civilians who seemed to have suffered more during the war. The illegal organization had gone above and beyond for them, and the result would be for Water Country to do the same. Instinctively, the blonde Hokage knew that it wasn't Naruto that had sanctioned his warehouses to provide food and water, but his more compassionate friend. It wasn't in his style to do that. Speaking of compassionate, a few months ago Naruto had sent a letter to her telling that he was going to give Konoha one more chance to allow his company to work, or else they would withdraw all support, including influencing their best customers to withdraw their own support from them. This was after she had pleaded for the Kazekage to speak to the KDC CEO on her behalf, seeing as she couldn't get contact with him, but close allies of the KDC were privy to his whereabouts. Gaara agreed to do this, but on the condition that she divert 1/4 of the missions sent to them from Fire Country capital to Sunagakur. The woman begrudgingly accepted, and Gaara summarily sent a message to Naruto, and 3 days later a letter was sent back, which the Kazekage sent to the Hokage. Now, bullpox epidemic ravaging Konoha had been squashed. Though the woman still held some resentment for Naruto for withholding information on where he got the herbs and roots for his medicine, even though she knew that Naruto wasn't entitled to tell her. She looked around, and the Kazekage, Sabaku no Gaara, sent her a polite nod and she returned it. Behind him his siblings, Tamari and Kankuro, stayed alert and made sure that their hands were ready to pull out their weapons. Tsunade had chosen Jiraiya and Yamato to be her bodyguards, the latter because of his high control of his wood release. It would be a great advantage if she was able to drain dry the chakra of anyone that attacked. The cage were patiently waiting for their host to begin their meeting, and 10 minutes after they had all settled and their guards were stationed behind their leaders, the man raised his hand for their attention and they looked at him. The Tsuchikage, Oonoki, requested I call this meeting in my country to discuss the rising threat of an organization hell-bent on destroying all we know and love. No, he called this meeting because he lost both of his Jinchuriki, grunted and met the harsh but silent glare of the fat-nosed cage. Are you going to deny that both of your Jinchuriki were attacked by these S-ranked missing ninjas? The old man retorted, or that sand kid didn't have his beast unsealed? Order. Mifune called and the bickering stopped. Regardless of his ulterior motives, the trouble brewing cannot be ignored. We are continually receiving news of this organization's exploits, and each on as troubling as the last. He began counting on his fingers. They took the 1, 3, 4, 5 and 6 tails. He motioned at the Mizukage. They orchestrated the civil war in Kiri. And the 7 tails has disappeared with no trace. I say Konoha took the 7 tails. Oonoki growled and smashed his fist on the solid table, trying to compensate for their lost Jinchuriki. I refute that claim. What purpose would Konoha gain from taking another tailed beast? Tsunade replied coolly with a delicately raised eyebrow. It was the Kyuubi that made you strong. Do you deny that? The old man yelled and Mifune cut in before the female Sanin could reply. Enough. Senseless arguments would get us nowhere. You are calling my claims senseless? The dust release user asked lowly, as if he was trying to understand how anyone in the room would call him senseless. The samurai remained unintimidated. Yes, because as far as I know the Nine Tails is not anti-Konoha. He killed 2 of this organization's ninjas, Kakuzu and Hidan, and he has chosen to keep his Kitsugami drug company active in Konoha. He turned to Tsunade, or am I wrong? She shook her head. No. Do you know where this boy is? Mifune asked. Since he can kill 2, then he can kill more of them. The woman shook her head. We don't need the Kyuubi brat to kill those S rank. I have ninjas in my ranks that are capable of destroying them, I said, and his guards, Samui and Daru, silently agreed. If I may, Gaara piped up and drew their attention. I'm in regular correspondence with Naruto-san and he has made it known to me that he will not actively seek out this organization. And there's your answer. The brat is too afraid to fight them. I bet he barely won against Kakuzu and Hidan, Oonoki grumbled. On the contrary, my sister, Aoki-chan, works for him and I have no doubt she participated in their deaths, Mifune said stoically. I need not emphasize what she is capable of. But I digress. We need to form a united front and end this threat before it gets out of hand. We don't know why that organization is gathering all those tailed beasts, but I am sure that their intentions are not peaceful. And you're right, old man, a deep voice intoned from the far end of the room on another table, away from the cages assembled at the other side. Our intentions are not peaceful. A vortex of air swirled on the spot the voice had come from, and a man wearing an orange mask styled in a spiral so as to emphasize his loan for which the Kamui had come from appeared before them, sitting laxly on the table. His black cloak with red clouds symbolized who he was, and the cages all abruptly got their feet, ready for a fight. All his plans had already been set in motion, all his pawns had been influenced and were geared to fight, and all he had to do was light the match that would set the world ablaze. The air was taut with tension, and this tension thickened as Obito Uchi had declared war on the elemental nations. Oh. It had taken the duo a full day of effort, shadow clones and spider/snake summons to get their temporary home ready, but they were finally done. The walls of the cave were now smoothed down and were painted red and gray, to give the place a sort of warmth, and the rocks the tiny spiders ate were spat back out as a sort of liquid rock so that they would form separate rooms, a main laboratory, 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen and a bathroom with a complex drainage system that made us of the mountain slope to lead the water down into the ground at the base of the mountain, a store room, and finally a large laboratory suited up with all of his equipment and chemicals. The interior had been painted red and gray, mostly to give the feeling of warmth. He had set up a generator outside the cave, protected by a small steel house augmented by seals to withstand the cold and the wind, to provide electricity in the cave, which at this point didn't look like a cave or feel like a cave, especially with the wooden boards they set up to cover the wide open mouth of the cave, also supporting it with seals. Naruto had taken the liberty of using a seal he called atmospheric support seal, which basically circled around the mountain, specifically the area the cave was located, and ensured replicated the effect of the atmosphere on ground level. Besides the warmth, it mostly made the place livable without Naruto's gas masks. The seal could run infinitely because it was powered by nature chakra, which could be found anywhere if the person looked well enough. There was level ground for a few yards in front of the mouth of the cave, giving both of them space to exercise. It was their home for now. The problem was that to get down the mountain they had to make use of summons, and Aoki-chan had to wear a mask until they got to the base of the mountain. It was a sacrifice they had to make. The top of the mountain was a secured location. No sane person would want to climb that high, and it was private, exactly what Naruto wanted and what he was used to. The blonde scientist stood at the top of the mountain with his black-haired Ronin friend beside him, admiring their home from outside. He was wearing a red and gray hoodie with a black short-sleeved shirt underneath and black ninja pants. He had bandages wrapped around his ankles, leading into his black shinobi sandals. While his partner wore a white hoodie with the symbol for the Spider Clan stitched onto her right upper arm, her pants were equally white as well as her sandals. She also had her sword strapped to her side and her bow and arrow across her torso. The duo weren't yet back to speaking comfortably with each other, but they weren't outrightly ignoring each other. Naruto was trying his best to get her back to her comfort zone around him. The boy didn't have a sheath for his grass cutter blade, so he chose to leave it in his backpack, which was on his back. He sent the girl a small smile as he sat down at the edge of the mountain, just close to the seal's protection, and she followed suit, and they both watched the sunset. The next day came slowly and Naruto leapt out of his bed, perky and eager to get the day started. It was 4 in the morning and he sat down on his desk, clean as a whistle, and sent out several letters to his branch warehouses with his spider and snake summons, as well as to the brothel in Konoha, thanking them for their services and sealing in several thousands of ryu as their payment. He needed to summon a few shadow clones to get the writing done, and he needed to summon a few more to begin their research into breaking the barriers of the universe. Aoki-chan woke up at 6 in the morning sharp. mainly because she did her regular night rounds to watch their new home before leaving it for a snake summon. Groggily, she greeted her superior before she too went to the bathroom to freshen up. When she came out, Naruto gave her the task of familiarizing herself with the environment and its occupants, in Yomasaki Market Town, saying that it wouldn't do if they didn't at least try to know their new neighbors. Deep down Aoki-chan knew that although it seemed like he didn't want her around him, he just didn't want her to be idle. Just like how they went about their business in Konoha, she would work not just as his bodyguard but as his spokesperson as well. Although Aoki-chan was closely affiliated to Naruto, she didn't want to sign her name on the spider summoning scroll, saying that she had lasted long enough without the summons and she would last longer without them, so Naruto had to summon a large snake to take her down the mountain to the market town. The state of things at the base of the mountain was deplorable. Houses were falling apart, the market was an eyesore and the people were ill prepared for the cold their region of the country was in, seeing as even though the former daimyo of the country, Doden, had been overthrown by his niece, Koyuki Kazahana, the new daimyo changed Snow Country to Spring Country, destroying the machine that made the country as cold as it was named, though this didn't affect all of the country because the country bordered frigid country. Yomasaki Market Town was bordering frigid country, so it didn't enjoy the privileges of the change of government. Aoki-chan was renowned across the continent as the broken child and the dark angel of the five elements, so she had already been seen as a ruthless person not to be messed with, and this was further reinforced by her battle style. Few knew her as kind, this included her boss, her adopted brother and a few of the people in Iron Country, and seeing the deplorable lives the people were living and how they each went out of their way to welcome her touched something in her. These people had been forgotten by the world because they were not able to keep up with its fast-paced and ever-developing nature, mostly because their government had forgotten them first. They were all poor but they lived and worked as a family, sharing what they had and could, even though there weren't that many customers that patronized their market. The Dark Angel felt obligated to help them and she immediately rushed back up the mountain with the large snake, much to the wonder of the people, and dragged Naruto down. It was a day of surprise for the people of Yomasaki. They were being treated to many firsts in just one day. The first time they had seen a samurai, the first time they had seen a ninja that wasn't trying to steal from them, the first time they had seen a snake that size, the first time they had seen a teenager with a mouthful of serrated teeth, which he wasn't afraid to flash, the first time they had met someone that freely gave them money with the only condition being they shouldn't tell anyone they were living there, and many more firsts. The snow that almost constantly fell around Yomasaki was harsh and, from Aoki-chan's prodding, Naruto summoned spiders, each one bearing clothes they had crafted and shared it to the multitude. The sheer quality of the clothing had them question whether or not it was Kami that had come to aid them. The reason Naruto was being so out of character was because when Aoki-chan had slammed back into their new home, out of breath and desperate for his attention, and dragged him all the way down the mountain, on a summons of course, he listened to her rant. From what he could deduce from her rush of words, she really wanted to help the people of Yomasaki, and he had already opened up to her that making her happy was his top priority. It was hard to believe, seeing as he was considered bloodthirsty and selfish, but he had learnt to just accept those feelings instead of allowing them to kill him. Though he did need a lot of convincing to do it. "Boss, just look at them, they need help," the samurai implored and motioned at them. Naruto looked over them with unconvinced and dull eyes. "It isn't our jobs to help them, leave it to their government," he said with a flippant wave and was about to ascend the mountain again, but the Ronin grabbed his hand and he paused. "You'll gain so much from helping them, think about it," she said and stroked a tender part of his attention masterfully, knowing that he would forever look at the personal gains. The KDC boss rolled his eyes, "And what will I get from helping them?" She thought and hesitantly replied, "A warm feeling in your chest?" Naruto shook his head and patted her head. "I'm sure we'll both survive if I don't get that warm feeling." He said it like he was talking to a toddler and the usual blush spread across her nose from the contact. "What about their support?" she hastily added. "Nearly half of the continent is supporting me, through my company but still me," he replied back. She still refused to let go of his hand. "How about this? If this place is properly set up and run, then a percentage of their profits would go to you." The boy still didn't look convinced, and for good reason too. He had so much money that he didn't care about it. Money from his organization, money his godmother had willed to him, which he was still gathering from all of the different banks she deposited them in, money he got as goodwill from countries he set up KDC warehouses in, and the money he made in Konoha from all his other dirty deals. He could easily buy the most expensive but sophisticated equipment and weapons, such as his silver Senbone launchers, the launcher's curved black stealth guards, and Aoki-chan's bow and arrows. Not forgetting the fact that he didn't need to buy clothes because his primary summons, the Spider Clan, was able to create any kind of cloth with any texture that was of excellent quality. He needed to set apart approximately 10 billion ryu to pay all of his workers across the continent, which included the guards as well and the bonuses for stellar work. This also included the fact that he was in close contact with all of his branch so that he was aware of what was in desperate need there, whether it was a broken door knob to more mosquito repellent for those in his tropical branches. This was all mostly through a trusted foreman in charge of all the warehouse's productivity and sales, who constantly traveled around, with his family or not, to keep an eye on the branches. Everyone was happy and loyal as long as they kept getting their monthly wages. Needless to say, Uzumaki Naruto was not in dire need for money. The black-haired girl continued, "It would boost your reputation as a person that can make a town prosper if he gave it a thought." That convinced him. Aoki-chan was unofficially his company's public relations officer. This meant that she helped him deal with delicate matters such as providing support to countries and villages so as to boost the KDC's image and further their goals of making it an international franchise. Left to him, his first instinct would be to kill any aggressor that went against his business, and this was what he would have done to Konoha if the samurai had not stepped in before him and withdrew his the warehouse branches in Fire Country, to open Konoha's eyes that even though the KDC was illegal they couldn't deny how much they had helped them, and also a warning to the other countries he had branch warehouses in that he wouldn't be partial, seeing as he used his home village as an example to all. Naruto had come to realize that if he wanted a wider customer base he needed to show a little bit of restraint in his heavy-handedness. He wasn't brought up in the most compassionate of environments, so he wasn't used to lending a helping hand just because he could, and he was faced with the reality that people would take any means necessary to destroy him if he did not show that the KDC wasn't all bad. Aoki-chan, though, although brought up in a strict samurai household in a family that valued strength and loyalty, had experienced a large measure of compassion in her life. Baifun might have been a formal man, but he loved all of his children equally, showing them this with various acts of kindness, and she being the only female and performing better than her older brothers, he had lessened his strictness on her and allowed her room to grow on her own. His trust in her was one of the many acts of kindness to her. Her partially well-rounded upbringing was what made Naruto trust a fair portion of control of his business to her, and he mostly trusted her judgment for the most part because she had never disappointed him in anything he set her to do. Whether on a mission or to deal with a problem in a branch, the results she brought back to him were always satisfying. So, once again, he decided to trust her judgment. "Fine, we'll spruce this place up, but we're not helping them sell their stuff," he said, and the girl bowed deeply. "That's all I ask, boss." He ruffled her hair before he turned to the multitude of people eagerly looking at him. "Let's get this place cleaned up." He bent onto the snowy ground and drew a fairly large summoning circle. When he was done he added a drop of his blood on it and a poof of smoke erupted from the seal. 5 white, lion-sized spiders with the kanji for cloth maker drawn on their abdomens marched out of the smoke, each one hefting large sealing scrolls between 2 of their front legs. These spiders laid the scrolls on the ground and unrolled them in tandem, revealing several storage seals drawn neatly on it. Aoki-chan, who couldn't make clones, was the one to hand them the clothes, and the people profusely thanked them, while the spiders looked down at them with bright red eyes, silent as night, watched on in astonishment as their master's servant handed out clothes. Naruto walked past them, through the eager crowd of very appreciative people to the middle of the town, ignoring the people that groveled as he passed them and the older residents that eagerly wanted to shake his hands, but withdrew their hands as he hissed at them. He got to the center of the town and a few people turned to look at him, the others clamoring to get clothes from the giant spiders and the kind teenager. The boy hummed to himself as he examined the layout of the houses and assumed that the houses were built to face each other but leave a wide berth between them for a mass of people to walk through. This space between the houses led further down to 2 iron rods that had been jammed into the ground, probably to symbolize the entrance of the town. Although Naruto had been privileged enough to be able to use all 5 nature transformations from training in all, control his beast's chakra, nature chakra and an array of other things he wasn't able to use would release. So he wasn't able to erect houses out of the ground like he had heard a drunken Kakashi rant about when he was a 6-year-old child posing as a rich adult. Yamato Tenzo was the wood release user's name, and Naruto still hadn't met him. He wasn't able to steal even a fingernail from this Yamato so he could replicate the legendary Kekai Genkai, but he was content with what he could do. The 9-tailed spider held up a half-ram hand seal, multiple shadow clone jutsu. Over 30 identical clones of his were summoned out of numerous plumes of smoke, attracting the eyes of the townspeople, and Naruto commanded them to search for trees. If they found trees they would seal them into storage seals and bring them back. The display for the next 6 hours was proof enough that if Naruto put his mind to something it would result in staggering success, just like with his spider clan. The clones had to travel south of the town to a warmer part of Spring Country known for its vegetation and dense forests, luckily for them, or else they would have been forced to travel even further down. The trees were brought back and the original Naruto summoned even more clones and they began constructions, making them realize that as the clones were searching for trees, Naruto had been busy crafting a blueprint for the houses he wanted to build. It was a basic structure that had 2 spacious bedrooms, 2 bathrooms inside the house, a living room, a fully furnished kitchen, parlor and a front porch facing their neighbors across the street. The added clones, supported by a few snakes to carry the chopped up wood, built the houses. For each completed house the real Naruto drew special reinforcement seals that supported the structure for as long as there was nature chakra in the air. He had been taught this seal by his godmother in Whirlpool Village. They made the wood as strong as steel, able to take a full-on chakra-enhanced punch and still be able to stay on the ground. The effect was like with electricity, part of the strength in the punch was pushed harmlessly into the ground while the rest was deflected back to the attacker. This only worked if the attacker was using chakra, if not it would merely injure the person. Naruto used a tunneling jutsu to create a deep well where clean water could be pumped out. This water was connected to the house via plastic pipes at the backs of the houses, so if they wanted water in their rooms they had to lug it into the house by themselves. He placed sure that the roofs of the house were made out of wood as well that, because of the seal, couldn't rot from rain or exposure to the elements. He crafted 3 wind turbines from wood as well, smoothing it out and painting it red, to provide electricity to the various houses. The last thing he did was form fences to provide the individual houses with privacy. It was exhausting work but he was done. The people of Yomasaki watched as their town was recreated by a total stranger. Gratitude couldn't be expressed with mere words and Naruto tiredly ignored them and slumped onto the ground with his back leaning on the fence of a random house. They flocked around him, noisily thanking him while he rested and replenished his lost chakra. He closed his eyes and channeled the noise out. Aoki-chan ushered the families into their houses, allowing her master to rest, while she personally dealt with the first ever threat to their new home by herself. 6 Konoha missing ninjas that had heard the clamor from a distance and took it as an opportunity to take money from weaker civilians chose to travel to Yomasaki. They were summarily dispatched of by the samurai. 1 week later. The world was indeed on fire. Identical white plant men were attacking villages, usually eating a dead ninja or swallowing small drops of blood from living ninjas and taking his form to further their attacks. The remaining Akatsuki had been paired to reduce the morale of ninjas from the other villages by displaying their full strengths against them. Worldwide, formerly dead ninjas of unbelievable caliber were being brought back and they were added to the ranks of the Akatsuki, each one controlled by a mysterious man who focused their attacks with the aim of finding the 9 tails. Most suspected that the strongest of them was yet to be summoned and this fearful prospect was what united the countries of the continent. Battles had been fought with these undead warrior and they had been mostly lost because the undead were immediately revived, leaving the only other option for the allied ninjas to seal them away. This would have been easier if not for the frequent attacks from the Akatsuki, who had already captured the 7 and 2 tails in one of their many campaigns. The 2 tails had been captured and her beast removed after she had been intercepted on her way to Waterfall by Sasori and Deidara to provide support after hearing of the minor village's trouble with active ninjas. She had been with her team and made the ultimate sacrifice of telling them to retreat while she held the S rank off. The 7 tails had been tracked to be hiding and working in a KDC branch house in Wave Country. The green-haired girl had been working there since the day Waterfall threw her away out of fear that their village would be attacked by the Akatsuki. She had been sighted and summarily captured by the Akatsuki after their civilian spies, or puppets, notified her of her presence. This had happened on the day Naruto had finally been located. Her captors had been the 6 Paths of Pain and Konan. All the nations of the world were afraid that the end was near, the dead were being brought back, white plant clones were impersonating ninjas and killing ranks from within and the countries were losing their frantic fight for survival against legends in the history books and S-rank warriors. Their hope returned when Itachi Uchi had defected from the organization and returned to Konoha, but it was fizzling when they realized his deteriorating health, despite that he was also participating in the war in their side. The only tailed beasts left were the 8 and 9 tails and the former was in the thick of the fight. The latter, even though he was aware that the world was crumbling at the seams, had shown no interest in the war. He spent his days telling stories in houses in front of a large crowd of eager listeners. He was content albeit bored that so far he had no rival in strength. The world could utilize his medicine however they wanted, and this freedom had transformed his products into highly valued commodities, especially because they had been able to bring people out of the hospital faster than their own drugs. The KDC had gone even further underground in their dealing, with each warehouse covered in AAA rank illusions, and the delivery people now strictly used the underground tunnels and railways to move their goods to their intended destination. The owner of the drug empire had assumed that would be enough help to turn the tide of the war. He didn't need to necessarily go out of his way to fight, but he was wrong. He was still desperately needed, not just his drugs or his technology, The nations against the Nine Tails chose to swallow their pride and send out a few of their ninjas to search and retrieve the elusive Jinchuriki to plead with him to help them fight for the world's survival. The Konoha ninjas found him first. But so did Obito and Kisame. And this is where we find ourselves. Flashback end. The hand-to-hand fight between Naruto and Obito was eerily similar to watching a dance. Both of their offensive, counters and defensive moves melded into each other smoothly, creating an opportunity for them to try again but usually resulted in the same thing. It was hauntingly like his battle with Naruto's father, and the end result of that was a Rasengan to the back and weeks of recuperation, and despite his effort of trying to bypass Naruto's blocks, the boy would always see it coming and adjust accordingly, all with an infuriating toothy grin on the boy's face. The Uchiha clashed his forearm against Naruto's and slapped the knee to his stomach back down while driving his own knee towards Naruto's side, but the teen spun away from the attack and slashed his pincers at the limb, which was hastily withdrawn. The Uzumaki cut upwards, forcing the masked man to make himself intangible. This surprised Naruto for a fraction of a second, long enough for Obito to flip backwards and squarely drive his foot under Naruto's chin. The spider summoner grunted and flipped backwards as well, but when he landed he still had the excited grin on his face, a grin that sent shivers down Jiraiya's spine because it was scarily similar to Minato's grin during a fast-paced fight, crazed and bloodthirsty. The Namikaze learned it from his older sister. The blonde eagerly blurred right back to the Uchiha, even before the man had gotten his feet back on the ground, and did something that shocked all the watchers, something that his unpredictability managed to bypass the other fighter's Sharingan. He flickered to Obito, as his toes touched the ground, and punched forward. The man began the motions for slapping the attack away but was surprised to see that he merely slapped the long senbone Naruto was using away, a needle Naruto shot to him to draw most of his attention. He leaned away from the fist that wafted across his mask but not away from the unforgiving elbow Naruto smashed into his face. The cracking sound was horrifying to all the listeners, and the follow-up spinning heel kick to the dazed Uchiha's neck was equally bone-chilling to watch. The orange-masked man careened away but got his right hand under him to flip back to his feet. He faced Naruto and idly dusted his shoulder, showing how much it didn't hurt, but this only got Naruto's eyes even more deranged with battle lust. "How about going all out, stranger? That way I won't feel bad killing you," the blonde called to his opponent, his hands itching to punch the masked stranger. "You're still a brat. A brat that had gotten a taste of powerful chakra and thinks he's invincible. There will be no point fighting you at full strength," Obito answered coolly as his cloak fluttered weakly in the low winds of the town. He held up his right hand and clenched it for Naruto to see. "But I advise you to take me seriously, anything less than your best would be your end." Naruto hummed in thought and scratched his chin before he shook his head negatively. "You're not worth it. I've met grave robbers better than you." This comment obviously touched a small part of Obito, though he remained relatively cool-headed. "Then come and feel the strength of an Uchiha." He opened his hand and motioned Naruto to come at him, "If you dare." The teenage spider summoner cracked his neck and commanded his long senbone to slide back into his launcher, before he flashed back to his opponent, faster than any untrained eye could catch. The blurring fight continued, each driving the other back but still holding back a measure. Obito was not using all of his strength and Naruto was not using Kyuubi's chakra or nature chakra, or the combination, merely his own chakra. Further away from them, the fight between Kisame and Aoki-chan, which on the surface would look like the more experienced swordsman was winning, was in reality the opposite. With each sword clash and each strain for dominance, Kisame noticed something strange, which was made even clearer when the ground beneath his feet began rebelling against him. The Omnio-jin, the all-elemental sword, was a legendary weapon that bestowed its chosen user the control of every element, whether it was from the sword or from the user. Every part of the sword could be used, even its sheath, and stories had been told that if the user had enough control over the sword he was able to command a demon from the underworld to come to his aid, seeing as the sword had been forged in the mountains of Demon Country out of obsidian steel, which was an evil, cursed metal, the hide of a demon dragon, the tears of a saintly fire country monk and the blood sacrifice of the high priest, while the sheath had been made from a demon wolf's hide. It was said that if a person, other than the person the sword chose, touched the sword their souls would be sucked into the sword and used to power it. This also applied to people the swordsman killed, further pushing the idea that the wielder could summon demons at will. Only 2 people in history have been recorded using the sword. The first was a featureless man from Kiriagakure, usually thought to be the home of legendary blades, before the person had willingly handed the blade to the priests of Demon Country. Many years later it had been stolen by a woman who connected the blade with her child by making a blood sacrifice agreement with the god of death for reasons people were unaware of. Aoki-chan didn't know why she had been given the cursed sword, but that fact never stopped her from fully mastering it when she was 13 and about to be named leader of Iron Country. Her sword could indeed use souls to power it if she didn't want to use her own chakra, and she was able to give control of the blade to anyone of her choice, Naruto. Her only hurdle till date being she had to endure the torture of the pitiful moans and whispers of the souls in her sword speaking to her all at once and struggling to get free. Kisame had never fought against an Omniogene user before, so he was almost running in the dark, almost being he had slain plenty of samurai, and he believed that since the Dark Angel was a samurai she would be predictable. He was obviously wrong, first because she used her sheath to fight as well, samurai didn't do that. Second was that she used more elemental attacks than a regular samurai, and the last reason was that she was spending way too much time around Naruto. Although most of the sword's abilities were a mystery to Kisame, mainly because all that went against it weren't alive anymore, one outstanding precaution stood out: don't ever let the blade touch you, even if it's a minor graze. Just like with Seimata. Smoke wafted off the blade and the sounds of torment flitted in the air as she blocked an attack from Kisame. He commanded his sword to suck out the chakra, but it remained unresponsive, seeing as she wasn't using chakra, merely the souls of the slain stored in her blade. He hacked and slashed at her savagely, using his superior strength to push her backwards into a more defensive and desperate position, until they were close to 10 feet from the base of the mountain before she turned on the offensive. She twirled her sheath dexterously and swiped it towards his left leg, but he blocked it easily. She jabbed her weapon at his chest and he was forced to lean away, watching, impressed, as her weapon sliced through his cloak and barely grazed his shirt, though not touching his skin. Aoki-chan followed up with a firm foot planted in his stomach and using that foot as a purchase to run up his torso and smashing her knee into his chin. This was the time Kisame chose to fully unleash his sword. Seimata frilled out dangerously and bent in his grip towards the samurai as she prepared to leap away from him after her last attack. She grit her teeth in effort and his concentration was thrown off when the ground beneath his feet shifted away from the mountain a full foot, allowing her to flip backwards over the sentient sword. The strongest of the 7 swordsmen of the mist commanded his weapon to shorten back to its normal length, but its purple scales remained dangerously frilled. He stood up straight and sharply smirked at the Ronin as she got into a defensive stance, making sure to lick the small trickle of blood that came from his mouth. "You're not half bad for a samurai," she didn't reply, only tightening her stance. "I've always wanted to know what would happen if Seimata broke your sword, but sadly we're just here to cripple you beyond repair." He blinked once and she was in front of him, her blade rising upwards diagonally, but he blocked it swiftly against his own sword. He anticipated her sheath coming into play and summarily used the sole of his right foot to block it. He smirked cockily after this but frowned when the girl's focused expression morphed into a playful one. "Got you." Kisame looked down at his position and realized that his left foot was swallowed up into the ground to his ankle. He then quickly realized another thing: both of his legs were far apart. It was much too late to dodge the pillar of earth that rocketed out of the ground between his legs and solidly struck his groin. His eyes widened in pain, and it was only when his sword took the initiative to extend and surge towards her did he get enough control to break his leg out of the ground. The sentient sword descended on the samurai and she leapt back several times to avoid it, but it dipped and moved in different directions, growing in size and ravenous appetite for her blood and chakra. Sparks flew as her cursed blade deflected the massive purple sword, jumping away when it moved unexpectedly. Meanwhile Kisame was struggling to stand, his groin still hurt. Seimata squealed in accomplishment as he wrapped the Ronin in its elastic handle and brought its full weight down forcefully on her head like a hammer. There was tense silence and the purple sword kept on squeaking and making shrill cries of joy, until it abruptly stopped and a large pillar of earth exploded from the ground and pushed it off, untangling its grayish-white handle enough for any watcher to see Aoki-chan standing in the last place she had been seen, although there were numerous bleeding cuts across her face and her left, sheath-bearing arm. Her blade had been stabbed into the earth and her sheath was crossed over her head while the pillar of earth had risen up behind her to throw the sword off. She slid her sword into its unbreakable sheath, leveled it at her opponent and yelled, "Wind, shot." The black sword holder rocketed off the blade at impossible speeds and Kisame had to hastily command his weapon back to him so he could use it to cross his midsection. The weapon smashed against the sentient sword and the sword master had to apply chakra to his feet so that he wouldn't skid away too much. Obito ducked a swing for his head and nailed Naruto's cheek, drove his knee into the boy's side and headbutted him. Infuriatingly enough, Naruto still got up and charged. This was when the Uchiha noticed a pattern he would never had noticed if he did not have the Sharingan. Naruto was naturally unpredictable, inheriting it from his mother, so he did not have to put any effort in his fighting skills to be unpredictable. This unpredictability was fluid enough to confuse his 3 Tomoe Dujutsu, and with this perk he didn't need to put conscious effort into being unpredictable. Now though, as he hopped away 3 times from a Senbone barrage from the boy's launchers, he noticed something strange. Naruto was being predictable. He could even go as far as saying that he was able to see 3 steps ahead of him. when at the beginning of the fight he was only able to see 1/3 of a second ahead of the blonde. It couldn't have been exhaustion, because as far as he knew Naruto had much more chakra than anyone he had ever met and more stamina than any cage he had faced. The Uchiha couldn't read anything from Naruto's maniacal expression other than his death, so he didn't bother looking too much at it, but he noticed the boy's plan too late. He had been driven to the makeshift gate of the town, under the guise of dodging backwards from Naruto's insistent attacks, and Naruto changed the direction of his attacks to his immediate right and Obito had little option but to follow in his lead since he couldn't let his defense leak for a world-renowned trickster to capitalize on. Abruptly he froze in place, in the position of countering a kick, and a trap seal beneath his glowed with blue, ominous light. His eye widened in horror and Naruto held the half-ram seal. He opened his mouth wide, unhinging his jaws, and the deadly Kusanagi blade shot out. The Uchiha quickly activated his Mangekyo, knowing he wouldn't be able to physically overpower a trap seal that made use of Naruto's dense chakra, and a spinning vortex sucked him in, but not in time for the blade to slice across his upper right arm, deep enough to graze the bone, before it impaled the ground. Naruto stayed where he was, after fixing his jaw, and made sure that the attacker had truly gone before he walked to his sword, handed down to him by its former user, Orochimaru of the Sannin, and he pushed it into the backpack on his back like a regular sword user would sheath his sword, and the blade disappeared like the bag had enough space in it. Meanwhile, Kisame and Aoki-chan were frantically attacking each other, each spark of contact rained down and every limb that reached to attack the other was countered. The older sword man's clothes had seen better days, with cuts littering its surface and even his whole left sleeve gone. Neither of them wanted to admit defeat, so they kept slashing and slicing until he felt a bloody hand on his shoulder. "We have what we need, let's go," the voice sounded pained. He was then dragged into the kamui. The samurai stood rigidly for a few seconds before she straightened up and smoothly sheathed her blade. Naruto walked to her and stopped as he was about to pass her. He frowned at the cuts on his face and she could see his fists tighten. On the surface he looked like he was staring at the sunset, deadpan, but inside he was enraged that her opponent had gotten her in her present state, blood on her face and left arm from numerous cuts. Her coat sleeves had jagged slashes perforating it, exposing some of her smooth tan skin. Skin Naruto did not want any other living creature to see, besides him. The primal part of him wanted to track Kisame down and make a coat out of his skin, but the sensible part of him just barely wrangled him back in control after she sent him a knowing look, even lifting a corner of her lips slyly, a silent challenge he would address when everything had been settled for the day and they were in the privacy of their cave. He opened his right fist and a single blue pill was in the middle of his palm. "Take this." She immediately swallowed it and sighed as the cuts on her face and arm began knitting back together. "Though there was still blood, go and get cleaned up, I'll deal with our other guests." He raised a single finger for her to be quiet, and the quick motion and the fact that he was still technically her boss had her snap her lips shut. "Come back when you're done." She bowed quickly and stomped to the mountain. She looked up hesitantly at the height of the mountain before she looked at Naruto pleadingly. He slowly smiled at her, realizing what the problem was. "Is there a problem?" She closed her eyes tightly and her fists tightened. He watched on in amusement as 2 minutes passed of her tightly closing her lips. "Please," she shouted and he laughed under his breath as he summoned a spider to take her up to their cave home. She climbed onto it and patted the spider. The creature raced up the steep mountain to their temporary home. The boy didn't look or feel winded for his long drawn-out fight against the Uchiha, so he leisurely walked to the town's entrance with his hands lazily behind his head, and waited for the Konoha ninjas to make an appearance. The ninjas walked out of their hiding place of a large rock a mile away from Yomosaki town. Although Naruto could sense he couldn't discern who was who unless he made use of his second or third pair of eyes, or second nose, the dots on his forehead and nose, and that would be a waste of chakra. Basically, anyone he couldn't sense monumental chakra from he would never take seriously. Obito Uchiha, though had a large well of chakra, didn't have the capacity large enough to interest Naruto. So, he was surprised at who Konoha had sent to capture him, seeing as that was the only reason he thought they were here in the first place. Those he had met were now different, those he had not were piquing his interest enough to look over. Kakashi looked like he had seen better days. His uniform was rugged, though clean enough. He had bandages wrapped tightly around his left arm, from fingers to shoulder, and all round tired. Even though Sasuke was looking at him with a straight face, Naruto could see the war of words he wanted to unleash on him. The Uchiha also looked tired but all the more eager to return to wherever he had come from. He had on a jounin flak jacket. Sakura looked down when his eyes clashed with hers. A tinge of red crept up her neck and covered her cheeks. She was in a chunin flak jacket, prompting Naruto to nod in acknowledgement that she had at least bettered herself. Sai was still Sai with his fake smile in place and masterfully hiding his exhaustion he felt. He wore a jounin flak jacket. He skipped over analyzing Jiraiya, not caring what he went through, to the person he assumed was called Yamato. He deduced this because he could sense a perfect mixture of water and earth affinity chakra in him, an awfully large store of it. The man, whose large iris made the spider summoner a little bit uncomfortable, sent the boy an appreciative smile, for what he was yet to find out. Jiraiya took the initiative to speak first. Your godmother really taught you well, kid. She's a perfectionist, Naruto replied simply with a shrug. He crossed his arm and subtly began to prepare his chakra to defend him if the ninjas chose to attack, but curious enough he could not even see the minute signs that their muscles were geared to attack. Quite frankly, their hands were at their sides and their shoulders sagged. What is going on? You just did what no one else could do and you were still holding back. Kakashi spoke above what Jiraiya had to say. The Sannin was clearly floored by Naruto's response. You critically injured Madara Uchiha. Naruto didn't make use of his extra eyes and nose to fight, not even using more than 3 jutsu, and they were just the trap seal, the Senbone barrage, and summoning the Kusanagi from his mouth. He didn't want to take me seriously, so I didn't take him seriously. He got what happens when I'm toyed with. And I'm sure you people would know that isn't Uchiha Madara? They nodded and boy shifted on his feet, looking at each person again. Now why are you people here? There was a war of emotions broiling on their faces. Naruto-kun. Sakura muttered, still looking at his feet but more out of admission that he was past your skills. We need your help. This time it was the blonde scientist that was floored. Of all the times Konoha ninjas had come to retrieve him, the reasons had all been the same: for him to face justice or to collect his bounty. Tsunade had changed his A-rank entry to an S-rank flea on sight so that he would be left alone, but people from her village still went behind her back to take him on. He was aware of the war burning a path of destruction through the continent, and he assumed that his personal help wouldn't be needed because he had left a few of his warehouses still fully manned and operational just for the countries. His products were revolutionary, able to heal a severe cut to the stomach in mere hours or provide a new limb to an amputee, and with said limb being easy to use. He was positive that they wouldn't need his help. He was the outcast, the brat, the demon. From birth he had been predestined to be the one they hated, the one who was meant to suffer. Why would they need his help? Why? He asked. Yamato coughed into his fist and said, we are losing this war. There are too many casualties that even your drugs cannot fully heal. The enemy has outnumbered us and our morale is low. A few of the soldiers have even walked to their deaths, unarmed. Why do you need my help? Naruto repeated with a sharp frown. What can I do that none of the other shinobi cannot? No one wanted to speak, but, surprising enough, it was Sasuke that continued, everything. You can do everything. Naruto cocked his head to the side in confusion and Sasuke kept speaking. Your skills are well-rounded and you're a master of many things. Most people cannot be scientists and masters of taijutsu or ninjutsu and fuinjutsu masters at the same time. It is either one, but you. He had to swallow his pride to admit this, are a master of all. Not all. I can't perform genjutsu. But they don't need to know that. The blonde blissfully thought, so you believe that if I participate in this war I would make a difference? Yes, Kakashi spoke, but Naruto held his hand up for him to stop and pointed at Jiraiya. No, I want him to say it. The toad sage screwed his lips to the side in distaste and Naruto clenched his teeth, trying to maintain a straight face. The sage abruptly bowed his head and said, yes, Naruto, you would make a big difference in the war. From the admission Naruto felt another weight on his chest lift off him. His godmother had told him of stories of when Kushina was still pregnant. The busy snake summoner would take at least 30 minutes of her time to visit the Uzumaki and at least get on good terms with her before he was born. Kushina and Orochimaru might not have liked each other, even borderline hated each other, but what they had in common was Minato, whom the Sannin was gradually distancing herself from. Throughout her pregnancy, Jiraiya had been out of the village. She took the liberty of sending him messages and telling him her plans to take care of their godchild, but the letters he sent back was what made the woman hate the toad sage. She even showed him the letters he sent to her, each one clearly outlining the fact that he didn't care what happened to the child. That he will be nothing if not for his sole guidance. Naruto never had faith on his godfather, but it still chipped off a part of his heart to read that the man didn't care what happened to him, as long as he was part of his future. Needless to say that his whole life had been proof enough that Naruto didn't need Jiraiya's help. Naruto controlled his smile and said, then I will gladly help you, but only because of 2 reasons. He raised a finger. Because my friend and I also live on this planet. If it's destroyed then we will have nowhere else to go. He added a second finger, and because it'll be fun. Yamato hastily said, and no holding back. Naruto made a flippant hand gesture at him, let me worry about that. He then rubbed his hands together in anticipation. Now where do I start? Kakashi nudged Sakura forward and she blushed under Naruto's curious gaze. There are these plant-like men that are giving us trouble. We don't know their weakness. Naruto motioned for her to continue as he began trekking to the mountain. The others followed him. We know that when they take a blood sample of a living or dead shinobi, they are able to take their form and infiltrate our ranks. The only way we are to know that they are posing as a comrade is that they had a zigzag-like marking going down from their chest to their pelvis. Even the eyes don't change? The scientist asked, intrigued by the creature's ability. No, they seem to be able to place a chakra-less illusion over them, the star medic of the team continued. What are their key components? Naruto summoned 4 spiders and they began their ascent upwards. They met up with Aoki-chan and she turned around. The Konoha ninjas each got out slightly older versions of oxygen masks that Anbu use. White fiber skin, a greenish sap in their chest cavity that is imbued with nature chakra, and our sensors say that there is another chakra signature on them, that this chakra comes off as watered down and weak from age. The pink-haired medic was on the same spider as Naruto, but she still had to yell over the high-speed winds blowing around that. Naruto hummed and nodded. I'm under the assumption that you have a sample readily available on you. Yes, we recovered a whole plant body from a battle in Waterfall. You did? How have you been able to kill it so far? Knife to the heart, but that alone is incredibly difficult because they can heal themselves and stand up again. We need to make the wound deep and large so that most of the sap would leak out, Sai yelled to Naruto. He had been feeling left out of the conversation. Naruto looked at Sakura and she nodded to confirm what she said. He looked back up the mountain as his spider scampered to the cave. I think I know how to kill these things from a distance, but I need to get that sample to my lab and analyze it to confirm. His Ronin friend waved for his attention and he mentally commanded the spider she was on to approach his speeding stead, both racing side by side. Someone broke into the lab, sir, she discreetly signed to him and his eyebrows shot up in surprise and she nodded before hesitating for a few seconds. They took your godmother's DNA. They did what? He didn't even wait for the spiders to slow down in front of the cave before he jumped off, slapped his palm on the door and pushed it open. The lab looked unchanged, but he knew better. He ran to his desk and saw that documents he stored on it had been pushed off to the ground, scattered everywhere. His shaking hands ran over the surface of the table and ever so slowly a fractured storage seal that spanned over the whole table opened up. Fractured because it had been forced open by a counter seal greater than level 6. Nothing was unsealed since it was empty. Among the many things Orochimaru wanted him to do on the event of her death was to find a cure for her unique heart cancer. He was just about to get to it until the Konoha ninjas came. It was the only physical sample on the planet because the body he had buried had been burnt to ash, again at her request. He fell on one knee and closed his eyes forcefully, trying to force the tears that wanted to come out to stop. The Konoha ninjas looked at him, not knowing what happened, and Aoki-chan hastily walked to him and blocked him from view with her new attire, a long white coat that reached her midcalf. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and his head snapped to her, fire spinning in his vulpine eyes that were hidden under his black goggles. She handed him a small handheld device with a glass screen and her thumb tapped the center so the surveillance video would begin playing. A spinning vortex similar to the one he saw the Uchiha use to escape appeared inside the cave, just behind the door. The man stumbled and fell on his knees, visibly in pain from the slice wound through his right arm that cut clean through it enough to chip into his bone. He stayed on his knees, panting for air and clasping the profusely bleeding wound with his other hand. The man cursed under his breath and looked up from his kneeling position at the pristine lab. Besides the spurts of blood that pumped out of his arm and pooled at his feet, the toxins laced in the blade were destroying him. He grumbled, his voice sounding gurgled, and his Sharingan. I looked around for a source of chakra that wasn't nature, Naruto's, Aoki-chan's or Kyuubi's. There were storage seals all around the lab and only 2 in each room, as far as his eyes could see from his hunched position, but the one that stood out was the one located on the desk. He struggled to his feet, grunting with each steady step, and stopped by the desk. He suppressed the pain the toxins were putting him through to draw a counter seal for the storage seal with his blood. There was an audible crack in the glass cylinder that stored flax of the dead Sanin's skin. He swiped the sample and stuffed it into his cloak before he Kamui teleported out of the lab. Naruto pushed the video device away and took his female friends had to stand up. He looked over his shoulder at his Konoha shinobi guests with a sinister smirk. It seems I do have a reason to go all out. Oh. Are you aware that he will kill you for doing this? Orochimaru the Snake Sanin said with an amused smirk to the one-armed Obito Uchiha and her former apprentice, Yakashi Kabuto. She looked disapprovingly at the latter. I'm very disappointed in you, Kabuto-kun. The Sanin honestly felt great, she was not in any pain. The pale woman looked around at the location she had been revived and saw that it was a cave with the walls smoothened out so that they all curved at touched at the top. Around her were hundreds of closed caskets, but from the ones that were open she was able to recognize three legendary figures: Hashirama Senju, Mew of the Dust Release, and Uchiha Madara. The real Uchiha Madara. He had his arms closed and his awe-inspiring three Tomoe Sharingan looked down on her. She wasn't able to move, a sign that her apprentice had perfected the impure world resurrection jutsu and was simply keeping them rigid with his mind. With a heavy mind she realized that the war her former organization, the Akatsuki, wanted to start had already started the war. Though one thing made her yellow eyes brighten. "None of you stand a chance against my Naruto-chan," she growled under her breath and flashed a bright grin at the one-armed Uchiha. "I take it he did that to you," she tutted lowly, "to shame him. Can you even imagine what else he can do if he puts in a little effort?" She didn't know he had recreated an entire town in 6 hours, but that was a point proven. "You all are dead men walking. When he finds out I was brought back." "Shut up," Madara intoned, his voice bounced around the large subterranean room. The snake woman opened her mouth to curse at the Uchiha, but Kabuto mentally forced her mouth shut. She turned to him and spat venom through her eyes. The snake boy recoiled a little. "Get on with the plan, Obito." Even though he couldn't move, his presence was still felt, and it only seemed Hashirama wasn't affected. The wood release user looked at the man from the corner of his eyes, seeing as he couldn't turn his head to look at him. "What plan?" The reptilian teen looked away from her to his partner Obito. "Yes, what plan?" "Tell her to summon the Uzumaki king of the underworld mask." "Why?" The one-armed Uchiha glared at the medic, and he clearly got the message. He nodded to his former sensei-turned-undead puppet, and she rigidly weaved through 100 hand seals, struggling with all her might to slow her hands down, but Kabuto had full control of her, merely with an idle thought, and she finished the set of seals by clapping her hands together and interlacing them, summoning jutsu, Uzumaki king of the underworld mask. A thick crack broke a foot in front of her and it widened. Out of the crack rose multiple skeleton hands, each one supporting a corner of an average-sized mask that bore the seal of the Underworld King on its forehead. It was designed in a way that it had ringed eyes of a raccoon and fangs of a vampire, pale white as the moon. The Sannin ripped the mask from the skeleton's hands and they returned to the underworld. She shakily handed it to her former apprentice. There was a reason the Uzumaki were so feared, not only because of their chakra, or their battle lust, or their kenjutsu skills. They were feared because of their fuinjutsu skills. They were among the oldest clan in history, and it shouldn't come as a surprise that they were able to use seals to tap into the realm of the undead. The Uzumaki king of the underworld mask was created to temporarily revive dead comrades to return to battle, but the power of the mask soon took over its user and corrupted him. He had to be put down before he could do something evil, and the mask had been stored, not in Uzushio, but deep under the marshes of swamp country. Orochimaru had stolen the mask in the hopes of using it to bring back her baby brother, Minato, so that she could at least apologize to him. But the day she found it was also the day she had gotten news of Naruto's existence. She dropped everything she was doing, her life and her duties, to take care of her godchild for as long as she could, forgetting about the mask. Until today. The sacrifice needed to flawlessly use the mask was of a person who had frequently escaped death, or a person the king of hell would gratefully snag. Obito took the mask from Kabuto, and that was when pain, specifically the Asura path, made his appearance, dragging the limp body of Shimura Danzo. The man had made the mistake of sending his root ninjas to him in order to make a deal, Danzo's Sharingan, for safety during the war. The old war hawk actually believed that Obito had one eye because he couldn't get a replacement. The Uchiha clearly didn't want to make any deals and effortlessly destroyed Root, sparing Danzo so that he would serve a purpose, which was to be the sacrifice to bring Madara back to life. The one-armed Uchiha, who was one-armed because he had cut off his poisoned arm before the poison spread to his heart, put on the mask. Pain held Danzo up so that he could face Madara, and the ancient Uchiha wore an evil smirk of victory as his disciple pointed his index and middle finger at Danzo. The color on his skin began to drain, and swiped it to his master. There was a visible vortex of translucent white that passed from Danzo into him, for about 5 minutes before it stopped, with Danzo being nothing but a pile of bones. The mask crumbled from Obito's face, and every living member in the room took a cautious step back as Uchiha Madara walked forward. The revived man slowly looked at his one-armed disciple, then to the frantic reptilian teen that formerly had control of him, then to the path that represented Nagato. He smirked at the latter. His power rolled off him in dangerous waves, enough to make the erect coffins around them to creak away from him. His bone-chilling eyes not hiding his intention for the world as the still Tomoe analyzed each resurrected coffin, not even needing to open them. He began walking through the sea of standing caskets to the exit, situated under the Valley of End, and said, "We attack Konoha first, after which we begin phase 2 of my plan. No one would stand in my way." Orochimaru closed her eyes. "Good luck, Naruto." Alright guys, that's it for the video. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. As always, the rest of the story is already out over on Patreon, link to that will be in the description. Anyways, until next time, peace.